Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. There is also a link in the description to my Patreon. It has Naruto fanfiction that cannot be posted on YouTube. There is some free content on there. So, you don't have to be a paying member to enjoy listening to excellent fanfiction.
Chapter Raisin Gaiden, The Rise and Fall of a Hero. This is a story of great tragedy, the tale of a broken man. A man who once fought for a great ideal, a world where the strong protected the weak, rather than dictate their fates. This is the story of how a great hero fell to darkness. This is Raisin's tale. It was an ominous landscape that held the Jinchuriki clan compound. Little plant life to be found wherever you looked, and multiple cliffs and canyons around, casting dark shadows over the land, offering much natural protection for the many buildings within the confines, housing the powerful clan, and only one relatively close forest. Within, Kokatsu Jinchuriki sat regally on his throne, the throne of the Jinchuriki clan head. He awaited news from his field general, Damien, who had left in the past month in order to commence a siege upon the Rakuto clan, one of the few clans that had the power to oppose them, due to many of their members possessing the Rinnegan. In fact, with a preemptive strike against their greatest rivals, the Jinchuriki would then be able to begin its campaigns to subjugate the Elder Dimension as a whole, clan after clan, should the assault have succeeded, and word came that Damien had returned. Sure enough, the doors of the Great Hall were thrown open, and Damien walked through. It was a bitter struggle, Kokatsu-sama, Damien said as he strode forward, wasting no time with his report. But in the end, our superior numbers and the element of surprise won out. The back of the Rakuto clan is broken, their head and council slain. He stopped before Kokatsu and finished. Even as we speak, my men are hunting down the survivors. The Rinnegan bearers will be killed off by the end of the week. Excellent, Kokatsu stated in a pleased tone. I expected no less from my right-hand man. I trust we still have a reasonable force to work with? The smile on Damien's face died a little. As I said, my lord, it was in fact a bitter struggle. Half of our forces were cut down in the struggle, despite every advantage we seized. No matter. We expected that much from the Rakuto clan. Indeed, I am relieved that we do still have half our original forces. That's more than enough to take on most of the lesser clans and still come out strong. And we do have a promising new generation of knights upcoming to replenish the ranks soon. Damien, your son in particular. He is indeed a genius of the highest caliber. He's already increased the amount of black holes he can create and control by another one while you were out on your job. Truly? Damien asked in some surprise. 9 Burakuru. At the age of 6, he already shattered all records when he reached 8 of them. That boy is a true prodigy, Kokatsu chortled. He'll go far in the future, though I have to say, your daughter Sarka was quite livid to see it. I doubt his firstborn, she likes being upstaged. Mind you, she is still stronger than him, but that can be attributed to a 7-year age difference more than anything else. Indeed. I suppose I should go congratulate him, Damien said, heading off. If you'll excuse me. Please. No more. Ah, poor baby brother. Are you going to cry now? Sarka asked as she lifted her foot and began stomping. Upstar brat, you are not going to take my future position from me. I won't allow it. I'll kill you first, and no one will question it if your body is never found. All I have to do, she created a black hole in the palm of her hand, is suck every trace of you into this, and say that you accidentally sucked yourself into one of your own. No one will ever suspect anything different. You are young after all, so mistakes like that would no doubt be dime a dozen. No. Please. I am begging. You. Raisin said. Bye, baby brother, Sarka said as she drew her hand with the sucking void back, about to strike. Sarka. Damien's voice shouted from the entrance of the training hall, causing the woman to freeze in her tracks. Father, you're back. How was your campaign? We defeated the Rinnegan bearers, and we'll be just going after the scraps of the clan soon enough. But do not change the subject. What the hell do you think you were doing? Well, I was just having a little training with Raisin here, and I got a little carried away, Sarka said, trying to cover her tracks. Before she could blink, Damien closed the distance between them and grabbed her neck, lifting her up as she kicked uselessly. Care to tell me that again? And be honest this time? Damien said as he slammed his daughter against the wall. It was as clear as day that you were trying to kill your own brother. I heard every word, every threat you gave him. While I understand your envy of his natural talent, it should simply be motivation to push yourself, rather than sabotaging the clan by removing a prodigy, simply because you feel threatened. You're aware of the penalty for killing a clan member is, or attempting to. Do you not? Father. Please. Damien dropped Sarka, who massaged her neck and took in greedy gasps of air. You are very fortunate that you are my daughter despite this transgression, and that the clan is going to be a little short-handed for a while. If that was not the case, I would kill you for this crime. Do not make me regret not reporting this. In a word of warning, now that I know that you wish to kill Raisin, if there are any circumstances where he is harmed, I will immediately assume that you are responsible in some way, even if you have an alibi. If that occurs, I will tell the elders and our head about your transgression, and you will be put to death. So now it is in your best interest to ensure that Raisin reaches his full potential and lives long enough to do so. Am I understood? Sarka nodded. Good. Now, take your brother to the infirmary. I will tell them that you simply had a fight that got out of control, Damien said as he left the training room. As soon as Sarka was sure that he was out of earshot, she grabbed the injured boy by his hair and raised him to eye level. Father may have saved your hide this time, but remember this moment where you were powerless to defend yourself against me. That will always be your level compared to me. Do not get uppity whenever you think you're getting stronger, because I will take 2 steps for every one you take, and if you ever try to challenge me for my birthright, you will only end up in this position all over again. You will never lose your inferiority. With that, she slung Raisin over her shoulder and reluctantly headed for the medical bay. About a year passed, and Raisin's fear of his sister had not faded in the slightest during that time. The image of helplessness in his eyes reflected in the floor was always fresh in his mind. But now was not the time to dwell on the fear he suffered. He and the rest of the clan forces were gathered to wipe out the clan that used flash style, a bloodline combining fire and lighting styles, creating very bright and intense flashes of energy that disintegrated almost anything it came in contact with. Dangerous, but far from unmanageable for a Jinchukui Atsuri. The clan was still a faction that resisted the despotic rule the Jinchukui Atsuri were quickly establishing in the Elder Dimension. Raisin and Sarka had been brought to the front lines despite their younger ages to fill in the ranks, and due to their talent. Naturally, they served directly under their father. All right, everyone, it is going to be just like the Rakudo clan, except in this case, we can expect less opposition. These fools don't compare to us, Damien said. We'll strike with the element of surprise on our side, just to minimize casualties on our side, and give our enemies less time to have some of them escape from the compound. Remember, this time, we're the ones being outnumbered in this fight. The clan might be weak, but they have some numbers on their side in this case. Raisin, and everyone else there nodded. There is absolutely no trepidation in any of them, not even the 7-year-old Raisin. All members of the clan were conditioned from birth to believe that the Jinchukui Atsuri clan were the master race, and everyone else barely even qualified as human. Therefore, their lives were of no consequence. None whatsoever. Damien signaled the attack, and Raisin rushed forward with the rest of the clan. He drew a gladius formed with the Jinchukui Atsuri forging methods. He couldn't use the claymores made like that yet, but the gladius was still a plenty deadly weapon in his hands. He wasn't wearing full plate yet either, instead wearing chainmail. Still, it would be plenty for him. He approached the wall of the compound and noted a blast of flash style heading his way. It went off, seemingly in his face, only to suddenly shrink in itself, and into a Burakuru Raisin had formed. The Flash Style clan member froze in fear on top of the wall as he saw the most feared jutsu of the Jinchukui Atsuri in play, in the hands of what he thought would be an easy target. He tried to flee, but Raisin sent the Burakuru at him, and it got close enough to pull him right back, and he gave a last scream that wasn't even heard as the air he screamed into was sucked into the crushing void, and he himself was pulled in, his body crumpling in on itself as a result of being pulled inside the jutsu. The Burakuru then slammed down into the wall, sucking a good chunk up, and allowing Raisin to enter the compound grounds unobstructed. Several arrows and other projectiles flew at him from several angles, and he hastily formed 5 more Burakurus to suck in the attacks before they could hit. However, it turned out to be a diversion as a hidden member of the clan leapt out of hiding with a sledgehammer and smashed it into the side of Raisin's head while he was focused on his defensive use of his jutsu. Raisin went down, blood flying out of the side of his head, only to disappear into smoke. What? A solid clone jutsu? The man with the hammer demanded in shock. Yep, Raisin said from behind him and impaled him from said angle. The man slumped instantly. Raisin looked up as the man's body hit the ground and saw several more flash-style attacks headed his way, and he quickly diverted the Burakurus into their path, setting the jutsus off to be sucked in. And then another knight, fist-clad in flash-style chakra, burst out of the ground in front of Raisin. Shit, the young boy shouted, his silver eyes widening as he tried to leap back and form another Burakuru. He was just an instant too late, and the chakra left the knight's hand, blasting at Raisin and impacting his abdomen. Choking up blood, Raisin flew back and crashed into the wall. The group of Flash-style users watched in trepidation. We got him right? One of them asked. I think so. He wasn't in full armor, so that should have been a fatal hit. The one who dealt the blow replied hopefully. That fucking hurt, you bastards, Raisin growled, getting up while assessing the damage he'd suffered. His chainmail jerkin was absolutely ruined despite the sturdy forging techniques, but had taken the brunt of the damage at least. Plus, he'd leapt back enough to avoid the dead center of the blast, so he was hurt. His entire front torso burned pretty bad, but it wasn't fatal. The enemy wasted no more time talking and rushed him. He rushed as well, forming several fresh Byakuru as he went, and tore into them with the manipulations of the jutsu, and his blade, occasionally tripping one of them up by making them heavier with gravity manipulation. Soon, all but one had been killed, and that one was bleeding out of the stump of his arm, which had been ripped off when he'd managed to break free of the gravitational pull of a Byakuru that had come close to him. But his arm had been lost in the process, being the closest part of him in the first place. Well, that was tenacious of you, but it's over now, Raisin said, approaching the knight, and noting that he couldn't be much older than he was. He leveled the gladius to stab, and then froze as he caught the sight of the other boy's eyes. He knew that look in them. The look of fear, helplessness, desperation, the knowledge of his own weakness, unable to do anything against a stronger foe that had him at their mercy. He'd seen that look before, reflected in a polished floor when Sarka had brutalized him, and now he was inflicting that same pain, that same helplessness upon someone else, and he hadn't given his second thought up until then, because he hadn't considered his opponent human, just as he had been raised to. But now, he saw the same look of fear he had once worn. He looked at the bleeding stump of the arm his Byakuru had ripped off before sucking in, and the blood coming out of it. Then he looked down his own burnt front, and the blood covering it. They were both bleeding blood that was the same shade of red, despite his clan's long-held beliefs that his blood somehow made him more than anyone else. He looked around at the people he'd killed, horror slowly dawning on his face. Could his clan be wrong? Could the ultimate similarities between him and these people really be worth more than the differences? Could they be just as human as he was, despite the claims his family made? The claims he had been raised up till now on? He looked back at the boy he'd literally disarmed, only to realize that he was already dead, having passed away due to shock and blood loss while Raisin had been standing there, caught up in his revelations. Raisin was suddenly on his hands and knees, and he was vomiting the contents of his stomach on the once pristine, now blood-soaked ground. What? What had he done? How could anyone who could bleed, fear, and die? How could they be anything less than human? The attack was finished, and Raisin had managed to pull himself together at the end of it, assuming a blank mask to his true emotions. He had been found leaning against the compound wall in this state, and he used his injury as an excuse for staying out of the rest of the action, stating that he had been getting dizzy, which was in fact true. He lost a decent amount of blood during the struggle, and he had gotten dizzy as a result after the impact of his actions had hit him. After a medic had looked him over, he was sent back to report to Damien, and he gave a slightly altered version of events, leaving out his hesitation at the end, and his thoughts on whether or not the Jinchuriki clan were right to consider other people as lesser beings. Eventually, the clan forces returned to the clan compound, and a celebration for their victory was almost immediately put together. Raisin clenched his teeth, but otherwise hid his anger. They were celebrating the slaughter of men, women, and children, and to make it worse, he was expected to join the party, and he had to act like he was enjoying himself. Since he was too young to drink alcohol, he was given juice in a glass to drink. Even as the festivities continued, he was consumed with his thoughts on just what made his clan and the other clans different from one another. And he soon had the only real answer strength. His clan was absurdly powerful, and had come to the erroneous conclusion that it gave them the right, the authority to dictate the fates of others. He then overheard two clan members talking about their kills for the day, and one of them detailed vividly of how he'd found a woman and her baby trying to hide after he'd killed the father, and laughed as he described how he killed them. The sound of shattering glass could be heard, and they looked up to see that Raisin now had a bleeding hand covered in the beverage that the glass's grip had shattered once held. They stared, and one of them asked, "Something up, kid?" Raisin paused to consider his answer before he stated, "Nothing. Just thought of my own kills today, and remember the one that got in a lucky shot. The bastard that dared to injure me. I should watch my impulses." The clan members nodded, satisfied with the explanation, and Raisin moved off, barely controlling his rage. They talked about killing a woman and child, and they laughed about it. For him, now that the illusion that the Jinchuriki were above petty humanity was shattered for him, it was intolerable. But for now, he had to tolerate it, or at least appear to. It was then he vowed to himself that one day he would destroy the Jinchuriki clan. Nearly a year had passed since Raisin had made his private oath, and he announced he wanted to go off into the wilderness for a month or two to train. This was met positively, as the clan did encourage their members practice survival skills and their abilities. They weren't even the slightest bit concerned that anyone might attack a lone member of their clan, certain that even if they tried, they would die for their folly. The Jinchukui Tsuri truly were at the height of their arrogance. It was this that allowed Raisin to leave the compound for a while to have some thoughts to himself, and he intended to make use of it to train in secret skills that the Jinchukui Tsuri thought were beneath them. He could try to learn elemental ninjutsu for one thing. They generally disregarded such techniques. There were few outside of their bloodline they didn't disregard really. Of course, the trouble was, Raisin had no idea how to even start learning an element. He supposed he could start by trying the old trial and error approach, but he knew he would not have much time before he would have to return to the compound to avoid someone coming to check on him after the month or so he said he would be gone was up. He quite frankly didn't have the time for trial and error. Could he check one of the destroyed compounds of clans the Jinchukui Tsuri conquered and see if the remnants had anything useful? It was worth a try. So, he thought for a moment and decided to head for the ruins of the Rakuto clan's compound. They could use all 5 elements after all, though not to quite the same degree as the masters of the Ishoryu clan. So they must have had scrolls on them, and with any luck, some of them might have been left intact. He briefly wondered what affinity he was as he started flying there, using his gravity manipulation to do so. Hours later, he touched down. He looked around and entered the crumbling, shattered gates of the Rakuto's old compound. What he did not realize was that he was not alone there, a lone figure. Catching sight of him entering the ruins he was taking shelter in, narrowed his eyes and started to follow. Eyes that then turned purple with multiple concentric rings. Raisin eventually came to the partially collapsed room where the archives of the Rakuto clan had once been. Much of the interior had been set aflame, but it looked like the flames had gone out on their own at some point. Still, the damage was extensive, and Raisin had to dig out the entrance before he could even enter. He looked down to see a scroll that had been burned about halfway to ashes, partially buried in rubble. He picked it up and opened it, but he could only see the upper half of whatever the scroll had contained, since the bottom part was what had been burned. It looked like it had just been a scroll on history anyway, which was not exactly what he was looking for. When he looked around, he saw an occasional scrap that had survived, but he realized that the flames would have had to have been smothered to have gone out before burning a substantial amount of whatever it had been burning on. Thus, his gaze then turned to the collapsed end of the room. If that had fallen on some of the scrolls before they could be burned. He started for the pile before he heard Shinra Tensei. He was hit by a sudden, unyielding force in the side and blasted through the wall. He recovered quickly and drew his gladius, wondering who had stumbled upon him, and fearing for a moment that one of his clan members had in fact seen him coming here, since that did in fact feel like getting hit by a strong gravitational push. To his relief, upon looking up, he did not recognize his assailant. It was instead someone close to his own age with spiky red hair. And the eyes. Raisin's own eyes widened with recognition. "You're a Rakuto?" he asked in shock, looking into the gaze of the Rinnegan. "Yes, as a matter of fact, I am," the boy stated, stepping through the hole Raisin's body had just made in the wall. "Did you Jinchukui Tsuri scumbags really think you wiped us all out?" "No, you left one survivor, a survivor out for revenge." The Rakuto created a chakra rod and stretched his free hand out. "Bansho Tenon." Raisin was jerked in his assailant's direction, and the boy tried to run him through with the chakra rod. Raisin briefly considered using his own superior gravity manipulation to break free from the pull, but a better plan came to him. He let the momentum pull him, and at the last second, used it to yank his opponent on a crash course with him. Having expected evasive maneuvering, the Rakuto was in fact caught off guard, and they crashed into each other. Only Raisin was armored, so he was hurt less by the impact, while his opponent was hurt more. The red-headed boy was sent skidding across the floor of the ruined compound before he managed to recover and got to his feet, sporting a nosebleed. "Why, you bastard? I won't let you desecrate the Rakuto clan's compound any further." Limbo Hengoku. He gazed at Raisin with a great deal of intensity as he said this. "Limbo Hengo what?" Raisin asked before an invisible blow hit him in the face and threw him back through another wall painfully. Cookie for anyone who recognizes the joke. Hint it's a different technique and a parody that I'm borrowing the joke from. "Ow, what the dash?" he demanded, sitting up. "That wasn't a Shinra Tensei." He then noted that the Rakuto's arm had turned into some sort of chakra cannon and was pointed right at him. "Ah, that could be bad if it hits me," Raisin said mildly before attempting to move out of the way, before he was suddenly restrained by something he couldn't see. "What is this?" "It is one of the greatest jutsu offered by these eyes," the Rakuto said. "It should be quite effective in killing your black-hearted clan." He pointed the cannon at Raisin, whose eyes widened in alarm. "Wait, you have it wrong. I'm not evil like they dash," he started trying to say, before the Rinnegan bearer fired. Thinking fast, Raisin extended his hands forward and formed a black hole, which absorbed the blast of chakra. The Rakudo's renegade eyes widened, before he cursed as the force restraining Raisin vanished. Shit, not now. He grunted, and Raisin, not one to question his luck, dashed forward and pulled the Rakudo to him with his jutsu. Shinra Tensei, the boy shouted, trying to knock Raisin away as he flew towards him, only for Raisin to deflect the gravity pulse with one of his own, and then he struck the Rakudo boy across the temple, knocking him out instantly. Raisin panted and wondered now what to do with you. Blearily, the last surviving member of the Rakudo clan came to, and noted that he was tied up and covered in seals meant to restrain his chakra. He looked up with his now deactivated onyx eyes full of loathing as Raisin casually read through scrolls he had unearthed from the rubble. Real useful stuff, that is, the Jinshu Koyatsuri said conversationally as he held up the slightly damaged scroll that contained basic Fuinjutsu instructions. It took me a few tries, but the seals in here should keep your chakra locked up for about an hour. Well, what are you waiting for? The Rakudo asked. Get on with it. I'm sorry. Get on with what exactly? Raisin inquired as his gaze turned to the tied-up boy. Get on with killing me, of course, was the heated reply Raisin got. What? You intend to torture me? First, you scumbag. I should have expected as much from your corrupt and twisted clan. You have it all wrong, Raisin said, setting the scroll down. I am fully aware of how bad my clan is, and I have every intention of bringing them to justice for all the people they have murdered. I just need to get stronger first, developing techniques they won't bother with to give me an edge, even as I master my bloodline. The boy snorted. Yeah, right, and I'm the emperor of the Byako Empire, he stated sarcastically, referring to a faction in a fairly backwater dimension. Raisin sighed and said, let's get a few things straight, Rakudo-san. If I wanted to kill you, you would already be dead. You were just knocked out long enough for me to tie you up. I could have much more easily slit your throat. If I wanted to torture you, I'd have started the moment you were awake. I'm not your enemy. The rest of the Jinshu Koyatsuri are, and they're my enemies as well. I've been lucky to realize that the atrocities they commit so casually are in fact atrocities. They've convinced themselves that they are above humans, and that they can thus do whatever they please with humanity. And all I've seen and done as a Jinshu Koyatsuri angers me to the core. Raisin spoke with an angry sort of passion. We should be allies. We share a common foe. I don't like my clan, and you don't like my clan. Once again, the tied-up redhead snorted. Yeah, right. Why should I trust you then? This could very be a trap to get me to reveal any potential allies I have. But you're wasting your time. If that's the case, I have no one. I'm alone. And it's you and your clan's fault. The boy said, his words getting quieter and quieter. Everyone I cared for. Gone, because of you, Devil's Pawn. I want to wipe the Jinshu Koyatsuri off the face of the world for what they've done. He suddenly roared. And you're one of them, trying to gain something off of me, for some reason or another. Raisin sighed, and drew his blade. The Rakudo seemed satisfied at what he thought was the pretense being over. Only for Raisin to cut his ropes, undo his seal bindings, and step back. What are you doing? The boy asked in shock, which only increased when Raisin dropped his weapon. Simple. One interesting thing I read when you were out was about your clan's Naraka Path ability, and its ability to tell when someone's lying. So come on, grab me, and ask me if I was being honest with you. Use the King of Hell. What are you waiting for? You can confirm whether I am friend or foe. Simple as that. I'm unarmed. You won't get a better show dash. The Rakudo dashed forward and grabbed him by the neck, and as predicted, the King of Hell was shown before Raisin. Fine. If you want to be exposed and killed in a grisly manner, I won't deny you in fact. I'm more than happy to oblige. Are you sincere in saying you're not an evil person like everyone else spawned in your clan? No one's born evil, Raisin said, his teeth grit. Doesn't matter where you're born. But no, I am not like the majority of my clan. His tongue burst from his mouth and extended towards the King of Hell, whose mouth opened, a hand reaching for the tongue before grasping it. The Rakudo looked satisfied, expecting the tongue to be ripped out. His expression, however, was then to change into pure shock as the tongue was released and returned to Raisin's mouth. This can't be happening, the boy shouted, before he questioned, are you evil? Answer me. I already did. I'm not evil. Raisin shouted back in answer, and the process of his tongue being grasped was repeated, and once again it was released. I don't believe it. Are you evil? No, I am not evil. Raisin snarled, and once again the cycle repeated, and the Rakudo, too shocked for words, let Raisin drop back down. The Rakudo slumped against the wall, hyperventilating, before he finally said, No, it's not possible. The clan that could commit such atrocities. There's no way they could be human, and no way someone decent could have come from them. But it's true, and I am the result, Raisin said, now back on his feet. Now, then, I think I made an offer. Offer? The Rakudo asked. To help you defeat the Jinshukoyatsuri clan. For revenge, to prevent them from having any more victims, it does not matter. The important thing now is that they're stopped from conquering this dimension, Raisin told his opponent as he squatted down next to him. I was prepared to try to do it on my own, low as my odds of success were, but if we became allies and gathered other survivors of clans defeated by the Jinshukoyatsuri, then we might actually stand a solid chance of beating them, and not just defying them to the bitter end. I'm still trusted by them, and can provide insider information while you prepare our resistance force. You with me? Raisin extended his hand to the Rakudo. The boy looked in a bewildered manner at the extended hand, before he took it in his own shaking hand, and Raisin pulled him up. I'm with you, he said. My name is Zion. Zion Rakudo. Well met, Zion, Raisin replied. I'm Raisin, and unfortunately, a Jinshukoyatsuri, but in blood only. So, that clan of yours. When I pursued vengeance, I did not think to win against the entire clan. I just wanted to kill as many as I could before they found and killed me. But do you honestly think we will win a war against them if we gather a rebellion? There's no guarantee, Raisin admitted. Only opportunity. You've got yourself an ally, Zion said, grinning. This is the best opportunity that knocked on my door in my lifetime. The next month was spent sparring with one another. Zion managed to figure out that Raisin was a lightning affinity and helped teach him how to wield the element in question. It helped that he had solid clones to divide the time needed on each of the mandatory exercises. Now, Raisin had a few lighting-style ninjutsu under his belt. Though his few ninjutsu was nothing special, he had little talent for it, despite his earlier success with binding Zion with those chakra seals earlier on. And even that wasn't very successful, as all subsequent attempts were broken pretty easily by Zion. It was a good thing he didn't think to try while he was still hell-bent on killing Raisin. It could have gotten ugly before Raisin could convince him if he had. He still managed to learn storage seals effectively enough, though. He had a plan with those, even if it wasn't one of the things considered beneath his clan, and he would learn it later anyway in order to utilize one of the clan's most devastating techniques. On another note, Raisin's gravity manipulation had also gained in strength over the month, and he could now manifest several more Burakuru than before. He was now at a level where he was pretty much better at the gravity jutsu than half the adults in the clan. He still knew he had to improve in other techniques, of course, but excelling in his clan's abilities was only going to help in the long run. Eventually, Raisin's return was expected, and he had to part ways with Zion. They agreed to meet again in a year, along with whoever Zion could get to agree to aid them. Zion would also work towards building a place they could operate from. Once that was agreed upon, Raisin began walking back towards his clan's compound. As he entered it, he entertained the grim thought of bringing this home of so much evil crashing down, and took a small amount of satisfaction from it. He was greeted early on by his sister. Hello, brother. Was your trip successful? She asked mockingly. Raisin shuddered slightly. The truth was, he was scared of his sister after what had happened. The whole episode over a year ago had traumatized him enough to cause it. Yes, I have improved a significant amount, he said, suppressing the urge to swallow. Sarka frowned. Careful, brother. You're not the only one getting stronger, and I will sure as hell not allow you to overtake me. If I feel you are trying to be an upstart on me, I'll beat you senseless again. Father might not allow to kill you, but hospitalizing you during training is still plenty excusable. Raisin said nothing as he walked by. Once he was back in his room, he clenched his fists. He'd resolved long ago, scared of Sarko or not, he was going to kill her one day. But for now, his subconscious fears had a pretty strong hold on him. He'd have to get over those first. A week later, Raisin smirked where no one could see him. One of the higher-ranking officers of the Jinshukoyatsuri had recently passed away. The cause? The man had been highly allergic to peanuts, enough to potentially die if he consumed any. And apparently peanut oil had been used in preparing the dinner he'd eaten. An investigation was being done currently, and Raisin was satisfied with his work. It took a bit of effort, but he'd put a storage seal on the inside of the container for the regular cooking oil, and set it to release peanut oil into the rest of the oil, essentially making whatever meal was prepared with it a poison for anyone with serious peanut allergies. And he'd set it so it would happen the next night the deceased officer's second in command was on kitchen duty, and, as such, would be handling the same container of oil. It worked exactly as Raisin planned several days later. The case ended up being closed with the blame being pinned on the officer's second in command, who was barely even given a trial. It had a clear motive, which would be the man trying to get promoted, and the method was obvious once it was determined that peanut oil had been mixed with the normal cooking oil. With the final verdict, the man was convicted, and for killing his commanding officer, he was sentenced to the execution block, public for the clan. Raisin turned up to watch the execution as the man pleaded that he was innocent of the crime. Raisin coldly watched, thinking, innocent of the crime you're being put to death for maybe. but not of killing a lot of people just going about their lives in the Elder Dimension. And the worst part is, this whole stinking clan doesn't even consider a crime. Burn in hell, bastard. Once the man was put to death, Raisin began planning how else he could discreetly weaken the Jinchukui Tsuri from his current position. Over the next 12 months, Raisin's progress was infuriatingly slow. Oh, he could arrange a training accident here, a disappearance there, but he wasn't able to take out any significant numbers of enemies with these tactics. Not unless he wanted to get caught. Still, he was at least glad that a few Jinchukui Tsuri had met their ends at his hand. Eventually, he requested more time away for private training, and it was once again granted. He left the compound and headed for the wilderness. Once he was certain he wasn't being followed, he turned towards the Rakuto clan compound and flew the rest of the way. After a few hours of traveling this way, he touched down and looked around for Zion. Sure enough, the redhead was there, and sitting on top of a column that no longer supported a part of the building, that part having collapsed, the column somehow being spared in the process. Yo, Zion said cheerfully before he leapt down from the column. Huh, you're here a little earlier than expected, Raisin remarked, and Zion raised an eyebrow. Nope, you're just late, he snarked, causing Raisin to lightly punch him in the shoulder. Any luck on your end? He asked. Yeah, I found a decent place to be our base of operations, and I've already got several recruits. You're willing to be a sparring partner for them, right? Zion requested. The more familiar with Jinchukui Tsuri Jutsu they can be made, the better off they will be when we start the rebellion. Already thought of that, Raisin agreed. So where's our hideout? A day later, they stood outside of a system of caves. Well, it's out of the way, but aren't caves generally the sort of thing you'd expect evil people to hide out in? Raisin asked. Zion rolled his eyes in response. Don't be stereotypical. Besides, who would actually look for us in such a dank location? Come on, he told Raisin, entering the cave. Raisin looked at the entrance critically and went in after Zion, interested to see the inside. To his surprise, there was a dead end. Okay, I'm guessing there's going to be a cliche sort of switch around here to open the W dash, he started to say, before watching Zion start to walk forward and fade right into the wall. Or a high-level Jinjutsu to hide the entrance, making look like a dead end. That's a little better. He walked forward briskly, and right into the wall. As he lay down on the ground from the impact, he then grunted, okay. That's a lot better. Whatever just happened? Zion reappeared, laughing. You have to put some of your blood on that spot on the wall there, he told Raisin. Then the entrance will open up, and you just walk right through the Jinjutsu. Once your blood is registered, the entrance will recognize you and open whenever you approach, but leave the image behind. The Jinjutsu also hides the scraping sound of the door moving as it opens and closes. And you didn't think to warn me? Raisin asked, glaring at Zion. Zion mock gasped. And miss you falling on the ground in pain? I thought you knew me. I'm so going to get you for this later, Raisin swore, and Zion simply cackled. Come on, time's a wasting, Zion chided. You're the one wasting it with such petty jokes, Raisin retorted as he took off his chainmail gauntlet, before cutting his thumb with his middle fingernail and then spreading the needed blood over the area over the wall. He then moved to the wall and passed his hand right through it in a careful manner, unwilling to risk slamming into it again. He nodded, satisfied with the fact that he was no longer at risk of breaking his nose unwittingly, and stepped through. And right into a scalding hot waterfall. With a yelp, he jumped back. And that requires a code phrase to be said before it recognizes you, Zion said with sadistic glee. Raisin glared at Zion once again. Don't worry, the burn should be mild and easy to heal. Just tell me the damn code, Raisin growled in rage. Simple. It is, oh please, great mystical waterfall of steaming rage, allow me to pass with my delicate skin intact, Zion said with a straight face. Raisin looked at Zion in a deadpan. There's no way I'm saying that. Fine, don't enter the hideout then, Zion shrugged. No skin off my ass. Oh, and if you use any kind of chakra in here to try to get through, you trigger a lot of traps, he added, seeing Raisin was about to do just that. Oh please, great mystical waterfall of steaming rage, allow me to pass with my delicate skin intact. Raisin growled, his dark face actually reddening, and that's when Zion started laughing his ass off. Oh man, I can't believe you actually said it. He roared in laughter. Shortly before doubling over as Raisin sunk his fist into Zion's gut. What's the real code? He growled, his face red with rage and embarrassment. It's open great 6 ways and allow passage to Freehaven, Zion wheezed. And yes, that one is the real passcode. Okay, that one's not so stupid and lame. Though to be honest, the first one might actually better, Raisin admitted. Not a single self-respecting member of my clan would ever say that one, even if they knew it. You did, didn't you? Zion snarked, earning a death glare from Raisin. He then spoke the code and walked through the illusion wall. Sure enough, the waterfall parted as he approached, allowing him to pass under it unhindered. Zion followed. Any other unpleasant surprises? Raisin asked Zion. Other than a few booby traps I'm going to point out, that tripwire there will trigger a cave-in. Zion said, pointing, and Raisin stepped over said wire. Duck under that seal as you pass it. It triggers a burst of poison gas. You really went out of your way to make this place inaccessible to an enemy. Raisin replied, actually sounding impressed. We're trying to stymie Jinshu Koyatsuri, Zion pointed out. If they find this place, we'll need every last trick we can muster if we are to survive. All too true, Raisin said. So, you call this place Freehaven then? Yep, here, we can escape the tyranny of the clan you came from, Zion replied as they kept moving. Don't light that torch, you'll set off an explosion. And in the dark here, there are a few places for a stalactite to fall on you. Once triggered, and you'd never see it coming. You know, I never did learn what the difference between a stalactite and stalagmite was, Raisin said. It's a question that pops up a lot. Zion thought about it for a second, and then shrugged. Dunno. Stalagmite's got an M in it? He guessed. I meant what was different that would get them different names in the first place, moron. Raisin snapped, briefly losing his patience. Stalactites come out of the ceiling of the cave, a female voice up ahead said. Stalagmites are from the ground. Easy enough to remember. A torch was lit, illuminating a green-haired girl around their age with burning red eyes a little ahead of them. We cleared out the stalagmites, so it's just stalactites in here, and we secured them with seals, so unless we deliberately drop one, there's no risk of one falling on you. Good to know, Raisin said, catching her gaze, and they stared at one another briefly. So Zion was right. There's a Jinshu Koyatsuri allied with us, the girl said. I'd recognize those silver eyes and dark skin anywhere. Raisin caught the back of her right hand, where a sapphire blue dragon tattoo was etched into her skin, and he raised an eyebrow. You sure you then? He asked. Yes, she is, Zion told Raisin. Before they surrendered to the Jinshu Koyatsuri, she escaped and took their famous blade, Elemental Infinity, with her. I'm Alexis Yushoryu, the girl said, extending her hand at Raisin, who took it. Raisin Jinshu Koyatsuri, Raisin replied, an amiable smile on his face. She had one as well, before she said bluntly, I seriously hope that Zion's right about you. I'm not going to lie. All I know about you is that you are a Jinshu Koyatsuri, and that is not going to fill me with any warm, fuzzy feelings. Nor do I expect it to. For the last time, I'm sorry. Zion roared in indignation. Seriously, how was I to know you were a good one? To be honest. You couldn't have, Raisin admitted. If anything, I'm miffed about my clan's reputation. Zion paused, and then tilted his head. Wait. Then why did you act mad at me for a while over it? Just giving you a hard time, and milking it for all it was worth. Not that you didn't deserve it with all that pranking you've been putting me through, Raisin said with a devious grin, and Alexis giggled. Zion scowled. Very funny, he muttered, fully aware of how hypocritical it was. I'll lighten up, Raisin said, waving his hand carelessly. At least you couldn't do any serious harm to me. Them's fighting words, Zion growled, creating a chakra rod. Actually, Zion, would you mind if I had a spar with Raisin here myself? Alexis asked. I'm interested in seeing what he's made of. All right, I guess, Zion said, deflating. Sounds like fun, Raisin admitted, cracking his knuckles in anticipation for the upcoming spar. There an arena here? Right this way, Alexis said. And watch out for traps, we got a lot in here. You have to pass a lot of quizzes with perfect scores in a row on the locations of the traps. And the geography of this place is quite a maze, so for a while, you'll need to take someone who already knows their way around whenever you decide to roam. Goody, Raisin grumbled. Prodigy or no, he disliked tests. Spar first, then I'll study the layout of Freehaven. Kinda ironic name, considering how claustrophobic it is. Preferable to the tyranny of fearing the Jinshu Koyatsuri, Alexis said flatly. Besides, it's not a permanent prison. It's just a place to prepare for war against the enemy. Raisin nodded understandingly. It made a lot of sense. Hide out for a while, shore up your strength, and when the time was right, hit the enemy hard with everything you had, preferably with a sucker punch of some kind. To the figurative nuts. Raisin stood off to one side of the indoor arena, while Alexis stood at the other side. Of course, the arena being indoor was kind of given, considering the whole place was an indoor everything, but he wouldn't complain about security. Well, he would, just a little, but he wouldn't really mean it. Zion was in the stands built around the arena, sitting next to two other boys, both a little older than him. There were 6 other people there, one of them the sole adult, a woman who glared suspiciously at Raisin. One was barely out of his toddler years, while the other 4 were close to the ages of Raisin, Alexis, and Zion, with a few years difference. Not much of a resistance movement, Zion. Raisin called to his friend as Alexis started stretching. Bite me, Zion said. Finding people willing to rebel isn't exactly easy, considering the overwhelming force we're against, and we're only starting out. Alexis chuckled, and Zion looked in a perplexed manner at her. He's messing with you again, she clarified. You can tell? Raisin asked in some surprise. He was pretty good at hiding his amusement, even with his helmet off, so it was surprising that she figured out that he was in fact joking around with his friend. I'm pretty good at reading people, she replied with a smirk. Bet that comes in handy in a fight, Raisin said, drawing his gladius. Zion settling down in his seat, grumbling. She drew her own blade, and Raisin looked at it in interest, seeing the 10 loops etched on the blade, all of them lighting up with her chakra, each set of 2 a different color. Zion wasn't kidding. You really did take the treasure blade of the Yashoryu with you before the Jinchukui Tsuri could get a hold of it, he said, a little impressed. That couldn't have been an easy task for a 10-year-old, however talented she was. Yeah, well, I wanted to ensure I got a shot at putting the pricks from your clan in their place, Alexis replied. I also stole the dragon's summoning contract. And Raisin watched as her eyes turned yellow with slits, just a few ridges forming around her eyes to indicate an almost perfect dragon sage mode, the ridges almost being scales that would come from an imperfect version of the art. Raisin's silver eyes widened, and he knew that Alexis had not only taken the blade, but also been accepted as its master, which meant its previous one was dead. You didn't. He started to ask. Kill the previous master of elemental infinity? Alexis asked. No. He died in battle against the Jinchukui Tsuri by the name of Damien. That bastard killed my father. I only just escaped with his sword and summoning contract. She snarled with some venom at the memory. Raisin's eyes widened. His father had killed hers? To be perfectly honest, he just couldn't be surprised by the revelation. I see. I'm sorry. Damien Jinchukui Tsuri, field general of the Jinchukui Tsuri clan, is my own father. Alexis looked surprised for a moment, and then her eyes narrowed. And? She asked. And what? Raisin queried right back. I don't know what else to say. The man who sired me murdered your own father. I'm just apologizing for my relation to him, and to my whole damn clan. Alexis stared hard at him, before she disappeared in a blur. Raisin barely turned around in time to block her attack, but to his shock, his gladius was cut through like butter, and he took a cut across the gut before he could blast his opponent back with a burst of gravity ninjutsu. So you're going to try to achieve revenge on him by killing me then? Raisin asked. I suppose I expected that. Who said anything about revenge? Alexis asked. I do want revenge, but I want to kill that bastard. You had nothing to do with my father's murder, she continued as she rose and dusted herself off. Yeah, I'm a little ticked that his son has to be the one member of your clan on our side, but I'm not foolish enough to pass up your aid just because of who your father is. Again, it irks me, but no one chooses their parents. What they do choose is the relationship between themselves and said parents, good or bad. So long as you have as little to do with Damien as possible, I'll ignore the fact you have his blood. That's fair enough, Raisin acknowledged, and Alexis pointed her blade at him. Then let's finish this spar, she stated before vanishing. Raisin turned and formed a black hole in time to cause elemental infinity to be pulled off course and into the sucking void. Of course, the nigh indestructible blade withstood the force trying to pull it apart, but Alexis would not be able to pull it free as long as the void was there, so she released it and leapt back. Raisin's eyes widened as she was doing one-handed seals with both hands. A different set with each hand at that. Fire-style Fire Dragon Jutsu. Wind-style Wind Current. She shouted, casting both jutsu simultaneously, causing a wind-enhanced and now massive fire dragon to bear down on Raisin, who had to form several black holes at once to absorb the entirety of the ninjutsu. And once it was done, Alexis was nowhere to be seen. He turned in time to meet her foot, which slammed into his face and sent him flying back, blood coming from his nose. He grunted and looked up, seeing Alexis then finish a set of hand seals and shout, lightning-style shot goblin unit. 15 3-foot-tall warriors made of lightning rose up, all wielding spears. Sick him, she ordered them, and they rushed forward, though Raisin blasted them back with a gravity burst. Alexis had managed to get around him again, though, and hit him with a wind-style great breakthrough, sending him careening before he stabilized with his gravity manipulation. Damn, you are relentless, Raisin grunted, blocking her punch on his arm, and he then landed a kick in her gut. She skidded back, but continued to make another set of hand seals. Earth-style Goliath soldier, she cried, and a 30-foot-tall stone warrior in knight's armor and weaponry rose from the ground, with a kite shield and a broadsword to match. Raisin dodged when the stone giant tried to step on him, and then turned, knocking Alexis away with a straight punch. I figured out your attack strategy, he declared. Jutsu. Then you use your high speed to launch a surprise attack while they are occupied. Not a bad guess, But you're only partly right, she said, before disappearing in a burst of smoke, and Raisin's eyes widened as suddenly an earth dragon rose from the ground beneath him and swallowed him whole. Immediately, he tried to gather chakra to blast his way out with a lightning-style jutsu, but he then felt an impossibly sharp edge at his neck from behind. Alexis had concealed herself in the earth dragon and moved immediately after her opponent was caught, taking advantage of the darkness and her sage mode senses to catch them off guard, taking advantage of the fact that most enemies only expected such a construct to only be meant to briefly contain them or capture them, and not for anything deadly to be inside. And if it was destroyed after, then Alexis could dash from the rubble and catch her foe in a surprise attack. Hell, she could probably burst out herself before then at any point she chose if it turned out she bit off more than she could chew. Even if her opponent was a censor, since the jutsu could be loaded with her chakra, it'd mask her presence inside too. You set up the pattern of attacking with a jutsu, then a speedy surprise attack. And when I caught on, you added a solid clone after the Stone Goliath, using IT to make the attack, knowing I'd counter, and set this up while I was distracted? Raisin asked, shocked at how easily he'd been played. You got it. She laughed. It's my win. Yeah, it is you got me, Raisin admitted as the dragon around them crumbled. There was applause as Alexis sheathed her weapon and strode away. Wow, I thought it would be just me, Zion said, walking up to Raisin. You were the stronger of the two of us. I thought for sure you'd have her. So you lost her too? Raisin asked. Not all that surprising. But hey, one loss is something that you can come back FR dash. 52, Zion cut Raisin short. 52 times I sparred with her, 52 times I lost, he admitted. Huh, you suck. Raisin couldn't resist taunting. And you swallow, Zion shot back. Let's see if you manage to get a win after 52 matches with her. It's a bet, Raisin said. 2 weeks later, Raisin was sitting down in shock. He and Alexis had 60 matches in total. And no matter what he tried, she always won. There were even a couple times he and Zion had double-teamed her, and while they'd come close, they got no cigar out of it. How the hell is she that good? What kind of super prodigy, I asked she. Raisin asked no one in particular, though Zion had approached, somehow looking smug and humiliated at the same time, since Alexis had just gotten them both again. Told you she was something else, Zion remarked. Although, I think I figured out a few of her training methods, though there's little we could replicate. What? Raisin asked in some confusion. Well, she uses solid clones to seemingly unhealthy numbers for one thing, Zion informed him. Not even elemental ones. And has them all practice things like chakra control, and is damn creative with the exercises she can come up with. Even as she increases her reserves, she has them study battle tactics, ninjutsu theory, fuinjutsu, and fuinjutsu theory, has a few work on creating ninjutsu. Others learning multiple taijutsu styles, sword styles, and even weapons that aren't blades. She's quite fond of a bow, actually, and it turns out she's no slouch with jinjutsu and medical ninjutsu. Either, she's leaving no potential area to improve herself untouched, like she wants to master everything. And thanks to elemental infinity, she just rinses and repeats rather than having to rest for a day or two after an intense workout. And all the while, she trains her body, building her muscles without using chakra to boost them, which allows them to develop easier, since using chakra to increase their strength during training limits that. And by building a triathlon-style musculature, she has a more solid foundation when she does increase her strength and speed to work with, making her all the more dangerous. And she meditates when her main body is too tired to work out anymore. That probably helps, he added mildly. Add that to my suspicions that she was a prodigy to begin with, and her motivations for training so hard, and I'm legitimately terrified of how strong she can become. And she's been training like that for years before I found her. She's probably already gotten a century's worth of training in already. Raisin actually chuckled. Now it made sense. We're never going to catch up to her, are we? He asked mildly. Probably not. That sword of hers is unfair as shit, and she's abusing the fuck out of its chakra replenishing feature to get more training than we ever could. Think she's got a boyfriend? Zion was left staring at Raisin, who paused and asked it. Did I just say that out loud? He had in fact said it. And he'd meant it. Raisin was smitten with Alexis. Many years passed, and Raisin returned as often as he could, training and learning with the rest of Freehaven's inhabitants, which were steadily growing, and they were tunneling the cave system out, allowing for the whole thing to rapidly grow, and it was almost a small city now. Soon, they would be ready to match the clan that was conquering the whole dimension, a little bit at a time. Raisin and Zion both grew in strength, and sparred repeatedly against each other, and gave Alexis a few matches too, but thus far had only managed to squeak out a couple wins, and that was only when they double-teamed her. Raisin didn't even really consider them wins. He wanted to beat her one-on-one, damn it. A 16-year-old Raisin, Alexis, and Zion met with several other senior members to discuss how they'd get things done. They had yet to settle on a name for the rebellion, but they were now working out the chain of command. Much to the surprise of Raisin and Zion, Alexis had no interest in any particular leadership position. "I refuse," Alexis said flatly when the idea of her being the one in charge of the whole operation was proposed. "Why? But you're the strongest one here," a young taijutsu, bukijutsu, and inner-gate user by the name of Richard protested. "And one of the smartest. That doesn't mean I'll make a good leader. I might know a lot about winning fights, at least my own fights, but I have no interest in directing larger numbers." Frankly, Raisin's better suited for that. It's one of the things taught to those expected to achieve high ranks, and considering the fact he's a prodigy to them who just keeps getting stronger, they were bound to have taught him their battle tactics. Which of course means he'd have the insight to counter them to begin with. Zion's also roughly as suited, since he can learn things like that instantly via his human path, so that they can be co-leaders, and they are in second and third places on the power scaling here, so they're suitable for the role of our leaders. Me, I'm sticking to the front lines when things finally get to where we want them to be. Raisin sat in some shock, as did Zion. They'd expected her to leap on the chance to further her desire to avenge her clan, but then, what she said did make sense. After a while, it was decided that Zion would be the one to be the face of the rebellion, with Raisin his second in command. While some thought Raisin was better suited for the lead role, others agreed that Zion had the natural charisma and had been the one to work on gathering the rebellion in the first place. Plus, he was the last remnant of the clan that had really challenged the Jinchukwaitsuri. With Raisin, while his abilities weren't even remotely in question, well, there were still trust issues and the fact that many were not truly familiar with him. He accepted his role without complaint, as he understood the reasoning. Afterwards, a slightly older boy among them, something of a prankster and a master of traps, Thomas, asked, "Hey, what about our name?" "Our name?" Raisin asked curiously. "Yeah, our whole resistance movement, it needs a kick-ass name," Thomas explained. "How about the Jinchukwaitsuri Busters?" "Too much of a mouthful," Raisin remarked. "Isn't pretty much anything with your clan name in it?" Alexis snarked, before looking apologetically at Raisin. "No offense intended." "None taken, I wholeheartedly agree," Raisin shrugged. Whoever the moron who gave us our surname was, he clearly thought everyone had way too much time on their hands. "How about simply Gravity Busters then?" Thomas asked before making a pose, and saying, "I even thought up a slogan. Who you gonna call? Gravity Busters." One could hear the sound of the wind blowing outside, despite how deep underground they were. "Yeah, hell no," Raisin, Zion, and Alexis all said at once, causing Thomas to deflate with a pout. "What about something ironic?" Zion asked. "Do tell," Alexis inquired. "Well, the Jinchukwaitsuri." "Wow, that really is a mouthful," Zion started. "Anyway, they were the armor of a group of warriors in another dimension called Knights, and call themselves Knights as well, despite discarding all their codes of honor and protection of the innocent." "How do you know that?" Another member asked curiously. "I studied whatever I could get my hands on about the clan, including history in search of a weakness," Zion admitted easily. "Anyhow, we could call ourselves Knights, but rather than the mode of armor and weaponry, we'll use the ideals. And we'll see what wins out in the end, the mere image of knighthood or the actual code of knighthood." "I like it," Raisin said. "Hey, I've got both anyway. So, knight is a word we'll use, but we can expand a little." Alexis mused. "Knights of Justice," Richard put forth. "Knights of Justice." Raisin mused, testing the words on his tongue. "Yeah, it has itself a nice ring to it, doesn't it?" It's settled then. This would later become the common name for fighters in the Elder Dimension, as ninja and samurai were the names of fighters in Naruto's dimension. The entirety of the inner circle of the newly christened resistance group all shook on it. "Now, we just have to finish our preparations, and then we'll strike against the Jinchukwaitsuri," Alexis said. "I have an idea or two," Raisin replied. "They plan on attacking the Kahanshus within a couple of months. We can give them a warning and hide among them and launch an ambush on the clan, while I myself blindside as many as possible from within their ranks." "Ugh, the Chihansu?" Alexis asked with a groan. "Those sexist pigs? I mean, sure, they're strong enough to be of aid, but that's the only thing they have going for them in my book. I'd almost rather leave them to their fate." "Well, they're the lesser of two evils at this point," Raisin sighed. "Plus, we can't afford to fight potential allies. We will, however, make it clear that they won't have their views towards women in our ranks tolerated, under pain of having multiple broken bones." "Sounds like a violent way to keep them in line," Zion remarked. "They're known for stubbornness. What I just suggested is one of the few ways, if not the only effective way, to get something through their thick skulls," Raisin said shortly. "I like the way you think," Alexis said. "At some point, we're going to have to liberate the remainder of my clan. They're in one of the Jinchukwaitsuri labor camps, and can probably be convinced to fight again if they can be convinced that we have a chance." We'll make that a priority after our first blow to them, Zion agreed. For now, Raisin will have to return to his clan and learn as much as possible about their battle plans and send us as much intel as possible while we prepare. And you are absolutely certain we can trust him? A woman in the group asked, one of the members of the clan with the plasma style, Kekiai Tota. Raisin couldn't recall their names. I've run the human path on him multiple times, Zion said in a tired tone. Nothing has changed yet, and there are no signs of any memory-altering jutsu on him. So I do in fact trust him with my life. If Zion says so, Thomas chimed in. Raisin nodded and said, see you all in a couple months. He turned and left, making his plans as he went. This would be the last time he'd return to that infernal clan compound as one of its members. After that, he'd only return with the intention of tearing it apart. Brick by brick. The next couple of months passed at a snail's crawl. Raisin's anticipation made time seem to move unbearably slow, as anticipation had the bad habit of doing. He wanted so much to cut ties with the monsters in human skin he'd had the misfortune of being born among. But time always passed, regardless of how one's perspective seemed to slow it, and the fated day came. Sadly, Raisin discovered that neither Damien nor Sarka were part of the 30 members being sent. They did not value the defeat of the Chihansu enough to send one of their better fighters, or their foremost general, to ensure it happened. However, Raisin managed to get himself on the force, and Commander Tyler, one of Damien's better students, was put in charge, both good things. It'd be a blow to the Jinshu Koyatsuri to lose Tyler, and Raisin needed to be in that force to help his comrades. At every opportunity, he'd squirreled intel out of the compound and into the hands of his allies. They now knew the exact time they'd attack at, and the direction they'd attack from. No real formation to speak of. They were just arrogantly relying on the individual power of each member to sweep aside any defenses. Half of them didn't even bother learning how to counter subtle arts like Jinjutsu, though Raisin knew Tyler and some of his lieutenants were not such fools, so he had given them the heads up to use Jinjutsu, but to be careful if it failed. The day arrived, and Raisin left with his 29 fellow kinsmen and was surveying each and every one of them. Ideally, he'd stab Tyler in the back the moment things went to hell, but he was unfortunately placed at one of the far ends of the formation, while Tyler was in the center part of it. Oh well, he could just blast an opening in their ranks at the needed moment. It was at the start of nightfall when they decided to launch their attack. Tyler led the charge, and several sharp tendrils of blood produced by the Chihansu, Kekiai Jinkai, rushed at the charging Jinshukoyatsuri, only for most of it to be sucked into the black holes produced by the clan's own bloodline, and Tyler fired a Quasar into the center of the compound. But luckily, Raisin was already sure that there were no casualties. He'd known Tyler was capable of the devastatingly powerful jutsu, and would fire it in the dead center of the compound. It was just the most direct tactic, and it would usually work if it wasn't seen coming anyhow. But the Chihansu had gotten sufficient warning, and had fooled the Jinshu Koyatsuri by moving away from the center area and filling it with blood clones rather than being in the line of fire. Entering the newly created hole, the Jinshu Koyatsuri rushed forward, and Raisin entered the fray as well. However, as worked out, he had a distinctive mark on his armor that allowed the Chihansu and the Knights of Justice, and that allowed them to recognize him as an ally, though he kept his eyes open for any accidents that might be staged by someone who didn't trust him. Thus, everyone he struck down was in fact deliberately missed by him, and they played possum, bloodied by the Chihansu using their blood-producing bloodline to fake injuries that the Jinshu Koyatsuri would assume to be fatal and move past the corpses, only to find themselves blindsided. 6 of Raisin's comrades fell before they started to realize something was up. What the hell is going ack? One yelled before Raisin impaled him, armor and all, on one of his claymores, channeling lightning chakra through it. What the hell are you doing? Another asked Raisin, forming a black hole and trying to fire a Quasar, clearly one of Tyler's lieutenants. Raisin immediately extended his hand and forcibly wrested control of the jutsu via the gravity control. He was much better than his opponent, and caused the Quasar to fire upwards, after forcing the black hole into said opponent's abdomen, causing him to have his innards sucked in before his upper torso, and everything above it was vaporized. Meanwhile, the Knights of Justice had sprung their trap and closed in on the Jinshu Koyatsuri from behind, having camped in the foothills outside, while hidden and flanked the clan once they were inside the compound. Several of them did not even have time to defend themselves before they were defeated, but those who did immediately struck back and cut down several before losing their own lives. It was just a sad fact that most Jinshu Koyatsuri were just that much stronger than the average knight not from their clan. Their bloodlines and training were just that good. Still, surprise and superior numbers was quickly thinning the ranks of the Jinshu Koyatsuri. And, well, not everyone among the Knights of Justice could be called average. Well, ain't this a surprise, I assure you. one of two Jinchukui said as Alexis approached them. I was wondering if any of you scampered off somewhere rather than going to the labor camps like good slaves. Alexis narrowed her burning red eyes in rage. Yeah, those two were royally fucked, and she quickly formed one-handed seals and roared, fire style, great fire annihilation. The blazing inferno roared its way at the too soon-to-be-dead gravity users. Burakuru, they shouted back, and the black holes sprang into being, sucking up the roaring flames. Nice try, bitch, but you can't overpower Jinchukui Tsuri's ultimate jutsu. One of them cackled, sending several of the spheres at Alexis, who looked horrified as she tried to dodge, and failed as she was pulled to them, and hit dead on, screaming as her flesh was sucked in. Before she burst into smoke. What? Neither one of them had time to register Alexis blurring behind them, as she said coldly, I don't have to. With a quick swing of her blade, both foes went down, minus their heads. While overpowering the black holes the Jinchukui Tsuri could form took a ridiculous amount of power, it was a moot point. It didn't matter how powerful an attack was, nor how impenetrable a defense. One of the things Alexis learned through her combat experience was that it didn't mean jack shit if it was pointed in the wrong direction. Tyler was panicking as he realized that his forces had been reduced to the single digits, and a spiky red-haired man landed in front of him and turned his cold eyes onto the Jinchukui Tsuri commander as they turned into a horrifyingly familiar pattern. The Rinnegan, Tyler yelped, propelling several unsealed claymores at Zion via his gravity manipulation, and Zion weaved and bobbed to avoid them all, before launching Tyler back with a Shinra Tensei, following up quickly with turning one of his arms into a chakra cannon and firing it, along with several missiles from the same arm sides. Tyler hastily produced a few black holes to absorb the deadly attacks, and did so successfully before an invisible entity grabbed him and forced him forward, trying to ram him into his own spheres, forcing him to dispel them as he struggled free, and Zion was then above him, a chakra rod in each hand as he impaled Tyler through the shoulder with the first one, causing Tyler to grunt and unseal a gladius and stab upward, only for his movements to stop at the last second as Zion's chakra paralyzed him. Herc, Tyler grunted as he struggled, managing to move some, but it was too late, and he was stabbed through the throat by the other rod, ending his life. Zion landed and looked at the remainder of the battle, and his heart sank, even as he watched Richard with 5 gates open snap the neck of one of the last ones. Despite the planning, the Jinchukui Tsuri just hadn't gone down easily. He watched as Raisin finished off the last one, but the Chihansu and the Knights of Justice already had nearly 100 of their own casualties. Even when they'd started with just about every possible advantage, the Jinchukui Tsuri were just that powerful. Tyler had killed many before Zion had gotten to him, and several just started destroying everything in sight once they realized things were going to hell, and took many with them to death. Raisin noticed as well, and sighed. It went as well as we could expect, considering who we were up against, but this still isn't the best sign. No, it isn't, Zion remarked. The Jinchukui Tsuri have about 400 fighting members, and we've got just over 1,000 forces left ourselves. If we lost 3-1, when we had surprise on our side and also numbers, and knew the enemy was coming, how will we fare without those advantages? It doesn't matter, we're the ones who will emerge victorious in the end, Alexis said with conviction. We will stop the Jinchukui Tsuri whatever it takes. This was a victory, and we should remember that. We paid a price for it, but it needed to be paid. Raisin nodded numbly. She was right, of course. Despite the losses and bloodshed, it was a necessary evil. The alternative, living as subhumans under the rule of tyrants, wasn't even worth considering. I'm going to start healing the wounded, she said, heading off, before Raisin grabbed her arm, and she turned back to him. Can I help? I want to learn medical ninjutsu, so we can save as many as possible in the battles to come. Alexis nodded, a firm but kind expression on her face. I'll teach you, she promised. Zion followed along, planning to use Naraka Path to fix what could be done as well. It had been a week since the defeat at the Chihansa compound, and already news spread of a traitor among the Jinchukui Tsuri and a survivor of the Rikudo clan. Kokatsu was furious and called the Shadow Corps to his throne room. A group of 13 who trained extensively in both the clan arts and in assassination, they were the only Jinchukui Tsuri with combat training who did not customarily wear condensed titanium steel armor to the battlefield, rather wearing dark clothing fit for their roles. Raisin and the Rikudo. I want their heads, unless of course Raisin can be captured alive. He needs to be made to pay for his treachery, Kokatsu said in a tone that made it clear he would not tolerate failures. The Corps nodded and shunned Shin from the room, already planning how to carry out the deed. The labor camp where the surviving Yashoryu are being kept are in this valley, Raisin said, pointing at a map with the intel long memorized in his head so that he knew as much as possible upon striking out from the clan. They are forced to mine for titanium for the armor the clan uses. There are only 5 fighters policing them. The rest are more administrative among the Jinchikwaitsuri, he spoke. As such, Alexis, under the cover of darkness, and with the speed of Sage Mode, you should be able to successfully infiltrate them and pick those 5 guards off and have nothing else to worry about otherwise. He looked up and then added, but if it does happen to occur that you do need help, we'll be waiting and ready to attack in mass. I won't need it, Alexis replied with a smirk as she got up. Trust me, I got this. Well, I certainly do trust you, Raisin conceded with a chuckle. Alexis headed off and dressed herself in dark colors. As night fell, Alexis snuck down into the valley and vaulted the wall with ease, keeping to the shadows. Soon, a Jinchikwaitsuri guard passed her by, only for her to stab him through the helmet and head with elemental infinity, killing him instantly before he could make a sound. She rushed in and caught him before he hit the ground and produced a noise, before carefully hiding him in a dark area and washing the blood away with a water jutsu, and drying the water with a fire wand to remove all traces within the lighted areas, using a Jin jutsu to conceal the momentary bright light. One down. For to go, she said to herself, before locating and moving towards the next one. Raisin, Zion, and Thomas were all in a huddle with 20 other knights. Raisin using a unique sensory jutsu along with Thomas using a standard one, while Zion watched with his Rinnegan, all seeking any sign of Alexis being in peril. Raisin's sensory jutsu worked much like sonar, one he designed to combat Zion's Limbo Hengoku. Despite those clones not being visible or hearable or even detectable by standard sensory techniques, they did still have a physical presence that could be felt by touch, though usually once they were detected by that means, it was obviously too late to avoid being pinned or hurt. Zion could produce 3 of those little buggers currently, and Raisin could attest to the fact that they were serious pains in the ass because they were supposedly immune to all but Senjutsu or Rinnegan techniques, and they couldn't even be spotted by normal means. Hence why Raisin developed his sonar sense jutsu. By sending out waves of chakra consistently, the chakra would bounce back from solid objects and cause Raisin to feel the presence of things via touch. It allowed him to sense the limbo clones of Zion, and as such, he could avoid them until Zion had to rejoin with them, as they had a time limit, and then Raisin could attack until Zion could unleash them again. The cooldown periods lasted longer the more clones he used, and the time limits were shorter, meaning using more was harder for Raisin to avoid, but it also left more time Zion was open, and that was why Raisin was usually the victor in their spars. Of course, whenever Alexis fought Zion, she just used Sage Mode and kicked the Limbo clones' asses, then kicked their original's ass once that was done. She was just that good. It was also what saved them that day, as the sonar sense picked up something invisible to Thomas's jutsu, and Zion was looking the wrong way. Look out! Raisin shouted, moving to the back of the line, and producing a small number of black holes in front of him, and not a moment too soon, as a Quasar smashed into them, and he barely held them up, grunting as he struggled to absorb the brunt of the insanely strong blast. The source of the Quasar was a figure shrouded in black, using a black hole. And there was another from a different angle, from the left flank of the camp, and this figure had a second one prepared. Zion spotted him in time, however, and blasted the black hole back into its owner with a stupidly powered Shinra Tensei, causing the Quasar to go off and vaporize the one who'd been about to fire it. The first one, about to overwhelm Raisin with his own Quasar, was stripped of his victory when Raisin somehow managed to unseal a claymore and launched it upwards with what concentration he could spare, before guiding it down via gravity, and bisected his opponent. The other 20 knights, led by Thomas, had scattered and were ready to jump in and help, but relaxed as it turned out to not be needed. However, Raisin looked back at the labor camp in the distance in a major panic and took off full tilt. Raisin? Zion asked in shock, not knowing what Raisin was doing, but immediately moving to follow after him, knowing something had scared Raisin and was making him desperately tear his way to the labor camp, and he knew he could very well be needing some help. Alexis had just killed the 4th guard when she felt another chakra presence, a faint one, and turned to it, and her eyes widened in terror. No, please no, she cried out, charging for it, for the Jinchikwaitsuri preparing a Quasar, but not with her, as its target, the shrouded man, was aiming for the buildings the Yashoryu prisoners slept in. Balder, one of the Shadow Corps, had split off from the main group with 2 others, planning to avoid detection easier with smaller numbers to murder Raisin and Zion. When they tracked them down here, however, they'd realized what Raisin and Zion wanted: to liberate the Yashoryu for their rebellion, and already, the guards are almost all killed. Deciding to deny the enemy any hope of their prize, Balder went into the camp and was just about to vaporize it. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a blur coming at him, and smirked as he realized the assassin that was taking out the guards was now desperately trying to stop him. But in doing so, she'd made a fatal mistake. She had exposed herself. Alexis was mere feet away from the Shadow Corps member when she felt the gravitational force around her yank her back. To her dismay, the remaining guard had spotted her and was using his gravity manipulation to deny her from being able to save her kin. Time seemed to slow for Alexis as the Quasar was complete, and she sailed backwards towards the extended blade of the guard. Gritting her teeth, she did something desperate. She threw elemental infinity, aiming for the black hole that was the source of the Quasar, praying that it would hit on time before, with speed and dexterity few would expect, twisted her body to flip over the blade of the guard, and then grabbed the blade to propel herself with, using chakra in her hands to minimize the cutting the blade would do to them, and got behind the armored guard. Elemental infinity struck the black hole the instant before the Quasar could be discharged, and completely succeeded in destabilizing the whole thing, ensuring it would blow rather than be a concentrated beam that would wipe out the living quarters the Ishoryu were currently in. Baldur's eyes widened as he realized he had a fraction of a second to save himself, and leapt back, forming as many black holes as he could on the fly to absorb the blast he would otherwise be taking dead on. Baldur, however, he'd managed to spare himself all but a few burns and scrapes, and turned to her before approaching menacingly with a dagger, intent on ending her life. Raisin went as fast as he could manage, even sealing his armor for all possible speed, and soon Alexis and the Shadow Corps member were in view, but with a sinking heart, he could tell he'd be too late, even as he poured enough chakra into his legs to tear the muscles to try to make it in time. The dagger was raised to end it, and Raisin was too far to make it in. He was suddenly struck by an unseen force from behind, which launched him exponentially faster as the Shadow Corps member swung his arm down. And just before it could pierce Alexis's heart, he felt himself yanked away by the gravitational force of a Jinchukwatsuri technique. As Raisin was now close enough to do so, and before the man could react, he was impaled by Raisin's gladius as the young man slammed into him, and they crashed heavily to the ground. Baldur died in seconds from the shock of the wound, and Raisin, wheezing all the while, rolled onto his back, utterly spent. Inquisitively, he turned his head and saw Zion a fair distance away, panting slightly with an arm extended and a thumb up, cheesy grin and all. Raisin couldn't help it. He grinned too, thanks to that Shinra Tensei of Zion's propelling him. He'd managed to save Alexis's life. Say something if you're still alive, he casually requested of Alexis. Ow. Alexis moaned. You're not kidding. You all right? Raisin asked, still panting himself. I hurt like hell all over. But I think I'll live, she chuckled before yelping. It hurts to laugh. Raisin groaned as he sat up. Who were those guys? He wondered. Shouldn't you know? You're the Jinchukwatsuri here. She inquired. Well, yeah, but this was clearly above my pay grade to know, he said defensively. I can't know all the classified information on my clan, you know, he pouted. If I had to guess, though, this has all the markings of a group of elite assassins who answered directly to the clan head, possibly even my father. And I'm guessing that either Zion or I, possibly both, probably most likely actually were their target. Lovely, Alexis sighed, and then hissed in pain. Hurts to sigh, too. Want to bet on whether there are more than just those three? Only an idiot would take that bet, Raisin said flatly. Great, so you're taking it then? Alexis snarked. Huh, was Raisin's sarcastic retort. Zion quickly ran up, wheezing a bit from the sprinting, and asked, Are you guys okay? They both groaned painfully in response. Do you guys need healing? He asked further. They both simply turned silent stares at him, as if asking him what the hell his first clue was, their questioning of his intelligence easily read in their eyes. You're right, that is a stupid question, Zion admitted, before calling forth the King of Hell to patch them up. A few minutes later, Raisin was stretching out along with Alexis. Phew, that whole affair was pretty crazy. Raisin chuckled, glad to be alive with Alexis. You said it rusty, things almost went to hell right there. Rusty? Raisin asked indignantly. Your armor's starting to creak at the joints when you move in it now. Haven't you noticed? When was the last time you oiled it? Since I left the clan? Raisin asked. I think it was a little before that. Haven't had the time, though. Honestly, if it weren't for titanium steel's corrosion resistance, it would have started to rust sooner now that you mention it. Alexis snorted, and Zion then said, Everyone else is cleaning up the administrative group that were here. Maybe take some prisoners. They won't, Raisin grunted. My clan has firm laws about being taken alive by an enemy. They'll kill themselves before they can be captured. Regardless, we've liberated your people, Alexis, Zion laughed, and then added, even a few fighters from your clan will be a strong asset in our struggle. All right then, Zion, Rusty, let's go meet up with them. Alexis said cheerfully, causing Raisin to sigh as he resigned himself to his new nickname. That's not going away, is it? He asked no one in particular, though Zion answered for him, Nope, don't think so. About 30 members of the Ishoryu were still alive, and 12 of them were prepared to fight in the rebellion. after they'd recovered from being malnourished and beaten, as the Jinchuriki had not been kind to them in the slightest. Raisin met with Alexis's younger brother, nice fellow by the name of Jacob, strong enough to be a decent fighter too, though Alexis refused to let him be a part of it. She'd already lost her parents to the Jinchuriki, so it was very much understandable, even if Jacob was upset about it. But they moved on and avoided being followed for the time being by the Jinchuriki and made it back to Freehaven without issue. They spent a few days in mourning, paying respects to those who had already lost their lives in the recent conflicts, and Raisin swore to make their sacrifices mean something. Thus, he continued his training in earnest, pushing himself even harder than before. Zion, Alexis, and many others in the Knights of Justice had much the same idea. Of course, Raisin still could not beat Alexis one-on-one. In fact, he was pretty sure the gap just kept widening. Freaking OP sword of hers being used for extra solid clone training gave her a massive edge in terms of learning and improving. Regardless, he plowed onward, and the two were growing closer. Years passed, and the Knights of Justice continued their struggle against the Jinchuriki, usually with guerrilla tactics rather than open combat, as matching the raw power of that clan was an exercise in folly and bound to result in getting killed. They chipped away at the enemy forces at every opportunity. But each opportunity would come at a price, and they always took more casualties than the Jinchuriki clan did, which is why it was a good thing they outnumbered them, but regardless, it was still hard losing so many comrades. And of course, it was only a matter of time before Raisin would lose one who was particularly close to him. Raisin numbly stumbled into his room, his armor coated in blood, not all of it his, nor all of it his enemies on the Jinchuriki side, nor the blood of his comrades who also sought to free the Elder Dimension from the grip of the clan he had come from. It was a mix of all three. How had he failed? He'd been right there, and yet he hadn't been able to save Thomas's life. Thomas, always the jokester, able to defuse tension with a joke, and kept things lighthearted, even when things were getting dark. And Raisin had been powerless to save him, torn asunder by one Jinchuriki that had caught him in a gravity field, too fast for him to stop. If he'd reacted quicker when he heard Thomas's first scream, he might have been able to, but by the time he'd turned, all he'd been able to do was avenge his comrade, and it just wasn't enough. Killing the member of his clan that killed Thomas just couldn't bring him back. Raisin dumped his helmet on the floor unceremoniously and sat down on his bed, burying his face in his hands. How long had it been since he and the other Knights of Justice declared war on the tyrants taking over their home? Raisin was sure it had been only a few months before they started fighting back, and already they had lost so much. He looked up as there was a knock on the door, and he said, "Come in." Alexis entered the room. "Raisin, how are you feeling?" she asked him. Not well at all." "You heard, didn't you? So it's true then." "We lost Thomas today," Alexis inquired, a look of sadness evident on her face. "I was there. I was right there, and I couldn't save him," Raisin nearly whispered, a tear starting to run down his cheek. "It's my fault. If it weren't for me, we wouldn't be fighting. No one would be dying in battle. Is fighting the Jinchuriki really worth this bloodshed?" he asked. "It is," Alexis insisted. "It's our choice to fight, Raisin. The only thing you and Zion change is our odds of victory. You two are the heads of this whole rebellion, and this rebellion is the Elder Dimension's chance of being free." "But what about those who are not combatants themselves?" Raisin protested. "Some of them have died as well, through no fault or choices of their own. They were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. What gives us the right to endanger them? What gives the Jinchuriki the right to oppress them? Or to oppress us?" Alexis asked, causing Raisin to slump at the point. "Look, I get it. You know that continuing is only going to continue spilling blood, but we have to keep going. This is just the price of freedom, even if people die as a result. I feel like the same helpless 6-year-old that couldn't even defend himself against his abusive sister I was 15 years ago." Raisin admitted, "This world, those without power are left to suffer at the hands of those who do have it. I hate that so much." Alexis walked over to Raisin, knelt in front of him, and embraced him, careless of the blood he was covered in. "You're right. This world is screwed up. But while it might not be the perfect world, it's still our world. And it's worth fighting for. We can't let those tyrants enslave it and rob it of the things that make it ours. I already made up my mind. I'm going to keep fighting at your side. You aren't alone, Raisin." Raisin had remained still while Alexis spoke. Once she had finished, he wordlessly returned the embrace. For several seconds, they maintained the hug, before finally breaking apart. "Thank you," Raisin told her in a whisper. She nodded and said, "No matter what, I'm always here for you." She turned and exited the room. Raisin removed the rest of his armor and went to clean up before turning in for the night. He would keep going. He owed it to the people already lost. Raisin left Freehaven for a bit, heading for the wilderness for some personal training. A few of his comrades had cautioned him, since several times the Shadow Corps had made attempts on his and Zion's life, and were now down 2 more members as a result, but he had little worries. After a few weeks, he'd come back, having found an ancient summoning contract belonging to a race of creatures called Spinegras, a species similar to crocodiles, but with spiky exoskeletons. It had been thought lost, but Raisin had found it, and of course signed it. Sadly, the Spinegras had no Sage mode, unlike Alexis's dragons. And it turned out that Zion had gained a summoning scroll of his own, one for snakes, which opened the possibility of him learning Senjutsu later down the line. Raisin had naturally been disappointed that his find was now seeming far less significant when compared to Zion and Alexis's contracts. He did find it funny, though, that all 3 of them had reptilian summons. What do you even need a summoning contract for anyway? He asked Zion at one point. You've got the animal path already. Well, I would like my summons to have a will of their own, Zion said. Besides, Sage mode, if and when I get the time to learn it, will be freaking awesome. It'd give me a leg up on you. Can't rely on my Rinnegan entirely. Raisin grumbled slightly at the reminder that his own familiars couldn't teach him Senjutsu. Richard came into the room they'd been chatting in. Guys, the Shikokyo clans fall into the Jinchukui Itsuri, though there are survivors. Same as usual? Zion nodded grimly. Their usual course of action was to locate as many survivors as possible and bring them to Freehaven to be given shelter and possibly recruitment into the Knights of Justice, depending on whether they could be fighters and whether they were willing to take on their oppressors. Other than frontline fighting, Alexis specialized in that, as she looked hard and far and had her dragons in Sage mode to search with sensory abilities and from an aerial viewpoint. I'll send Alexis out with the search parties then, Richard replied, and headed out to do just that. Raisin got up and stretched a little and said, well, while she's doing that, why don't we enjoy ourselves a little spar? You can't train too much. Actually, you can. It's called overexerting, Zion pointed out. Oh, shut up and let's go, Raisin said, rolling his eyes. Smartass. Zion laughed and followed Raisin. A young Shikokyo boy was crying as he contemplated his lost parents, lost in a desolated field. He stiffened and looked in fear as he heard someone approaching him slowly from behind, but relaxed when he saw it was one of the good guys, a woman with long green hair and warm red eyes, though said eyes also hinted at a ferocious nature. Are you one of the Knights of Justice? The boy asked. Alexis smiled at the boy and said, it never ceases to amaze me just how famous we've gotten, but yes, I am. Do you need shelter? The boy nodded and took Alexis's offered hand. I'm Liam, he said. Alexis replied, taking him to the back of her dragon steed to head back to Freehaven. Neither of the two realized that there was a tracking seal hidden on Liam Shikokyo's person. The Jinchukui Itsuri had in fact caught him earlier and placed the seal on him. And of course, they wiped his memories with the Pulse Imprint Jutsu. Apparently, they were pretty sick of not knowing where the Knights of Justice's base was. Not for lack of trying, the Shadow Corps had tried a couple times to track them back, but despite concealing their chakra with potent seals, Raisin Sonar Sense had foiled such attempts, as well as 2 other assassination tries, which had reduced the group to 3 members, plus their leader. But even the prideful Jinchukui Itsuri could change their tactics from time to time. It just took a lot of living up to the definition of insanity to make them do. For fuck's sake, Raisin, you can do this. Raisin thought frantically to himself. You fought other Jinchukui Itsuri that outnumbered you before and won, and you foiled several assassination attempts by those so-called Shadow Corps. Why is asking a girl out so damn hard? That's it, I'm going to go up and ask her to go on a date, Raisin decided, Alexis and the rest of the search party having returned with several Shikokyo, a few even willing to fight, the previous day. As he was furiously psyching himself up to finally try to act on the feelings he had developed for the insanely strong Yashoryu, she was walking by, and he decided to act. Hey, Alexis, you have a moment? He asked, his tone awkward as hell. Alexis paused and turned an eye on him. Yes, and I was going to spend it on something rusty, so I'd best get to that, she remarked, deliberately screwing with him over the fact that he hadn't asked her to spare that moment on him, much like those annoying old people who wait for you to ask the question again in the technically correct manner, while answering the first attempt at the question in a manner that answers the literal wording of the question, but not the intended meaning. Can you spare that moment on me? Raisin grumbled, making a mental note to try and get Alexis to spend less time with some of the older folks of Freehaven. She giggled at him. All right, fine. I'll spare you a moment, Rusty, she replied with a chortle. Raisin continued, his face slowly gaining more color as he tried to speak. Well, lovely weather we're having, he said awkwardly, trying to stall, cursing himself for talking about the freaking weather. How cliché could he get? Raisin, it's raining cats and dogs outside the caves right now. Have you been out? Alexis asked bluntly, making Raisin curse himself even more fervently than before. Well, I like the rain, Raisin said sheepishly. Well, so do I, from in here. Was that all you wanted to say? She asked. For the love of God, Raisin, just take the damn plunge. Why is this so difficult? Did some deity think it'd be funny to put a mind-scrambling genjutsu in the minds of all males in this situation? Because if this is some sick joke, I'm not laughing. Raisin cleared his throat and opened his mouth to say something, and then closed it, and then he opened it again. This time he managed to get out a strangled croak. You need me to give you a checkup? You seem sick. Will you go to another week? Raisin asked rapidly. Then he wished he could sew his own mouth shut. He'd said it so fast that he doubted even she could have processed. Yes, she said simply. Wait, what? You caught that? He asked, caught off guard. No. But I knew what you were going to ask, and decided it wasn't fun watching you squirm anymore. How did you know? He questioned. How couldn't I? You have any idea how cliché your approach was? Alexis replied, while sticking her tongue out. Raisin grumbled something about having known, just having had nothing better. I could tell your intentions the moment you started talking about the weather when I knew you haven't been outside. And you even failed to realize I was fucking with you when I mentioned it was raining, when it is in fact warm and sunny, confirming you were trying to stall for something by bringing up the weather. It did not exactly take a genius to figure it out. Raisin slumped. Was I that easy to read? He asked simply. Like an open book, she mercilessly replied. So then, we hit the town outside of Freehaven? Raisin nodded. Good. Though I should warn you, the only restaurants there with decent food are expensive. I hope you've been doing enough odd jobs outside the base in your free time to pay for dinner, she said cheerfully. Raisin simply laughed as he hooked an arm around Alexis's, and they headed out, Raisin mentally celebrating the fact that they were officially about to become an item. So long as he didn't do something retarded and screw this up. And then after that thought occurred to him, the nerves returned in full force, trying to trip him up again, and causing him to once again mentally roar in rage at whatever deity decided to screw with the male population of the world like this. What had they done to deserve this kind of trouble? Seemingly not noticing their stalkers, the two left the base, and Zion, Richard, and Liam were laughing as they spied on the couple. Love is in the air tonight, the young Shikokyo laughed. Wonder if we can get any embarrassing photos of them without them realizing, Richard suggested. I still wonder why she would go out with Raisin over me. Zion grumbled good-naturedly. What's he got that I don't? As Richard shrugged, Liam then asked, a date tonight? Richard then began trying very hard not to laugh loud enough to give away their presence as Zion, a little less concerned with trying to avoid detection as he was just figuratively burned, began trying to comically strangle the kid. How long are we going to pretend to ignore those three idiots? Raisin asked Alexis as they entered the somewhat fancy restaurant. Right until we are nearby the woman's bathing houses in this village, Alexis remarked. Seriously, Raisin and Alexis were always on guard for other reasons, and they had sensory ninjutsu. How could they not sense their followers? Then we have clones of ourselves disguise themselves as them, and make it look like they were peeping and lure them to the actual three before dispelling, and then we watch the fireworks. Harsh and so evil. I like it, Raisin sniggered. As they ordered their meals, Alexis said, it's rather funny. What is? Just how close we have gotten. You and me, especially considering what happened between our families. They might be my blood, but the Jinchukui Itsuri are not my family, Raisin stated a little heatedly. My family is right here with the rest of Freehaven. That's so cheesy, Alexis teased him. Shut it. I never said that was a bad thing. Oh, they pretended to ignore the three idiots for a while longer, though about an hour later, near a certain bathhouse, there were soon screams of pain and for mercy. And Raisin and Alexis continued their date unabated, though clearly in very good moods at this point. How about it? Want to try getting smashed? Alexis asked as they approached a bar. I don't know. It'd render us a bit vulnerable, wouldn't it? Raisin replied, leery of the potential issues getting drunk could possibly cause. On the other hand, they had never tried alcohol before, and the thought of trying it was proving rather tempting. They had focused so much on the war, this was the first time they had even really tried to unwind in ages. Hey, it's not like we'll drink so much that we'll actually handicap ourselves. Let's live a little, Alexis assured him, and they both decided. What the hell? How drunk could they get? What the hell happened to you guys? Raisin slurred as he and Alexis, both drunk off their asses, staggered back into the base. Zion, Richard, and Liam had beaten them back, which despite their head start, and the time Alexis and Raisin had spent at the bear was quite the feat, due to the massive bodily trauma they were currently suffering, all of them in comical full body casts, though Liam was the least heavily bandaged. Apparently, being the youngest of the three caused some of the enraged women to go a little easy on him. We could ask you the same question, Richard grumped. What the hell were you guys doing? Oh, you little speesh hick didn't know? Alexis asked. We decided, hick, to go out drinking. All right, of course she hick. They wouldn't know. Raisin chuckled as he leaned against the wall. We got rid of hick them before then. That bathhouse plan was brilliant. They weren't supposed to know about that, Alexis admonished him as the three, realizing who was now responsible for their recent pain and suffering, slowly approached them, cracking their knuckles, the full body cast somehow instantly gone. Oh, well, fuck us, Raisin slurred as the three attacked, Zion going for Alexis, and the other two pounding on Raisin. And that was the only time Zion could claim a one-on-one victory against Alexis, though Alexis from that day onward refused to count it. Afterwards, the two woke up with monster hangovers and swore never to drink again. A resolution that lasted a grand total of 2 days before they both got hammered together again. The remaining members of the Knights of Justice, meanwhile, had been exchanging money in the background after finding out that they'd hooked up. The things betting pools were so often based on were pretty damn stupid at times. There had been no warning. It had been 3 weeks since he and Alexis had started going out, and it had been a happy 3 weeks, which had culminated in them getting married in a private ceremony. And then the Jinchukwayetsuri attacked in force. 180 hardened warriors, all led by Damien himself, with Sark among them, all started a major assault on the cave system that was Freehaven. Black holes and quasars alike were blasting through the ceiling barriers that formed the first lines of defense, already allowing the Jinchukwayetsuri into the caverns with the stalactites. And despite how defensible the base was, it had one major flaw: there was no escape route to speak of. As such, the only way out was through the forces besieging them. Well, it would be a siege if the gravity users had bothered to try waiting out the defenders, but this was instead an all-out assault. 450 Knights of Justice able to fight, 600 non-combatants having sought shelter against 150 insanely powerful warriors with a downright broken bloodline, with the 450 having home field advantage. And it was still considered a situation where victory was uncertain, especially with one of their better fighters out of the picture. And of course, evacuating the civilians had to take priority. Thus, Raisin and Alexis took the field, cursing the fact that Zion wasn't here the moment he'd gone with that giant white snake sage, Tokara, to learn the sage arts just a few days ago, and it was highly doubtful he would be back anytime soon. How had they found a base? He'd made sure none of the clan had ever gotten even close to the entrance with every operation, which left a mole. But who could possibly consider ratting them out? They should know that the Jinchukwayetsuri would treat them no better. In fact, they would almost certainly kill the mole themselves, rewarding them as a traitor deserved. Pretty much everyone was aware that was the case with that clan. They'd kill anyone at the smallest excuse, assuming that they even needed one. Could they have managed to trick someone? Richard was already leading an organized counterattack to the best of his abilities, but his first response forces were outnumbered, and losing 4 for every Jinchukwayetsuri they managed to cut down. However, Richard was not going down easily, using his masterful taijutsu to dart in and out of the enemy ranks, with 6 of the 8 inner gates already opened, as well as throwing massive steel balls with deadly force. Alexis cut down a member of the clan, before finding herself on the defensive as 3 sought to retaliate, and they were using every dirty trick in the book to keep her on the defensive. 5 moved in after him, forcing him to defend as well, though it was clearly obvious that he was even more at a disadvantage than Alexis. The idiot still thought he was the bigger threat among the two, just because he shared blood with them. Oh, how he absolutely hated their arrogance, and not just because of the position it put him in. Alexis fired off a fire and wind-style dragon simultaneously, both of them merging and bearing down on one of her assailants, but they were both absorbed into a black hole, only for the intended victim to fall prey to an earth dragon from underground, leaving it 2-on-1, Alexis giving ground. Raisin, despite his superior skills, was being overwhelmed by the numbers his opponents presented, and he took a stab in the shoulder even as he managed to decapitate one of his enemies. Grunting in pain, he staggered back. Even so, he punched a second one away and used his power to bring down a stalactite, forcing 2 others to dodge, earning himself some distance. He then sent a black hole of his own to intercept the second one from one of his assailants, but was then smashed to the ground when a second one dashed behind him and punched him hard in the back of his helmet. He managed to roll on his back and kicked his opponent's legs out from under him, and with his gravity manipulation, he pulled a boulder from the rubble of that stalactite from earlier to them and crushed his enemy. However, he was almost stabbed for his trouble as his 2 assailants that had dodged that stalactite rejoined the other remaining enemy, bringing their blades down from above, and Raisin could block 2 at the most in the limited time frame he had, but had no time to dodge any of them. Luckily, Richard dashed in and kicked one of them away, fatally snapping her neck in the process. This allowed Raisin to move his own claymore, blocking the other two, though he only deflected one blade away enough to cause it to graze his side, cutting his armor in the process, rather than impaling his liver, though it was still a far from fatal wound. He then blasted one of them up and impaled him on one of the still hanging stalactites. Thanks for the assist, he shouted to Richard as the taijutsu master managed to catch his remaining enemy's claymore between his two hands, tearing it from his foe's grip. Not a problem, he replied as his panicking foe sent a Burakuru at him, but he'd already moved, making it only hit an afterimage, and then he slammed his foot into the back of the enemy, igniting the air with the friction of the attack, and sending the poor fool flying into the cave wall, having combusted from the attack. Their spirits were then both lifted as they saw that not only had Alexis finished off her remaining two enemies, but several more Knights of Justice had organized and entered the part of the cavern the fighting was in. Everyone fall back, Raisin ordered, and they retreated to the edge of the cavern, the Jinshu Koyatsuri being emboldened by their apparently retreating enemies, and they pressed forward, Damien at their lead. Bring them all down, Raisin then ordered, and Damien's eyes widened as he realized too late what was about to happen. Everyone fall back, he ordered, but the cavern ceiling was already trembling as a seal went off, causing the remaining stalactites to come crashing down, along with plenty of rubble from the ceiling upon the advancing enemy. Damien and most of the forces were quick enough to create several Burakuru above their heads in time to suck up most of the rock, as well as some of the more skilled members being able to cover a comrade or two, which meant the Gambit only killed 6 of the enemy and injured about 14. However, that wasn't all Raisin had in mind, because while the roof was coming down, except over the Knights of Justice's heads since they'd retreated to a safer area, many of them were forming hand signs. Fire! Raisin shouted, and they all launched their respective elemental ninjutsu at the massive enemies. Alexis contributing a heck of a lot of fire and wind-style dragons, fired rapidly with several solid clones, and a massive amount of jutsu surged forward, and the Jinshu Koyatsuri clan were mostly still occupied with trying to keep the roof off their heads with their Burakuru, and did not have enough focus to use multiple of that jutsu in more than one direction at a time, meaning the mass of jutsu slammed into their front lines, with only a few of them able to do much about it. Even so, most of them were still wearing solid titanium steel armor, and while for many it was not enough to save them, it kept the jutsus from gaining as much ground as Raisin would have liked, but it still resulted in 26 dead Jinshu Koyatsuri, and many more injuries. Damien, one of the many survivors unfortunately, grinned as he and his forces prepared their counterattack. Quasis, fire now, he roared. Sure enough, with plenty of matter and energy gathered in the Burakuru that the Jinshu Koyatsuri had used to protect themselves, they had plenty of power to unleash their retaliation upon the Knights of Justice. Earth-style Earthwall, Alexis and her clone shouted, creating several layered sage-powered rock walls, but even those would barely slow the incoming mass of energy down, which is why several other knights quickly added their own walls to the mix, and Raisin stood right behind the walls and in front of the knights, taking a deep breath. At that moment, over 120 concentrated beams of energy, each one capable of at least injuring boss summons, impacted the first wall, and in less than a tenth of a second, reached the last barrier, and Raisin's hand shot up. With a roar of exertion, he produced 74 Burakuru, which all moved to intercept the blast, and began absorbing it. Raisin grunted, blood flooding out of his nose with the amount of concentration it was costing him, several veins bulging. 48 Burakuru was the most anyone in his clan was ever recorded being able to create and sustain, that record being held by Kokatsu himself. Making 43 was Raisin's usual limit at his current level, but with how much he was pushing himself this time, he was able to almost double it, though the strain was considerable to understate it. Raisin, stop, you'll kill yourself, Alexis shouted at him. Raisin simply grunted as 6 of his black holes winked out, and he fell to a knee as he struggled to maintain the remaining 68 long enough to hold back the mass Quasa. If I don't stop this, we're all dead, he retorted, forcing 3 more Burakuru into existence. I won't let that happen, even if it kills me. The Quasa beam intensified as Raisin spoke, clearly being added to when several other Jinshu Koyatsuri were able to create Burakuru to fire off Quasas, even relatively weak ones since they had little time to gather matter for the beams. Still, it was enough to give Raisin a far harder time with trying to protect his friends. Rara, he shouted as he dug deep within himself, and another Burakuru formed, but his vision was starting to go dim, and he and his black holes were starting to slide back, the entire cave system starting to rumble. His chakra was running out fast, and he had seconds left if he could even block the Quasa that long. With a final roar, he unleashed the energy he'd gathered thus far, switching from the defensive power of the Burakuru he'd created to his own massive Quasa, which pushed back the enemies, and after a final second of struggle, his surge forward, and the Jinchukui Tsuri, incapable of creating enough more Burakuru to defend themselves, lurched away desperately as Raisin's Quasa cut through and blasted a hole through the cavern walls and out into daylight. Wheezing, Raisin collapsed and looked blearily at Alexis. "Get them! All out of here, whatever it takes," he whispered before everything went dark. Alexis nodded and ordered forward. The Knights of Justice, having all arrived at this point, charged the now disorganized enemy. Richard generally used his hit and run tactics to do some damage or put an enemy off balance, while most other Knights of Justice were trying to keep their distances, which was hard when Jinchukui Tsuri could use gravity manipulation to pull you to them. The clones Alexis made earlier moved in and fought, though they were taken out rather fast, taking down 2 more members of the Jinchukui Tsuri. Alexis dashed forth herself and stabbed at Damien, who was just barely able to avoid the deadly blade she wielded. You're that Yashoryu girl that escaped with elemental infinity," Damien growled. "My name is Alexis Yashoryu," she growled back, getting into her stance. "You killed my father and most of my clan. Prepare to die," she finished, not wasting too many words on this fool. Both of them charged each other, and their blades started colliding. Damien deflected elemental infinity, hitting the side rather than blocking head-on, and having his own weapon sliced clean through as a result, and said, "Did you really think I'd forgotten how to fight that sword that can cut through almost anything?" "No, never," Alexis replied, jumping back to avoid a counterblow, biting her thumb, and with one hand cast 5 hand seals. "Summoning Jutsu," she roared, slamming her palm to the ground. A cloud of smoke filled that part of the very spacious cavern, and Damien's eyes widened, and he quickly formed multiple black holes, blocking multiple elemental blasts that very nearly impacted him as a result. When the smoke cleared, a bright yellow dragon was revealed, and Alexis was forming even more hand seals to fire off more Jutsu, and fire them off she did. In fact, this time, she had sheathed elemental infinity into the ground, made the hand seals for a fire-style attack, and a wind-style one at the same time with each hand. Simultaneously, a rather large wind and fire dragon bullet jutsu, both empowered by Sage Mode, formed, and when Alexis's summon fired off a massive stream of lightning at Damien, the 2 elemental dragon bullets twisted around it and fused into it, resulting in a pure white boss summon size dragon bullet of pure heat bearing down on Damien, who was sweating just for being in close proximity of it. In fact, his skin was blistering. "Sage Art's solar style," Alexis shouted, directing the beast at Damien with all the power she could muster. "Solar Dragon Flare." Damien cursed at seeing the Kekii Tota of an obscure clan known as the Yamada from one of the lesser dimensions, the solar-style Kekii Tota, which combined the elements of, you guessed it, fire, wind, and lightning. He thought it was a bloodline, but clearly it was like Dust Style in that it could be learned if one had the drive and talent, which Alexis had long since established she did. It was too big and fast to just blast away with a gravity burst, or to dodge. And on the subject of dodging, he had a group of Jinchukui Tsuri fighting from a distance against the Knights of Justice that would be right in the monstrosity's path if he did dodge, or hell, even if he didn't. So he created as many Burakuru as he could manage, which was about 50, his usual limit 38, and began trying to absorb the entirety of that monster of a jutsu. Luckily, despite the massive power of the blast, it was a short one, and it only needed a brief struggle on Damien's part to stop, despite losing more than half his black holes within that instant. His nose was bleeding profusely, however, and his armor was glowing red from the heat of the blast on the outside. The heat on the inside about less than half as hot, having stopped most of the heat, but some convection had resulted in the inside surfaces of the armor heating to uncomfortable levels, which resulted in badly burning him, at least second-degree burning at the moment, but he was still very capable of fighting. Frowning, he glared at Alexis, and merged the remaining 17 black holes into one, prepared to fire a massive Quasa, his own traitorous son, that surviving Rikudo. Damien realized at that moment that they were both formidable, but this girl here was by far the biggest threat to his clan's cause. He absolutely could not afford to let her live. Her summon quickly fired another blast of lightning, but not at his enlarged black hole, but at the ceiling, clearly attempting to drop even more rubble on his head, causing him to snarl and move the black hole over his head, absorbing that matter too, even as the jutsu was starting to destabilize. Combining Burakuru was a risky move, as while it created a stronger one, and with more overall power than some of the original ones, it simply couldn't be sustained for long in such a form, making it impractical as a defense. While Damien was defending, Alexis charged, grabbing her sword as she went, and she circled around to get Damien's back as he tried to blast her back with a gravity burst, which was dodged in the same circling movement. However, as she stabbed forward, Damien moved the black hole between them, turning around with a smirk as he did. If elemental infinity hit it, it'd destabilize and vanish, but Damien had no intention of letting that happen. even if firing off the Quasa would mean hitting his own kinsmen as well, having noticed Alexis's circle around having put her between him and them. Seriously, did she honestly think that would be enough to make him hesitate? If he was still underestimating her, it would have been, but after her recent stunt, his determination to kill her today had solidified. Of course, there was still the matter of the summon behind him, but without looking as it charged him, he formed another Burha and sent it at the beast. With that, he blasted the Quasa right before elemental infinity could destroy its source, and seemingly vaporize the girl, and 14 of his own kind, simultaneously forcing the summon to dispel as the Burha hit it. A fair trade in his mind at this point. Only for his eyes to widen as the tip of elemental infinity emerged from his chest, having entered his body through his back, even his sturdy armor proving to be like butter as the blade impaled him. He choked up blood and slowly looked down at the point of the blade as his blood slid off of it, dripping onto the ground. His left lung had been punctured, and his heart was impaled. Hey, Chow, your clones were all beaten, and I was sure you never had a chance to make another. Even when you were briefly covered by that summoned smoke cloud, you were instead firing additional elemental attacks at me. You're right, I never made another clone. I never had to. But you were too slow in taking out my summon. That charge it took at your back. It wasn't for the sake of attacking you from behind, Alexis replied. Damien's eyes widened. Reverse. Summoning. Exactly. Just before you fired that large Quasa, I was reverse summoned at the moment you had struck my summon and forced it back to its realm. And now it's over. With a metallic scrape, Alexis slid her blade free of Damien's chest, causing him to choke up more blood before he fell. Curse. You. Damien said weakly. I did it. Alexis sighed as Damien collapsed, dead before he even fully hit the ground. My father and mother, my clan, I finally avenged them. Strangely, it didn't feel as satisfying as she had hoped, now that a goal she had long strived for had finally been accomplished. There was some dark satisfaction, yes, but not nearly enough to cover up a sense of loss of some of her purpose, a sense of finality. She also hoped Raisin wouldn't hold his father's death against her, though she rather doubted he would. Revenge on the side, or not, it had to be done for obvious reasons. It was at that moment that she was truly glad that she had not lived solely for vengeance, that she had other things to keep her going, assuming she survived today, because, even as she was contemplating, she had briefly forgotten that she was in the middle of a battle. Father. Alexis heard a woman scream, followed by being hit like a ton of bricks by an armored fist that plowed her right into the ground, elemental infinity flying free from her grip, too far to grab. Sure enough, Raisin's sister, Sarka, had joined the fray. She hadn't seen the entirety of Alexis's fight with Damien, having been occupied with her own battles, so she thought Alexis killing Damien had been a fluke and was thus still underestimating her. Not that it was mattering at the moment. Alexis hadn't been paying attention and was now pretty badly stunned by Sarka's punch. Sarka pinned Alexis and began punching her, knocking a tooth free in the process. She further used her gravity manipulation to make herself heavier, so Alexis, even in sage mode, was unable to muster the strength to throw her assailant off, and every time she started to try forming one-handed seals, another hit to the face broke her concentration. Frankly, if she had not been in sage mode, enhancing her durability, her face would have been caved in already. Desperately, Alexis fired off a sealless fire-style attack right into Sarka's face, but even sage-powered, all Sarka had to do was momentarily cover her face with one armored arm, and the attack was nowhere near strong enough to damage that armor, nor did it buy Alexis enough time to make enough seals to get off a more powerful attack before Sarka's fist came down again. Why had she been stupid enough to let her guard down for even a moment, especially in the middle of a pitched battle like this one? Die, you bitch! Sarka roared, breaking Alexis's nose with a hammer blow. Alexis's vision was starting to blur as her struggles weakened. Sarka then drew one of her shorter blades, a gladius like Raisin tended to favor in close combat, and raised it to deliver the final blow, and Alexis closed her eyes, awaiting it. It never came. Just as Sarka started to bring the blade down, a heavy blow struck her, sending her flying back with a look of surprise, crashing through a fallen stalactite. Richard, with 7 of the 8 inner gates open, had just joined that part of the fray. He scooped her up and rushed them to a hidden alcove. Alexis coughed a bit, grabbed her loose tooth, and looked at Richard. Am I ever glad to see you? She said. Yeah, well, I'm pretty much needed in. Well, about everywhere now, so don't get too excited. Alexis turned, and her heart sank as she saw many of her comrades rapidly getting overwhelmed. They were fighting hard, but the clan they were up against was just too powerful to fight in these circumstances without outnumbering them by a wider margin than they actually did. For every Jinchikwe Tsuri that went down now on average, about 6 Knights of Justice joined them. And what was worse, there was still no opening to stage a decent retreat, especially with all the non-combatants that needed to be evacuated. One of the few positions that remained strong for now was, thankfully, the one with multiple knights fighting to protect the unconscious Raisin, but it didn't look like he would wake up anytime soon, not after that stunt that put him under in the first place, and it'd be even longer before he could do anything useful again. Yeah, bad news wherever you look. I guess this is the end for our resistance group then, Alexis chuckled humorlessly. What say we at least go down fighting though? I can get the opening needed to get everyone out, Richard said then, stepping back towards the bulk of the fighting. Are you out of your mind? You're strong enough to keep up with Raisin and Zion. Even me, if only a little, but you don't stand a chance against that many. Hell, even if you were only trying to hold them off, you would at most be able to last a decent amount of time against 10 of them. Alexis replied, getting up as she healed up her face as much as she could. Not as I am now. I still have one final trump card. You mean the 8th gate? Alexis asked in shock. Richard, that will kill you. Far more painfully than anything the Jinchukei Tsuri could do to you at that. As it stands, we're all going to die anyway, Richard chortled. And if a little pain on my part can buy the lives of others, it is well worth it. Plus, I'll make sure to take out the majority of this attacking force while I'm at it. Alexis, get Raisin and everyone else out. Alexis opened her mouth as if to argue, but she took one look at Richard's eyes and saw his conviction before she swallowed and nodded. He turned in time to see Sarka recover from his kick and blast away the rubble. Damn it, cowards, show yourselves. She was screaming, clearly still pissed off at the death of her father. Richard slowly walked out of the hiding spot and was soon spotted by Sarka and many other members of the Jinchukei Tsuri. Here I am, he said quietly as they moved to attack him. As they approached, he took a deep breath, closing his eyes as his chakra moved to the point in his heart. Sarka roared as she and 5 others leapt at Richard and brought their weapons down at him. There were multiple crashing noises, and dust was kicked up from the force of the impact. However, when the dust cleared, there was no bloody corpse. What in? Sarka said slowly, before she felt a foreboding chill, and turned to look at Richard's new position. Richard stood to the side, and was surrounded by a red aura, and there was a heat and scent of blood coming from it. His own blood was evaporating, and the vapor was exiting his body. Sarka's eyes widened as she realized just what was in store. Nope, she said simply as she shunshined away. Arrogant she might have been, but among her clan, she was one of the smarter ones about it, and most cowardly, though this was hard to note due to the fact that she rarely even got in over her head to begin with. There are perks to being strong after all, and she was not fool enough to tangle with someone with all 8 inner gates open. Far better to retreat and let the gates kill him. Unfortunately for the other 5 that had attacked, they had nowhere near the same amount of common sense to temper their arrogance, and they attacked again, thinking themselves too strong for the 8th gate to make a difference, unaware of how quickly and brutally they were about to be disabused of that notion. Richard, who had remained still up to that point to try acclimating to the pain that came with the opening of the inner gate after moving to avoid the previous attack, was by this point more than ready and whipped around, blasting one of the enemy with a palm strike as he ducked under the man's blade. The air itself became a devastating weapon from the force of the blow, which was a direct one anyway, and the fool was sent flying back, being torn to pieces in the process. He couldn't even scream as his life ended in agony. Opening his mouth to do so simply resulted in air being forced into his lungs rather than out by the maelstrom he had found himself in. Another swung a claymore from the side, only for Richard to bat it aside, shattering it in the process, and then he kicked the woman who had wielded it in the face, shattering her helmet. In her head, 2 others tried a few black holes, but Richard moved out of range of their gravitational pulls and kicked off the air to move through it, and then fired downwards at them. 2 more strikes of pure compressed air, which proceeded to slam them down into the ground, breaking their bodies quite thoroughly. The last one, who had managed to escape via flight, found some grain of sense and made a desperate break for it. Sadly for him, it was much too little, too late, as Richard immediately caught up and axe kicked him brutally to the ground, his armor doing little to save him from the impact as he was reduced to a bloody paste. Richard then headed to the bulk of the fighting, firing off air blasts to gain the Jinchukei Tsuri's attention, and began his assault. Many members of the clan's eyes widened, and others narrowed as they processed what was occurring. Some did the sensible thing and moved to try to escape the wrath of the warrior fighting his last battle. The rest formed black holes or otherwise moved to attack. Alexis watched the ensuing pandemonium, and the Knights of Justice took the opportunity to reform their ranks. She leapt out of the alcove and among the forces. Listen, while Richard's causing that mayhem, we need to escape now. She looked around to the troops, seeing that a little over 50 remained now. Her heart sank slightly at this. Even if all Jinchukei Tsuri here perished, excepting Raisin of course, the remaining Jinchukei Tsuri forces outnumbered them. Our top priority is the non-combatants. We need to break through quickly. The cavern shook with the force of Richard's latest attack, and a few Jinchukui tried firing quasars at him, but he was just too fast, and he was tearing through their ranks at the moment. Alexis soon found a weak point in the enemy line and released the ceiling barriers that had up to that point sheltered the non-combatant fighters until such a time they could be given an escape route. Forward, she shouted, snagging up her blade as she spotted it, and the remaining knights charged forth, catching a group of Jinchukui between them and the exit off guard, as their attention had been on the Taijutsu master terrorizing their ranks. They quickly cut through, and the inhabitants of Freehaven made their way to the exit en masse. Sarka briefly contemplated going after them with a force of the remaining Jinchukui, but that idea died a quick death when Richard landed between the attacking clan and the exit, though he was panting clearly on his very last legs. This emboldened several Jinchukui. Red made several Jinchukui do something that officially labeled them as too dumb to live into attacking, but they were blasted back from an explosion of flame originating from Richard. The chakra of the 8th gate escaping his body was now lighting up from the sheer heat as he deliberately changed its nature in a fire style and formed a screeching bird of pure white fire. Final Taijutsu art. Richard muttered, his skin burning away, crumbling into ash. Death of a phoenix. He charged at the Jinchukui, and this time, none of them retained the arrogance needed to attempt to counter this attack, and scattered. Sarka, leading many others, flew to the side of the cavern that had multiple craters in it already, and unleashed quasars at it, managing to blast out a new exit just as the cavern was completely filled with blinding white light and unbearable heat. Alexis and the knights and their charges had just started to get some distance from Freehaven, when the entire mountain that had housed their cave systems, their home, practically erupted. Rocks, some mostly melted into magma, flew upwards. Luckily, the group had managed to get far enough away that the one that fell the closest actually just barely missed the rearmost group. Alexis called for a halt and looked back at the smoldering remains of the mountain as it collapsed on itself. Even if the gates hadn't killed Richard, he was most certainly dead from being in the partially molten rubble as it came down, and her heart sank. Everyone. A moment of silence for everyone who died this day. She said in a loud but soft tone. No one argued, and willingly granted several moments, after which they got moving again, Alexis momentarily doing a head count. This day was a dark one for the Knights of Justice, but fortunately, the Jinchukui would no doubt be feeling the losses of a great number of warriors in the days to come. A good distance away, a smoldering figure forced itself to its feet. Sarka could barely believe she had managed to survive that fiasco, as did two others who were lying next to her, barely breathing, but no doubt they were in fact the only survivors of the attacking party. And even then it was only because of many hastily made black holes that were far beyond the group's ability to sustain, but because the explosion only lasted a second, so too did their defenses have to, thus, the worst of it had been absorbed. But even so, the blast had sent Sarka and the other two a fair distance away, scorched, and would no doubt be scarred by the third-degree burns they were now sporting, if the wounds didn't kill them eventually anyway. Damn them! Sarka screamed, slamming her fist to the ground. This outrage would not go unavenged. She would see to that. Raisin would be made to suffer, and his friends would all die, even if it was the very last thing she ensured. Phew! A figure in a cloak said as he approached the ruins of Freehaven. A day had passed since its destruction, and even now, smoke was rising from the rubble. Okay, I have my doubts that anything worth scavenging survived this, but there is no harm in checking. He pulled out a scroll, and multiple shambling corpse-like figures emerged and began digging out the rubble. Several days later, the figure had stumbled upon a pleasant surprise despite being scorched to kingdom come. The corpse of Richard was in fact relatively intact, at least as much as it could be, considering the circumstances. His body had been crumbling to ash as a result of the final stages of opening the 8th inner gate, but a falling stone had caved his chest in on impact, stopping the process short. Withdrawing a scalpel, the figure cut into the charred flesh, though with some difficulty, and after freeing a piece from a central part of the torso, where DNA was most likely to have survived, he examined the piece critically. It could go either way at this point. He muttered, and after pulling out a scroll, placed a piece of flesh onto a sealing matrix, which after a tense moment, lit up. Yes. Yes, he cheered. I had almost given up hope on acquiring the DNA of a confirmed user of all 8 gates. This is a boon to my collection of Edo Tensei indeed. Just think. With the immortal body of Edo Tensei, unlimited use of the gate of death itself. But sadly, it seems as if nothing of Damien survived. He added solemnly after his shamblers finished their attempts to scavenge for him. It matters little, Damien was merely meant to be a backup in the event that we were unable to get our hands on a real prize. A voice echoed in his head. I still have some doubts as to whether that raisin fellow could be convinced to join our cause, the hooded figure replied, standing up. Oh, Caius, we both know that Raisin is an individual with much to offer us, the voice replied. True, breaking him and accessing the darkness in his heart will take time. But we have eternity. True enough, Caius admitted, getting up and walking off, plans still running through his mind. Raisin groaned as he slowly regained consciousness, and he sat up in the end the Knights of Justice had found a rest in, the civilians having moved elsewhere. Do we win? He asked as Alexis entered the room. At a very high cost, yes. I managed to kill Damien, she said, looking briefly cheerful as she brought that up. He wasn't easy, but I took him out. Good. That's a serious blow to the Jinchikwe Tsuri. Raisin stated. Zion back yet? Alexis nodded. He managed to find us just this morning, though he seemed a bit troubled. And Richard? Did he make it? Raisin asked, immediately regretting it as he watched Alexis sadden instantly. Alexis, what happened? He asked, fearing he already knew full well what happened. He opened all 8 gates and bought us time to escape. She told him, starting to tear up. I think he managed to take out most, if not all of the enemy in the bargain, but I couldn't be sure. And we're down to 30 more fighters, so we're now outnumbered by the remaining enemy. Raisin sighed and lay back down, trying to hide his own sorrow, despite knowing it was futile. I see. He muttered. Are you all right? Alexis asked. Oh, I'm always all right, Raisin lied. When you say you're all right, is that some kind of dumb macho guy code for not really all right at all? Alexis then asked, causing Raisin to turn his head to her. Why? He asked her. Because I'm all right too, Alexis replied simply. Raisin did not respond. For hours, they sat in silence, both just trying to come to terms with everything that had happened. I should get going. Zion wants us ready to leave tomorrow to avoid any unpleasant encounters with the enemy. We need a new hideaway before we can start anew with our uprising, Alexis said, standing up. Wait, Raisin requested, giving her pause. Could you stay with me for tonight? Sure, she replied, laying back down. After that, well, let's just say one thing led to another at this time. Zion was meditating on his training with the snakes, his newly attained sage mode active. Tokara's words to him in recent times were troubling. Flashback. You asked to see me, Great White Sage? Zion asked. Yes. I feel I should warn you of a dark event I have foreseen, the massive serpent stated. While I am nowhere near as gifted in the arts of prophecy as many other sages could be, I can at the very least see glimmers of major events. Your friend Raisin is at the heart of one. What do you mean? I have seen many a broken man in my endless lifetime, Zion. Tokara sighed. But in my brief vision, I have never seen anyone as destroyed as Raisin was. Due to my eternal lifespan, I never even thought it possible to see a vision, future or present, of a level of world weariness I couldn't even begin to comprehend. I dear Raisin will eventually be swallowed by darkness from which there will be no coming back. And he was standing atop a monster with 10 tails that I recognized all too well. And he possessed a Rinnegan like yours, and a red I did not recognize, but was almost assuredly another dojutsu of some sort. You had to have seen wrong. There is no way Raisin would ever allow himself to fall privy to such a darkness, Zion protested. Indin, it is possible yet that my vision will fail to come to pass. It has happened a few times. As I said, my talents are simply not on the same level as a sage who specializes in such things are. Regardless, keep an eye on him. Zion nodded and left. In flashback. You holding up, all right? He asked without turning around as Raisin approached. Not really, Raisin admitted. Time always heals, if only a little, but right now, I feel like shit. Zion nodded in acknowledgement before he said, I'd love to give you a break, but we need to head out within the hour. Jinchikwe Tsuri scouting parties are bound to look for us here eventually. Right? We should go out in 3 groups, Alexis, you, and I leading one each, and underhand yes. We don't want to draw too much attention. Zion nodded in agreement as he got up. Get your things in your group. Make sure you're ready to go. Raisin nodded and shunshined off. Of course things went to shit, Raisin groaned. That annoying assassin group of Kokatsus had sprung an ambush before he and his group could reach the agreed-upon rendezvous point. There were only 5 of them, but Raisin had sent the rest of his group away to take care of the enemy himself. He killed 3 of them, but was ultimately beaten and then dragged back toward the campsite. About time, Sarkis said, stepping from her tent and looking down at Raisin like he was something nasty she had stepped in. How long does it take to apprehend one lousy traitor? My apologies, General. It took a bit for the group to reach our ambush, though sadly, the Rakuto was not among their group. Apparently, they all split up for momentary travel. General, huh? Raisin laughed, despite coughing up a little blood, and a couple of broken ribs didn't make it very comfortable either. Guess you got promoted with father's death, eh? Sadly, I doubt you measured up. She responded by punching him in the face, making him black out. He slowly came to, looking up and finding himself in Kokatsu's throne room, chained heavily to the floor with his chakras sealed. Well, this is quite the honor, Raisin said sarcastically. I get to meet the clan head. What have I done to deserve such a treat? Raisin, former son of one of the greatest generals this and ever had, and yet such a disgrace. I honestly wonder how you could have gone so wrong. Kokatsu snarled down at him, menacingly getting up from his throne and walking towards Raisin, murder in his eyes. Wrong? Raisin laughed bitterly. I'm wrong. I'm not the one here who's a mass-murdering psychopath who considers people who don't share kinsmanship with him to be not people. I don't conveniently ignore the apparent value of life out of fucking megalomania. This whole damn clan is wrong, and I'm probably the only one fortunate enough to escape the utter lunacy. How dare you call me wrong? Kokatsu slowly stepped up to Raisin and viscously whipped him across the face. Let me tell you something, brat, he snarled as he lashed the whip again. Right and wrong is not decided by some higher morality. It is decided by the strongest. Even if there's a divine being that lays down laws, it's not objective. Those laws would only matter because of one thing, and one thing only: strength. A god can lay down laws because he has the power to enforce them. That's it. In other words, might is what makes right. And since no god has risen to stop us, that means the might of the Jinchukui Tsuri is right. Thus, it is our right to rule the weaklings of all the dimensions. He kept torturing Raisin with a whip as he ranted. Well, you and I actually agree in one thing. Strength is what determines everything. Which is precisely why you're going to lose, Raisin mocked Kokatsu weakly. What? You're far too obsessed with the strength of an individual, and of the strength of this one clan, Raisin lectured. You fail to realize the power of a cause that can rally entire communities together, the power of empathy. You've turned the entire Elder Dimension against you, you and this whole clan. Even if we are but grains of sand, you should never underestimate the deadliness of a sandstorm. The whip cracked once more, and Raisin grunted as another bleeding line was opened up on his shoulder. You make me sick, traitor. I'll make sure you suffer for a long, long time before you die. Kokatsu turned to his elite guard. Take him to the dungeons. Make sure he is very uncomfortable, but don't kill him. He has too much to answer for to be let off that easily. Kokatsu was as bad as his word. Raisin was chained against the wall, and as the days dragged on, he was beaten repeatedly. And that wasn't really even remotely close to the worst of it. He was often force-fed human flesh in the days of his torment. It was one of the Jinchukui Tsuri's favorite means of torture, called cannibalism of the heart. The idea was to torture someone the victim cared about to death in front of them, and then to truly make it as horrific and traumatic for the victim as possible, force-feed them the remains. And if Raisin vomited it back up, guess what? He was again forced to eat the vomit until it stayed down, just to rub salt in it. For Raisin, any random person was suitable to use against him in this truly monstrous and barbaric way. Though they naturally prefer to use someone he interacted with at least a little bit, the idea being to mock him with the guilt of meeting the dooming them. And, thanks to the Pulse imprint jutsu, they could easily find out who he would recognize, and where to find them. He began to lose track of time as his sanity was being strained heavily. But stubbornly, he clung to it, knowing that the snap would be to let them win. Thus, he soldiered on, ignoring the passage of days, weeks, and months. "We just about ready to head out?" Alexis asked as she walked up to Zion. A year had passed since Raisin had gotten himself captured by the enemy, and a lot had happened. She had immediately wanted to go rescue him, but just as the plans were finalized, it had come to light that she was pregnant with Raisin's child, at which point, Zion insisted that they wait until after she had given birth to the baby, and she had recovered. During this time, the Knights of Justice had managed to find a new place to live, and were slowly rebuilding their ranks. At the same time, news had gotten out that Damien, the feared general of the Jinchukui Tsuri clan, had been killed, which was enough to embolden all the clans that had originally been in hiding, and now they themselves had started almost openly building an army. The Jinchukui Tsuri were trying very hard to stamp it out, but it was building steam faster than they could even try to stop it. He looked up at her and asked, "You're sure you are recovered enough to do this? It's only been 3 months since your daughter was born, and it was a very difficult birth. Don't worry, my rehabilitation went smoothly. I'm back to 100%, and Emiko will be fine. I left her with my brother. They'll be able to stay out of trouble and keep her safe." Zion nodded, and they soon headed out, with 100 new Knights of Justice to back them up. "It wasn't easy, but I succeeded," the man in the cloak, known as Caius, mused as he strode away from the leaving forces. He pocketed a vial of blood as he slipped under the cover of the forested area. Despite how painstakingly difficult it was, he had been able to infiltrate the Knights of Justice and impersonated one of their medics, and assisted with Alexis's rehabilitation. What he had actually did was steal some of her blood, as well as implant a little something that would ensure she would not survive the coming battle. His master had called for her death, and he made sure to arrange it for him. It was important in order to break Raisin to his master's will, and pretty much anyone even remotely versed in the mind knew that a fundamental way to break someone was to ensure the loss of something they loved more than themselves, and for maximum effect, make sure they were there to see it. Now it was simply a matter of following close enough to keep an eye on things and triggering Alexis's demise at the opportune moment. After all, it would simply not do to kill her before Raisin was rescued, and had a front row seat to her death. Raisin was so fucking done with this. He wanted them to just kill him and get it over with, if only he was free. He had no intention of breaking for them, so he decided to go ahead and attempt to provoke Kokatsu on one of the bastard's rare visits. Maybe he could enrage the bastard enough to make him kill him without meaning to. You want to know what I'm going to do when I get out of here? Raisin wheezily asked Kokatsu. I'm going to come for you first, and then I'll eviscerate you and use your gastrointestinal tract as a condom while I fornicate with your skull. You got a punch in the gut for that one. Courtesy of Sarka, as Kokatsu simply left the room, saying, "You won't get out, so I have nothing to worry about. You'll spend the rest of your natural life here, and we will make it a hell that will make you long for the actual thing as if it were paradise." He closed the dungeon door, allowing Sarka to begin beating the ever-loving shit out of Raisin. Again, Raisin simply toughed it out as best as he could, all the while reflecting on what he had learned since coming here. His guards were amazingly chatty with one another, and he learned that the Elder Dimension was really starting to rise up and build a massive army that was rapidly growing out of their control, a tidbit of intel that brought Raisin a lot of personal satisfaction. He could die in peace if he could just die now, knowing that the Jinshu Koyatsuri's fate was sealed, thanks in part to him. Raisin coughed a little, spitting up blood as Sarka stepped back from her restrained brother. "Not so high and mighty now, are you?" she asked. "Now that you're in our hands, the rebellion's not going to last. Frankly, your betrayal was the only reason it got as far as it did. Which is exactly why we're going to break you 1,000,000 times over before we finally kill you, even if it takes years. Yeah, just keep on thinking that." Raisin laughed at her, before spitting some more blood at her feet. Losing it, Sarka immediately kicked him in the face, breaking his nose. "Thinking what exactly?" she growled. "That I was the only reason our revolution succeeded as far as it did. I'm really not even the biggest reason, really. For one thing, you are still outnumbered over 30 to 1. 30 times 0 is still 0, she scoffed. The only one left worth anything is your friend Zion, and we'll have him brought to justice as well, so we can finally finish our conquest of this dimension." "Yeah, there is still Zion, who's still not as strong as I am," Raisin chuckled. "But my dear, dear sister, whatever made you suffer the delusion that I was the strongest among the rebellion? The arrogance of our clan never ceases to amaze me. Don't think you can bluff me. Only the Rikudo clan ever posed a challenge to us, period." "You really think so?" Raisin replied. "Because the Ishoryu clans produced a knight unlike any other. And you want to know how I know you're underestimating her so much? It's because I've sparred against her many, many times. And I never beat her." His gaze met that of the now slightly unnerved Sarkis. "Not one single time. Think I'm lying? Why don't you ask Alexis Ishoryu yourself, if you feel like meeting your end at her hands?" "Keep dreaming, brother. Lie all you want. The moment we had you, we had this war won," Sarkis scoffed before storming out of the dungeon, allowing Raisin to slump against the wall. However, no matter how hard she tried to tell herself that Raisin had to be lying, she couldn't get his confident smirk out of her head. Raisin gave a start as he felt the clan compound rumble slightly from the dungeon. He then smirked. "Looks like I was right. The Elder Dimension is coming for you all en masse." He chuckled at his guards. "Who knows, they might just manage to bust me out in the bargain, but I won't hold my breath too much in regards to that. I've accepted death long ago. You all just wouldn't give it to me. You might regret it if I'm freed before this is all over." "Shut up, scum," one of his guards snarled, moving in to beat some silence into their most stubborn prisoner yet, and was promptly consumed from below by an earth-style dragon that burst from the floor. His partner immediately moved to try to help him, only to be met with a lightning-enhanced arrow being shot from inside the dragon, piercing it from the inside out and getting him in the throat. He went down, and Alexis stepped from the dragon, looking quite pleased with herself as she exited its mouth, leaving the bloodied remains of the first guard inside as the dragon crumbled. "How's it going, Rusty?" she asked conversationally as she stowed away her bow and cut the chains, letting Raisin crumple to the floor. She then began to heal his injuries, even as she started undoing his chakra seals. "Honestly, I felt much better," Raisin admitted with a dry chuckle. "Still, you have no idea how happy I am to see you at this point. I was getting so very sick of their torture. How's the attack going? Not sure. Zion's leading the diversionary forces to cause some mayhem while I rescue you. Then we retreat. Wait, this isn't the final invasion of the clan? Raisin asked. Nope, just a rescue mission this time. We couldn't get the Elder Dimension army to aid us. They refused to help one of them, as they put it, completely ignoring the good you did. Figures. Can't blame them, though. I share blood with a lot of monsters in human skin, so I can see why they're loath to trust me. They haven't had time to get to know me, or trust you guys enough to trust me too. Hopefully when the time comes, they'll fight alongside us without too much issue. Alexis nodded and stepped back. He sat up and flexed a little. He then walked to the second guard and began pilfering his weapons and armor. At least, what armor he could. Their sizes were not quite the same, so he had to settle for the pieces that least restricted movement. He certainly couldn't take the gauntlets. Those were generally custom fit to each hand because the measurements had to be close to exact for each segment of the fingers to ensure enough mobility remained. Ideally, the wearer could touch the tip of each of their fingers to the tips of their thumbs, but Raisin doubted he could even clench a fist with the guard's gauntlets at a glance. Still, he was able to put on the breastplate and helmet and a few other pieces without limiting his mobility, though there were more gaps in the defense than he would like. The weapons the guy had on him, he took them all. This will have to do, he said, stretching out a little more as he spoke, working out the insane number of kinks being chained to a wall for a year with almost no breaks in the meanwhile had given him. Good. We should be making tracks right about now, Alexis replied. Got that right, Raisin remarked, and they quickly jumped into the hole Alexis's dragon had made in the tunnel afterwards. I need to tell you something, Raisin. Alexis then said to him. It can wait until we are way out of the reach of my kin, Raisin replied shortly, making Alexis nod. Now was hardly the time to distract Raisin with things that she did kind of want to surprise him with the fact that he was a father too. Sarka looked pissed as she gazed at the hole several minutes later, 10 other Jinchukui Tsuri behind her. They'd realized something wasn't right a little bit ago and came to check on their most important prisoner. Well, don't just stand there gawking, you idiots. Get them, she roared at her subordinates. They immediately jumped into the hole and were met with an obscene number of traps at the tunnel entrance. Sarka snarled and leapt after them, assisting with wrecking all the traps even as this caused the tunnel to collapse. But refusing to let their tracks be covered, Sarka repeatedly blasted away the rubble. I'm coming for you, Raisin, and this time I'm going to kill you, she roared, enraged. Raisin and Alexis exited the opposite end after some time, and Alexis quickly sent up a wind dragon, followed by a fire one. That's Zion's signal to fall back, she explained. You're going to have a snake reverse summon him, then use chakra rods embedded in all our comrades to reverse summon them to safety as well. In fact, stab yourself with this one, she said, handing Raisin a small chakra receiver. Clever. Raisin noted, stabbing himself. After a few seconds, they felt a slight tug. But it vanished. What? Alexis asked, shocked. I know the Jinchukui Tsuri have a space-time barrier to keep anyone from bypassing their defenses or escaping that way, but I set this tunnel up to be well outside the boundaries of it when we got out. We're nowhere near the compound now. We should have been summoned without issue. Now's not the time to whine then, Raisin sighed. Come on, let's get out of here before they get through your booby traps. As if taking the bait Raisin had just so very foolishly laid out, fate had other plans as several black holes emerged from the tunnel, and Raisin quickly moved to intercept them, seizing control of them and holding them back as he grunted with exertion. You had to open your mouth. Alexis growled at him, before two of the Jinchukui Tsuri rushed out of the tunnel and tried to stab Raisin with their blades, only for Alexis to raise a sage-powered earth wall to block them off, followed by putting several lightning-enhanced arrows through it, killing both of them. Raisin jumped back then as a large Quasar hit the wall, blasting through as he held it back with his own black holes, and 5 more Jinchukui Tsuri came out, the other 3 that had been with Sarka killed by Alexis's traps. Alexis interposed herself between 3 of them, and began to fight as Raisin handled the other 2. Alexis cut through one of their weapons and slashed its owner's shoulder to hip in the bargain, but the enemy was quick enough to jump back enough to avoid a fatal injury. Realizing Alexis was a threat now, they created about 20 black holes to move at her. She smirked and made 5 hand seals, 1 for each element. Elemental style, 5 sage dragon bullets, she declared, creating a massive dragon bullet jutsu for each element. The black holes closed in, and the dragon bullets met them, creating a momentary struggle for dominance as the black holes drew in energy and matter from the elemental beasts. However, the sheer amount of power Alexis put into the jutsu overwhelmed the black holes in short order, and they moved right at the now terrified Jinchukui Tsuri, who were promptly torn apart and obliterated after trying and failing to avoid the jutsu. Raisin had just finished cutting down his opponents, frowning as he realized how rusty he was, and turned towards Alexis, who paused, sensing one more foe coming from inside the tunnel. and turned to face it. And then she felt another presence that had almost managed to hide itself as it entered her sensory range. But before she could acknowledge it, she felt its chakra flare. An agony ripped through her gut as a paralytic poison was released from a storage seal inside her body, surgically implanted without her knowledge during her recovery from her pregnancy. It was a fast-acting, painful, and untraceable poison, though not fatal on its own, but it did not need to be. Sarka emerged from the tunnel, and Alexis, unable to defend herself, was run right through her torso by Sarka's claymore. Raisin's eyes widened, and time seemed to stop as he tried desperately to deny what he had just seen. He took a slow step towards them as Alexis struggled to turn her head towards him. Blood was flowing from her mouth as she barely succeeded and weakly choked out, "Raisin. We're." Then she choked out a mouthful of blood, and the life left her eyes as Sarka pulled her blade from her chest, and she collapsed backwards. Raisin was consumed with despair and denial as he slowly sank to his knees. This couldn't be happening. His work done, Caius had left then, knowing that if he was detected, it would be very bad. He also had to take measures to ensure the Rakudo among the knights couldn't revive Alexis, not after all the trouble he had gone through to arrange her death, well, with getting the poison in her system to begin with, and then changing the borders of the Jinshoku Itsuri barrier border on short notice to prevent their escape, and all the while remaining undetected until it was too late. Honestly, he almost hadn't gotten back in Alexis's range in time. Had he been too late, she would have obliterated Sarka before he had the chance to trigger the seal's release, and then he would have had to wait for another perfectly good opportunity to kill her. He briefly wondered if Raisin would survive this, but shrugged the thought off. There was always Edo Tensei to revive him afterwards if things went bad, and besides, he wasn't the type to just roll over and die, and even weakened from a year of imprisonment, Sarka was quite frankly outclassed by her infinitely more talented brother. You killed her," Raisin said quietly, staring at nothing, his eyes shadowed as he spoke. "Yes, I did. That was only the logical conclusion. She was up against her superior after all." Sarka cackled, too stupid to realize just how massive a handicap she had been given, her arrogance filling in the blanks on how it was so easy for her. She then walked up to Raisin, looking mockingly down at him. "Now then, what should I do to you? I could easily drag you back to the prison with you like this. But honestly, I've grown bored of torturing you, and you look broken enough to me. Keeping you alive has caused us enough trouble as it is." With that, she swung her blade down at him, only for him to reach up and grab the blade, stopping it with a combination of strength and manipulating the gravity, though blood still dripped from a cut on his hand the weapon had managed to inflict. "You killed her," he repeated as Sarka strained against his grip, the dense weapon quivering, and if she was paying attention, she would have realized that Raisin's arm was not moving at all. "I'll kill you," he bellowed then, snapping the blade clean in two, rapidly rising to his feet, making Sarka instinctively back up rapidly. "What in?" she snarled, before freezing as an outrageous amount of killing intent hit her like a ton of bricks. She looked at his eyes and saw what she could only describe as a pissed-off beast that had nothing but the long, painful death of the one who enraged it on its mind. She unsealed another claymore and swung it at him, only for him to rip it from her grasp with his gravity bloodline, and it was embedded in the ground. Starting to panic, she tried to blast him back with a blast of gravity of her own, only for him to tank it with a combination of brute strength, sticking to the ground with chakra in his feet, and his own power weakening the blast, and then flung her viciously back with a burst of his own, and she skidded painfully back into a boulder. She choked a little as she tried to get her breath back, and he continued to stride up to her, not breaking stride any faster than a menacingly slow walk. She looked up and once again saw his eyes, those eyes, so cold and cruel, and promising of an agonizing death. She screamed with the first gulp of air she had managed to reclaim, and formed 5 black holes and threw them at Raisin, who didn't even remotely slow down, simply swept his arm in front of him, sending the high-gravity spheres veering off course, not taking his eyes off his sister. Now truly realizing just how much peril she was in, she attempted to fly away, moving faster than she ever had in her life, fueled by terror. It didn't make a lick of difference as she was brutally yanked back by Raisin's power and slammed back down onto the ground. Before she could try to rise, he stomped on her chest, caving in her breastplate, and causing her to choke up blood as he broke several ribs. Not only that, but her damaged armor was making it very difficult to breathe. He then reached down and yanked off her helmet, grabbed her by the hair, and swung her into a tree by it, smashing it down, and causing her more agony as part of her scalp tore free along with some hair being torn out. She rolled across the ground, and he was on her hands and knees as she tried to get up, before being kicked in the face, breaking her nose, and making multiple teeth break off and fly out, and she was slammed on her back by the blow, followed by him pulling an arrow to him from Alexis's quiver, grabbing both of Sarka's wrists and slamming her against another tree, but not breaking it down with her body this time. Instead, he simply tore her gauntlets off and then stabbed through both her hands with the arrow and embedded it into the tree, making her scream as she was essentially nailed to it through both palms above her head with said arrow. She whimpered pitifully as she looked up at Raisin, trying to find any sign of mercy, but there was none to be found in those eyes, those horrifying eyes. Tell me, Sarka, how does it feel, knowing you are in a position of helplessness, unable to do a damned thing about it, and that your tormentor has every intention of ending your life? Poor older sister. Tell me, are you about to start crying? He asked her, and her eyes widened as she realized exactly what he was saying. This was almost exactly like when she had tried to kill him when they were younger. Yes, I see you realize. Only this time, there is no father here to bail you out. No, you are all alone, with no one to hear you scream but me, and no one to stop me. Be brother, please. She wept, but those horrible eyes of his did not soften in the slightest. She would have been haunted for the rest of her days by them, if she had any more days. Now, I'm going to repay you for all the torment you inflicted upon me while I was your prisoner. I might not have nearly as much time as you did, but I'll make do. He promised her, picking up a jagged stone. Her screams filled the clearing, but true to Raisin's words, there was no one to help her. It was some time before Raisin stepped away from Sarka's cooling corpse, which was no longer even recognizable. He was covered in her blood, but did not care, nor had he gotten any real satisfaction from torturing her to death. A little bit of catharsis had been had, but it was not enough to fill the gaping hole in his heart as he slowly turned to Alexis and walked over to her, kneeling at her side. Unmoving, he stared at her before he began to weep, letting her death truly sink in now that he no longer had immediate vengeance to divert his attention. Zion had gotten there as fast as he could after his reverse summoning of Raisin and Alexis had failed and came across them like that, Raisin kneeling next to Alexis's body, and his own heart sank. Raisin, what happened? He asked, slowly approaching. Unwilling to speak, Raisin glanced in another direction, and Zion followed his gaze, and barely kept the resulting nausea in check as he saw Sarka's corpse. He resisted any urge to berate Raisin for going too far in dealing with her, as he could tell that every bit of that damage to the body was done while the victim was still alive. Zion, you can still use the samsara of heavenly life to bring her back, right? She hasn't been dead for longer than a couple of hours. That's well within the time frame you mentioned. I don't want to ask you to shorten your lifespan, but... Zion nodded, then walked up to Alexis, and with a single hand seal, called forth the king of hell, who opened his mouth. But nothing came out. No, I can't find Alexis's spirit in the pure realm, Zion said with a sinking feeling. Immediately after he said that, Raisin's hand gripped his shirt, and he shouted, You're lying? Bring her back. Please. Please bring her back. He said weakly, sinking to his knees, sobbing as he met Zion's eyes, and met undeniable honesty in them. It was like losing her twice, having been given a ray of hope, only to lose it right after. It was almost too much to bear for Raisin. Days passed to the new hideout as final invasion plans were being made, and Raisin spent much time locked away in his room after telling Zion all that happened in the time he'd been away, from his torture to the escape. Zion had been visiting him and ensuring he was eating. How? She should have been able to easily stop Sarka. Raisin asked eventually as Zion came in, ignoring the fact that Alexis's brother had accompanied him with a bundle this time. How could she have frozen up at that crucial moment and lost to her? I don't know. The autopsy was inconclusive, but we think she hadn't fully recovered from her pregnancy, and it cost her her life. Pregnancy? Raisin asked, slowly processing what Zion had just said. Raisin, meet your daughter, Emiko, Joshua said, stepping forward and handing a stunned Raisin the bundle he was holding. Sure enough, it was a baby girl. Raisin speechlessly looked down at Emiko, who looked curiously back at her father, before apparently deciding she liked him and started to giggle at him. Sobbing, he held his 3-month-old daughter to his chest. I almost forgot what happiness felt like. He admitted then, and Zion embraced his friend, certain he had been brought back from the brink of despair. A couple weeks passed, and the plans for the final battle were being finalized, the Elder Dimension Army and the Knights of Justice forming an alliance for it. However, the Elder Dimension Army was making it clear that they did not trust Raisin in the slightest. There were even a few attempts on his life, and while the Knights of Justice called for punishment of the culprits, the Elder Dimension Army leaders refused and raised hell whenever the Knights decided to take the culprits prisoner to punish them instead, and eventually, Raisin simply requested that Zion tell the Knights of Justice to simply pass the failed assassins back to the Elder Dimension army, knowing the alliance was far too important to allow any discord between them. Hence, not a single assassin was killed, and the Knights swallowed their pride and turned the other cheek on their allies' transgressions. Raisin held Emiko and realized that it was only a matter of time before it got out that he had a daughter, and such a blood tie to him would paint a target on her head. Despite his fighting against the Jinchukui Tsuri, sharing blood with that clan was an unforgivable crime to the vast majority of the Elder Dimension, hence the failed attempts on his life. He had to do something to keep his daughter safe. Zion, I need a favor, Raisin said slowly as he walked up to his friend, even as he held his newborn daughter. What is it? Zion asked. I need you to use the Pulse Imprint Jutsu on me to wipe my memories of Emiko after today. For her safety, no one but you and Joshua can ever know I'm her father. Not even me. But why? Zion questioned in shock. Raisin, Emiko's the daughter of Alexis, as well as you. She's the last link you have to her mother now that she's gone. Exactly, which is why I just couldn't live with it if anything happened to her. Especially if it happened because of me, Raisin replied, his eyes shimmering with tears yet to be shed. Zion, the whole Elder Dimension despises the Jinchukui Tsuri, and for damn good reason. Ever since they all united, the forces we haven't fought alongside for years have all given me looks, the looks of fear and hatred of a monster. It's also because I never want anyone to look at Emiko that way this has to happen. They're not strong enough to harm me, unless they manage it through subterfuge, and we all know that those failed assassination attempts will have more where they came from, but she's far more vulnerable. I won't send her to another dimension either. Her birthright, as I assure you, is here. As a Jinchukui Tsuri, she can never know that part of her heritage. After this war is over, the Elder Dimension can rest assured that their accursed line will ultimately die with me. That's why I can't be there for her. I'll give her to her Joshua. As her uncle, he can raise her. She can grow up with pride, knowing all about her mother. But the ties to her father's blood must be forever forgotten. And I don't have it in me to not be there for her as her father either, which is why my own memories must be lost. I wouldn't be able to bear just keeping my distance from my daughter forever, and I'd eventually slip up and put her in jeopardy. So I cannot be allowed to remember. All right, once we've entrusted her to Joshua again, I'll suppress all memory of her. Zion reluctantly agreed. I just don't want to deny you any of the remaining happiness you have. I could be miserable all my life, Zion. So long as those I care for can have a chance to live happy, and in peace, I'll be content. Raisin was prepping for the final battle, putting on his armor before looking at the photo on the desk of the room they'd given him in their current makeshift hideout. It was an old picture, taken what now seemed like an unattainable lifetime ago to the Jinchukui Tsuri traitor. It was of the original inner circle of the Knights of Justice, back when they'd first made everything official. Of all the people in the photo, only 2 people were still alive now, Zion and himself. And after today, that might not even be true anymore. One or both of them could very well lose their lives. It didn't matter that they were part of a force that now outnumbered the Jinchukui Tsuri clan 1,000 to 1, or that they were stronger than every other remaining Jinchukui Tsuri, save perhaps Kokatsu. The fact was, war was hell, and nothing could truly change that. In the confusion, anyone could die. After all, it had happened to the strongest person he'd known, and the woman he'd loved. Just looking at Alexis's image in the photo caused him unbearable pain, and he put the picture face down. Zion knocked on his door, and when Raisin gave a grunt to let him know he could enter. How are you holding up? Zion asked cautiously. He was hurting too, ever since Raisin had asked to have the memory of his daughter, his last link to Alexis, wiped for the girl's sake. It also hurt to realize that Raisin had none of his oldest friends to lean on anymore, except him. He briefly wondered what would happen if he died this day, and Raisin lived. He was sure it would just about break him. Raisin was silent for a moment, before he admitted, I've been dueling with many unpleasant thoughts as of late. There's a very real chance that neither of us come out of this alive. Honestly, though, I really think I'm okay with that. It doesn't scare me as much as the alternative bad scenario. Alternative? Zion asked in some confusion. What if I survive, and find no place left for me in this world? Raisin questioned. The Knights of Justice are minority in the army of the Elder Dimension now that the rest of the forces in the whole world have finally grown a spine and are willing to help in taking down my corrupt clan, and while I'm acknowledged and respected among our own number, our sudden allies are not nearly so kind. They see me as a subhuman, they don't trust me, and will no doubt be trying to kill me once I'm no longer useful. To them, every single Jinchukui Tsuri, good or evil, is a blight on the world that needs to be wiped out, and I honestly can't blame them, Raisin admitted. Not after all the atrocities committed by my kin. But you aren't responsible for any of it, Zion protested. They just need time, they will open up, and... Aren't I? Raisin chuckled bitterly. You know full well that I was nearly just as bad as the rest of them. I partook in the slaughter of a whole clan before I found my empathy for them, and all that was more of a happy accident than anything else. Had I not been helpless once myself, I would probably be out there on the other side now, ready to take my last stand with the rest of my clan. If you were our enemy, we never would have gotten this far to begin with, so that is a moot point. They owe you greatly, Raisin. Neither you or they can deny. Oh yes, they can, Raisin snorted. Humans in general happen to be very, very good at deluding themselves to fit their own worldview, regardless of how much they must twist their perspectives to do so. I did too, but I saw the flaws in my worldview when you showed me that not all Jinchuriki Tsuri were evil. Surely, they can too, Zion protested. No one hated you just for being a Jinchuriki Tsuri more than I did. Humorlessly, Raisin started laughing. Zion, you are far too wise to compare to the vast majority of the people of the world, no matter how you look at it. You saw the flaws in your thinking because you were open-minded despite your hatred. Some people, hell, maybe even most, have points of views you'd have to move heaven and earth just to get them to consider the possibility they're wrong, regardless of proof. Things like religion, or politics, or bigotry. There will always be people indelibly colored by such views, and they'll outright ignore anything that contradicts said viewpoints, and relentlessly argue points that support them, regardless of whether the arguments hold any water when scrutinized. They've drawn their conclusions about me, and will use whatever facts they have available to support it, and maybe even a few lies, even ones they know are lies. Like I said, people are very good at fooling themselves and each other. That's the difference. Regardless, Raisin, I'm willing to move heaven and earth to ensure you have a place in the world after all this. You fought hard for us, and we owe you far too much to do otherwise. You deserve better than all this. Not everyone gets what they deserve, Zion. Raisin sighed, before giving a small smile. But I thank you, my friend. If we are both still alive after all of this, I will give settling down a try. The final battle was nigh, the 78 remaining members of the Jinchuriki Tsuri clan ready for battle, along with their entire civilian population, ready to kill themselves if the enemy won, rather than be taken alive, thoroughly brainwashed by the clan's indoctrination. Over 7,000 fighters of the Elder Dimension marched on the clan compound, led by the remaining Knights of Justice. Even if one of them in particular was one the majority of the Elder Dimension wouldn't really mind if he met his end today. Raisin had butterflies in his stomach, knowing this was a battle he could easily die in, what with the fact that he could very well have enemies on both sides of the conflict. Still, he was prepared, and multiple catapults and ballista were wheeled forth, ready to fire at the enemy walls. Everyone, listen up, Zion called out to the entirety of the forces. It had been agreed between him and Raisin that it would be best if he was the one to address the troops. After all, he was still the leader, even if Raisin was better at speaking. This is it. Today, we put an end to many years of living in fear, a fear we experienced bent and broken at the hands of an enemy who doesn't even think of us as people worth a second thought. They felt entitled due to their power. They tried to conquer our home, but today, it ends because here and now, we stamp out this corrupt bloodline. Kokatsu and all loyal to him will meet their ends today. If an enemy surrenders, accept it, but otherwise, show no mercy to those who would bring weapons to bear against you. If possible, prevent their children and non-combatants from killing themselves and or each other. Otherwise, we cross the line from justice to genocide. There were mixed cheers and sadly protests at this, and Zion turned to face the gates of the Jinchuriki Tsuri clan compound's doors opening, 30 of their fighters marching out, determined to fight to the bitter end despite being hopelessly outnumbered. Several immediately leapt into action and formed black holes to fire off their quasars, as well as absorb the incoming attacks from the ballistas and catapults, while the Elder Dimension forces also fired off thousands of jutsu to create a massive wave of multiple elements. All of this met multiple black holes, and for several tense seconds, it was being absorbed into the masses of mind-boggling gravity, and then the black holes started to explode as their users simply could no longer handle the absorbed mass and energy once it exceeded their limitations. Some Jinchuriki Tsuri could handle it, but most couldn't. Slowly, the dust cleared, and Raisin took a deep breath as he waited to see how many enemies survived the onslaught and were about to try to return it with interest in the form of their quasars. The answer 6. These Jinchuriki Tsuri moved forth and returned fire with every single black hole they had been able to sustain, and Raisin jumped forward and made multiple black holes to absorb as much as possible, while Zion deflected a few from their forces with a single powerful Shinra Tensei. Other forces built a massive Earth-style wall to attempt to weaken the blasts. Sadly, so much power was returned to them, it was simply inevitable that some of it would break through. About 5 quasars had been weakened, but still broke through to carve several holes in their lines. However, the 6 Jinchuriki Tsuri fighters were then completely overwhelmed by the sheer number of the charging forces, despite each one cutting several of them down. Raisin noted that this left 48 remaining Jinshukwetsuri left to fight. Ryukoketsuri. They poured through several holes they blasted through the walls, finding 25 more heavily fortified members of the enemy clan, having already maintained several black holes to gather power for Quasas, and they fired them immediately, and Raisin and Zion quickly moved to mitigate the damage even as the Elder Dimension army raised several earth walls. But Raisin still winced as nearly 1,000 of their forces were wiped out. Regardless, they continued to press on. Raisin rushed forward, ducking under an enemy slash, and retaliating with one of his own, cutting the soldier down, noting with a heavy heart that the girl whose life he had just taken couldn't have been older than 10. Kokatsu, you really are a monster, Raisin growled, conscripting innocent children into your ranks, knowing even something as desperate as that is only going to be a delaying tactic. You're already a dead man walking, and we're going to stop you. Another enemy sent a claymore flying AAT him, and he responded by sidestepping it, manipulating its gravity field to slingshot around, and sent it right through its owner's torso. A third tried to send a Quasa at him, but he avoided it via a substitution jutsu with a piece of rubble and cut this third opponent from shoulder to hip, bringing him down as well. He turned and looked at Zion, who pulled a chakra rod out of the last of his opponents as the Elder Dimension army also finished up with several enemies. You uninjured? Zion asked Raisin, who nodded in response. Yeah, you? Took a kick in the back, nothing I can't shrug off. Zion then turned to the rest of the army and began giving his final orders. Raisin and I are going to go after Kokatsu. The rest of you are to storm the remainder of the compound. This war ends now. With that, Raisin and Zion headed directly for the throne room. The rest of the forces spread out through the compound. Kokatsu waited on his throne, seemingly meditating, but his guards could tell that he was barely holding back his rage by his grip on the shaft of his massive battle axe, a fairly rare choice of weapon for a Jinshukwetsuri. Kokatsu was downright seething at the rage of his loss. Even if he killed Raisin and Zion, who he knew were coming for him even now, he would still have to deal with a pissed-off army. The only thing left for him to achieve now was a small measure of revenge on the ones who ruined his conquest to begin with. The throne room doors were blown open, and Kokatsu's two guards tried to attack Raisin from behind as he strode in, only to be contemptuously thrown against the walls by Raisin's gravity bursts. Raisin not even breaking stride, as Zion killed them with chakra rods while they were down. Kokatsu, your time has come, Raisin said, pointing a blade at the Jinshukwetsuri clan leader. Kokatsu stared at Raisin, and, at that moment, what little sanity he had any claim to went right out the window, and he began laughing like a maniac. He struck the floor with the butt end of his axe, causing a deep crack to spread, stopping just short of Raisin's feet. Zion stepped next to Raisin at that moment as Kokatsu froze to his feet, fully armored except for his head. You truly think you two can kill me? Me, the ruler of the strongest clan to ever exist? Kokatsu demanded maniacally. This is your last chance to stand down. Raisin warned Kokatsu, despite knowing that he would not surrender. Still, Raisin felt obligated to try to put an immediate end to the bloodshed peacefully. If you surrender now, any surviving members of the clan will be spared. Just order them to stand down. You ignorant brat. Kokatsu spat, glaring at Raisin. It's the right of the lions to rule the sheep. Are you truly so blind to what was supposed to be our destined birthright? Now, the weak will reign, with no one strong enough to keep them in line. Eventually, mankind will tear itself apart with such circumstances, because no one will be strong enough to win decisively against anyone else. You're wrong, Kokatsu. We intend to establish a republic in the Elder Dimension after this, so there will be no more need for conquest. Everyone will have a voice, people can gather around a table in peace to discuss issues and deal with them as a society. Ironically, you're the one who made that dream possible, by causing the entire Elder Dimension to rally against you and this clan. Last chance. Stunt. Down. You don't know how the world works? Kokatsu ranted. The government you create will fall apart eventually, and a mountain of corpses will take its place. The Jinshukwetsuri clan's power could have kept order in an empire for all time. But now, you have destroyed the dream of me and my ancestors. You will pay dearly for it. I know I've lost, and my clan doomed, but I'll be damned if I let the culprits go unpunished. With that, he formed 10 black holes and shot them at the two. Raisin and Zion immediately dodged as the spheres sucked on everything in their path, and Raisin retaliated with a lightning-style jutsu right at Kokatsu, who cut into it with his axe, dispersing it. Then he made another black hole to block Zion's attack with an Ashura Path laser blast. He then flew full speed at Raisin, punching him in the head and sending him skidding painfully along the ground, though he recovered quickly enough to use 2 black holes to block the Quasa that Kokatsu had tried to fire from the black hole he had used to absorb Zion's previous attack. Summoning Jutsu, Zion shouted, calling forth a large boar, which dashed across the spacious throne room to try to gore Kokatsu, who simply grabbed one of its tusks and threw it through the wall, with a bit of gravity manipulating cheating to help, of course. However, it was a diversion needed for Zion to use Shinra Tensei to blast Kokatsu back towards Raisin, who had circled around behind Kokatsu with 2 claymores in hand and slashed at him with them. Kokatsu, however, quickly recovered and flipped over Raisin, and slashing down with his axe, seemingly bisecting Raisin, only for Raisin to burst into smoke, followed by the real Raisin bursty G from the ground with a black hole formed, and he fired the Quasar directly at Kokatsu, who was forced to form 3 of the spheres to absorb it, but his eyes were momentarily off of Zion as a result, who had taken a few seconds to gather Sage Chakra, and now dashed up to him, kicking him across the room. He recovered and levitated before blocking a sword slash from Raisin on his armored wrist, then slashed again with his axe, but was met with Raisin's other blade. Regardless, Kokatsu blasted Raisin back in time to dodge a wind-enhanced Sage art and fire-style jutsu from the Snake Sage in the room, and glared at him, his eyes burning figurative holes in Zion's Rinnegan eyes. Zion created another chakra rod and launched it at Kokatsu, while at the same time, Raisin sent a black hole after him. Kokatsu's response was to dodge the rod, which was what Raisin was expecting. Thus, the black hole absorbed it and fired it back out at Kokatsu as another Quasar. Kokatsu lurched just in time, and the beam simply stripped his armor, along with some flesh from his shoulder rather than taking off his head. Kokatsu snarled and used his gravity manipulation to tear the pillars of the throne room from their places and drew them to Zion and Raisin as they tried to rush him, and they were struck by the pillars as a result. Banged up, they skidded along the ground, and Kokatsu flew up to the ceiling and blasted through it, followed by forcing it to collapse down on top of his opponents, attempting to crush them as he upped the wreck of the rubble. However, a large Quasar that he was barely able to dodge came blasting out of the rubble right after. From a hole, a pissed-off Raisin dusted himself off before helping Zion up. Kokatsu stared down at them and shouted, "You damn worms. Why won't you just give up and die already?" "Well, since you asked so nicely, fuck now," Zion retorted, launching a bunch of Ashura Path missiles at Kokatsu, who began to dodge them as he flew through the air. Zion kept on firing, even as every single one of them missed their target. "In fact, I stopped dodging," Kokatsu shouted down at Zion as indeed, missile after missile was just blasting on by the tyrant. "Seriously, are you even trying to hit me?" "No," Zion shouted, still blasting away. "The hell do you mean, no?" Kokatsu demanded, before freezing up as he realized not a single missile had gone off. "Oh," he said slowly as he looked around. All the missiles had detached from their main propulsion parts, now only having the parts needed to keep them aloft and slowly drifting. Oh, and now, he was in the middle of a veritable minefield. Oh sure, boom. Blood was flowing onto the floor from a multitude of corpses as the Elder Dimension Army and the Knights of Justice wrapped things up. Nearly every soldier in the Jinchurikitsuri clan was slain, and now, Andrew, a general in the army who lost his entire family to the damn clan, opened a door and grinned maliciously as he beheld a huddle of non-combatants among the Jinchurikitsuri, all of them looking fearfully at him. He'd found their shelter apparently, and he was glad for it too, for he had realized that if the Knights of Justice, the followers of Zion and Raisin, they'd at least try to take these people alive. But Andrew, he had already decided to murder any survivors, woman and child be damned. He didn't care. The Jinchurikitsuri bloodline was a blight on this world. To him, the moment a Jinchurikitsuri was born, they were beyond redemption. Kill any who don't take their own lives. No prisoners, he ordered coldly. Feel free to take some time too. His troops immediately carried out the order, and there were actually a few that did not take their own lives as the Jinchurikitsuri were told to do by their leaders rather than being taken prisoner. It didn't matter. The clan was hated so much that their victims became monsters themselves and had no mercy. The smoke from the explosions had cleared, partially being sucked into the black holes. Kokatsu had sprung up at the last second, but he was still scorched from the blast that had not been fully absorbed. He then found himself fighting with Raisin for control of a single black hole that he tried to seize control of, in hopes of taking him by surprise and firing the Quasar right through him right after he had formed the black holes. But unfortunately, Kokatsu was just barely able to dispel it before he could succeed, and he fired the remainder of the Quasars down at the two, who had to dodge quickly. Kokatsu then tried to send some rubble after them, but this time, Zion used a few Limbo clones to block, and two struck Kokatsu, sending him flying back. At this point, Kokatsu finally decided he had had enough, and created all the black holes he could, and unsealed every single one of his clan forged weapons. "Oh man, he's finally going to come after us with all of his power," Raisin grunted. "And, yep, he actually is a little stronger than me right now, as I had suspected." Indeed, Raisin's current limit for creating black holes without putting risky amounts of strain on his own body was 45. Kokatsu had 47, 24 orbiting around his body, the rest just hovering. All of his unsealed weaponry was also floating near him, as well as all the rubble from the collapsed center part of the compound that had once surrounded the throne room. Gravity-style advent of creation's destruction, Kokatsu intoned. Zion then drew the blade he had, which was Elemental Infinity, which had chosen him as its newest wielder after Alexis had died, and he now wielded it with the promise to return it to the Ashoryu clan after his death. Then we should answer in kind, he told Raisin. He clapped his hands together and said, Chibaku Tensei. Pouring all the chakra he could into it, powered a little by Elemental Infinity, he tossed up the imitation of a black hole, and Raisin floated up, putting it between himself and Kokatsu. I agree. Gravity-style advent of creation's destruction. He imitated Kokatsu. 45 black holes were made, 23 orbiting Raisin, and he unsealed his own weapons, though he didn't have quite as many as Kokatsu had at his disposal. Still, it was plenty to use the strongest jutsu technique of the Jinshukuetsuri clan. Kokatsu shouted, launching all of his weapons and rubble at the Chibaku Tensei sphere and Raisin, before firing quasars from all his black holes not orbiting, all to overwhelm Raisin's defense, and set off the sphere as it started to form the planetoid, only for Raisin to counter as best as he could, while the Elder Dimension Army and the Knights of Justice, having finished the rest of the battle, got clear. It was now down to this fight. The sky was lit up with flashes from many a quasar. Blasts could be heard as the titanic clash in the sky took place. Eventually, the Chibaku Tensei sphere finished forming, and Raisin roared as he sent it flying at Kokatsu, who used all his black holes to defend, blocking the small planetoid and absorbing as much as possible, before releasing all the absorbed energy as quasars blasted the sphere apart and overwhelmed Raisin's own black holes, sending him flying back, his armor damaged. But Kokatsu had sacrificed his defense to do it, which was the mistake that cost him the battle, and Zion had flown behind him, using metal wings made with a surer path, and stabbed him through the chest from behind. At the same time, a gladius impaled him from the front, having been sent with a gravity burst from Raisin. Blood came out of Kokatsu's mouth as he processed his defeat. Well done. Enjoy your meaningless victory. The sheep will not accept lions into their flock. Both of you, especially you Raisin, will have no place in this world you have created. He then went limp as Zion pulled Elemental Infinity out and died as he fell back down to earth, his already dead body breaking as it impacted. Zion and Raisin landed next to each other, panting slightly, tired, but pleased with themselves. It was over. They had defeated the Jinshukuetsuri clan for good. A year had passed since that final battle, and much had happened. The republic that they had planned on creating was now at its infancy, and the two heroes were out drinking. General Andrew's trial is tomorrow, Zion stated after his last shot. I know, but I doubt he'll be convicted, considering who his crimes were against, Raisin said, a little bitterly. It had come to light in recent days that Andrew had ordered the surviving Jinshukuetsuri be slaughtered, and despite the ruling council being hesitant to do so, Zion had made them have Andrew arrested to await trial. Considering all the evidence that there were newborn Jinshukuetsuri infants among them, I doubt they won't. Everyone has standards, you know, Zion shrugged. Yeah, and the standards they have are all Jinshukuetsuri are evil animals that need to die. Period. Raisin shrugged. I'm the last one now, though, so it won't matter once I'm gone. I certainly don't plan on condemning any offspring of mine to a life of scorn and discrimination. At least the assassination attempts have stopped, Zion said, fighting down the desire to tell Raisin about Emiko. Only because the Knights of Justice and some others among the new government threatened to rebel if they continued, Raisin replied. Indeed, there were growing numbers of people who finally were starting to see Raisin for who he was, though it was still too few. I honestly think I should leave the Elder Dimension soon. Give it time. Things will get better, Zion said. Let it be said that Zion, for all his wisdom as a sage, was simply not a seer by any stretch of the imagination. Things had gone to hell just a week later. True to Raisin's predictions, Andrew was found not guilty, though the vote was a little closer than he expected. Cold comfort when the result was the same. So Andrew had gotten off scot-free, though not from any lack of effort on Raisin's part. But it hadn't even stopped there. Andrew and several of his troops procured several claymore swords, and had one of their own members kill them. Their desire to have Raisin dealt with so consuming, their own lives were considered disposable in the endeavor. Leaving the weapons behind, the one who did the deed claimed Raisin had murdered Andrew and his lieutenants, having even implanted a false memory of it with a pulse imprint jutsu to serve as testimony. Thus, Raisin himself stood trial, and Zion defended him, pointing out that Raisin's chakra signature was not on the weapons, and that while doctoring one's own memories with the pulse imprint jutsu was quite a difficult feat, it was far from impossible. It hadn't mattered. There were still enough people biased against him to ensure that his conviction was a done deal. He was sentenced to die. Zion continued to argue for him, but Raisin told him it was better he die now so that the matter could just rest for good. But as he awaited his sentence in his prison cell, the Knights of Justice as a whole had snapped and began causing chaos as they started to openly rebel, breaking him out of prison against his wishes. Things were getting extremely bloody, and Zion was trying to talk down both sides. Raisin then attempted to take his own life in a desperate attempt to stop the fighting, only for Zion to strike him hard and threaten to just use the samsara of heavenly life on him as many times as he died and whittle away his own life force. Thus, in the chaos, Raisin fled and found himself in the wilderness, just thinking on all that had happened. His very existence had caused a freaking civil war, and he had no clue how to stop at this point, and Zion made it clear that he was not going to just let Raisin up and die. But even so, Raisin was certain even he would be unable to stop the fighting. There were too many people on both sides who felt too strongly on their positions. The Knights of Justice and his other sympathizers who saw him for the hero he had been, and the rest, the ones too deeply scarred by the wounds the Jinchuriki clan had inflicted on them. He was an unwilling martyr, and he had no idea how to stop the violence and the bloodshed anymore. For close to 3 years, Raisin had lived out in the wilderness by himself. The open war had slowed a little, but was still running hot, and it was clear that both sides were gearing up for some grand battle in their efforts to impose their side. Zion's efforts were literally the only thing keeping things from being worse. He was trying to use words instead of force, but it only cooled tempers rather than extinguished them. Raisin walked out towards a meadow in an attempt to capture a moment of inner peace, when he heard a strange echo in his head, shaking it. He looked around before hearing it again, this time clearer, before an alien voice spoke in it. "You seek to bring peace to this ailing world? I can help you with that." "Who are you?" Raisin asked the voice then, trying and failing to find its source. "I am but a wandering echo of the mind of a god. I am Yggdrasil, the being known as the World Tree. I've heard of you. Legends called you an evil god that destroyed the original dimension, killing countless people in the process, and resulting in multiple smaller dimensions. You were defeated, however, and sealed away, though remaining legends are vague. What exactly do you want with me?" "I want help regaining my stolen power. Kaguya stole it, and her children distributed it among humanity. I was simply trying to get back what was mine," Yggdrasil replied. "But I can share it with one, such as you. Aid me, and I will help you bring peace to this world." "I'm listening." Zion's heart plummeted as he finally caught up to Raisin. He could not believe what his closest friend had become. Tokara had been right after all. Raisin had become broken after losing almost everything important to him, and finding that the majority of the Elder Dimension rejected him, made it clear that as far as they were concerned, there was no place for him in this dimension. Zion had tried. He really did, but he hadn't been able to reach his friend who was now riding atop the abomination known as the Juubi, and they were tearing through the ranks of the Elder Dimension's assorted armies. There were a few steaming wounds on the hide of the Juubi, indicating that the Elder Dimension forces were managing to put up a decent fight at least. But said wounds were healing rapidly, and most attempts to organize a major attack against Yggdrasil's body were being sabotaged by Raisin himself, who was blasting the hastily moving troops with gravity blast after gravity blast. How had this happened? Well, Raisin, after his 3-year-long disappearance, had shown up to Zion's home and asked him to accompany him to a remote location, claiming there was a group from another dimension with a high level of power hiding out there, and that he'd wanted to ascertain their intent. He then led Zion to a seemingly endless staircase, one that was going down, almost to the core of the whole dimension. Down there had been 2 doors, one of which required a Rinnegan to open, and Zion realized where they truly were. This was the tomb of Kaguya and Hagoromo Oitsutsuki, and of Yggdrasil sealed inside the corpse of Kaguya. Behind the door that required Rinnegan was the mind of the evil god, and behind a far less fortified door laid Hagoromo, the body of Yggdrasil tightly sealed in his own corpse. Raisin had tried to convince Zion to open the Rinnegan door, but Zion had refused. Despite Raisin's insistence, it was needed to bring peace. Zion feared at that moment that Raisin had gone mad. At Zion's insistence on not opening the door, and attempting to reason with his friend, Raisin had then blasted the door containing Hagoromo's corpse asunder, damaging the body in the process, and as Zion had realized with mounting horror, the seal containing the mindless body of the Juubi was also damaged. The mindless, but still fully capable of mindlessly rampaging and laying waste to all in its path beast. He dashed for the mummified body in a desperate dash, hoping he might manage to fix the seal, but Raisin had gotten between him and the rapidly escaping Juubi, and in the struggle, Zion had been struck and knocked unconscious by an unsealed tail of the 10-tailed monster. Upon coming to, he saw a layer of molten lava above him, held at bay only by seals that protected the chamber concealed at this dimension's core. The Juubi, more focused on freedom than finishing Zion off, had torn its way out of the chamber, climbing up and through the upper layer of the mantle and the crust of the earth of the Elder Dimension. Fearful of the path his friend was now walking, Zion quickly flew to the top of the chamber and followed the massive trail the rampaging abomination had left in its wake. Now, here they were, and Zion took a deep breath. He knew he had to stop his friend, whatever it took. His mind made up, he looked to see the Juubi beginning to form a massive Bijadama, preparing to lay waste to the entirety of the army before it. Not willing to allow that, Zion extended a hand, and with as much chakra as he could muster in that moment, shouted, Ban's Ho Tenin. The glowing dark red ball of volatile chakra was yanked backwards at Zion, who was behind the Juubi. Thus, the ball went straight down the mindless creature's own gullet. It went off, causing a momentary expansion of the beast and a roar of rage from it. Raisin slowly turned to face Zion and said, Can you not leave well enough alone? I'm going to wipe this corrupt government we started out and take over myself. Raisin, you know you can't do that. Alexis, Thomas, Richard, none of them would want to see you like this. They're dead. You have no right to speak for them, regardless of whether you are right or not. Raisin snapped, throwing a claymore at Zion, who deflected it with his Shinra Tensei. Now, Juubi, destroy the pawns of this corrupt republic. He then jumped off the creature's back, 2 more massive blades in hand. Raisin, we don't have to do this. Zion pleaded. You're right, we don't. You do have other options besides getting in my way. You could help me, or at least stay out of my way. What will it be? You leave me no choice then, Zion stated, clapping his hands together. Sage mode. He entered the sage mode of the snakes and summoned a gigantic turtle that was even slightly bigger than the 10 tails. It even had foliage growing on its back. Jinbu, hold off the Juubi, help the Elder Dimension forces and the Knights of Justice bring it down. Yes, Zion-sama. The turtle roared, smashing its body into the 10 tails. You haven't been idle these past 3 years, I see, Raisin remarked, looking at the turtle. You created one hell of a Rinnegan summon and made him sentient too. He then slashed at seemingly nothing, which was in fact a limbo clone, which took damage, much to Zion's shock. Don't forget, I can sense your limbo clones with my sonar sensory jutsu, and I sealed some of the Juubi's nature energy into my weapons, so I can actually damage them for this fight. Such seals won't last that long, I admit, but long enough. You won't be able to end this early by using that jutsu to catch me by surprise. Fine, Zion grunted, creating a chakra rod, and charging at Raisin, who began to duel with Zion in close quarters, before blasting him back with a blast of gravity manipulation, and then threw a claymore at him, only for Zion to use another limbo clone as a shield, and send 2 more to flank Raisin, who ducked their attacks, and unsealed 2 more claymores to cut them, but they fell back. Raisin then raised an eyebrow. 20 limbo clones at a time? He asked before blocking one and getting smacked by another, and then another before managing to break away and cut down the next. When we fought Kokatsu, you could only make 5. You must have been doing some serious training with some help from solid clones to get this far in 3 years. Summoning Jutsu, Zion shouted, calling forth a pack of Rinnegan-bearing wolves to rush Raisin, attempting to overwhelm him with numbers while he was occupied with the limbo clones, only for Raisin to rapidly fly up and flatten the earth below him with a gravity burst, causing Zion to go flying back, and his wolves to dispel, while his clones pursued Raisin, getting in some hits, but being slashed in repeated retaliation. Then, before they could corner him and break off more than a few chinks in his armor, the time limit on them ran out, and Zion cursed as they returned to his body. With 20 clones, his current limit was a minute at a time, and the cooldown was about 5. You've gotten stronger, but so have I, Raisin said, casting some hand seals and sending a lightning-enhanced water tiger after Zion, who absorbed it with Predapath. Followed by being impaled when Raisin took advantage of his momentary stillness to put a claymore through him, only for Zion to go out in a burst of smoke, having been a clone, and he tried to catch Raisin off guard with the Ashura Path wings and a chakra cannon, but Raisin dodged and sent a few black holes at Zion, forcing him to dodge as well, throwing in a Shinra Tensei to counteract the gravitational pull towards them. So naive? Did you really think I would let up my sonar sense just because your limbo ran out? He asked, landing again as Zion also touched down. Didn't really think you would, but it was worth a try at the very least, so more like hoping, Zion admitted easily. He then summoned his boar, which charged Raisin, who responded by summoning 5 large Spinegras, which ganged up on and tore apart the boar, and Zion then summoned a massive Tyrannosaurus Rex, which dwarfed the spined and armored crocodiles at Raisin's disposal, and had a bite force to match, as evidenced when it easily bit right through one, forcing it to disperse to avoid fatal injury, and then lashed out with its tail, knocking two others on their back. It then used its clawed feet to injure them, and forced them to dispel as well, while the remaining two bit down on the beast's hide, managing to make it roar in pain. Earth style, Goliath soldier. Raisin shouted, creating the massive stone soldier, and it tackled Zion's T-Rex, forcing it to dispel as well, while Zion then proceeded to call forth a large bat, which flew up to them, and unleashed a sonic shriek, intense enough to force Raisin to cover his ears, and to confuse his sonar sensing, as well as causing his remaining two summoned Spinagoras to leave. Zion, having dove underground to avoid his own creature's sonic attack, emerged behind Raisin once it ended, and ran him through from behind with a chakra rod, only for him to disperse into electricity, being a lightning clone, and shocking Zion, who barely managed to avoid some pretty bad damage by using Predapath, even as Raisin blasted out from inside his Goliath soldier, which had evidently been made with a hollowed-out portion for him to hide himself in while leaving the clone behind. He then levitated multiple boulders and flung them at Zion, who dodged them, just barely. Then, Raisin directed his jutsu to throw a punch at Zion, who responded by thrusting both hands out and shouted, "Almighty push." With a massive amount of gravitational force coming for him, Raisin responded with an equally intense gravity blast, which impacted Zion's, canceling each other out. This, however, masked Zion's true intent. A large storm of missiles was flying at Raisin and his soldier, and impacted, sending chunks of rock and dust flying up as Raisin crossed his arms to block, as well as creating multiple black holes to absorb as much as he could on short notice, followed by sending the resulting quasars back at Zion, even with his armor damaged, and revealing some damaged parts of his flesh. Zion dodged and summoned three more creatures, one a large griffin and another a giant tiger, the third being a massive spider that tried to ensnare Raisin in its webbing, managing to succeed, only for Raisin to suck them in a few more black holes and try to blast Zion again. Zion managed to dodge them, and Raisin, his armor damaged and revealing some damaged parts of his flesh, flew back up from his ruined stone soldier to avoid the tiger, spun to avoid the bat, and kicked the griffin, stunning it long enough for him to get his preparations ready. He undid all of his seals and unsealed a large number of his claymores, enough for it to rain weaponry for a brief time, in other words, thousands. Gravity-style, endless, descending blade graveyard. He roared, bringing them all down, and Zion's eyes widened as he tried to repel a bunch of them, and succeeded for a moment with Shinra Tensei, but found himself dodging a lot of them, even as his four animal path summons were brutally dispelled. Zion continued to dodge, one blade managing to graze him fairly deeply down the back as it came down, forcing him to use a chakra rod to block another. This made him briefly unable to dodge. He then used Ashura Path missiles to blast other blades off course, and the rain of blades eventually ended, only for Raisin to shun Shin in front of Zion, and kicked him in the gut, causing him to spit up blood as he flew backwards and into a boulder, smashing it. Zion got up, bloodied, and fired an Ashura Path cannon at Raisin as he rushed Zion, forcing him to block with crossed arms, and blasting away more of his armor. Zion then got up, and a silver aura surrounded him. It grew out to a massive size, forming his Susanoo. Raisin got up, a little more damaged than before, and narrowed his eyes as he stared up at the massive winged samurai. However, Zion was not done, and summoned one of the snakes this time, the boss of them in fact. "Hey Amikiri, help me out, would you?" Zion asked, his Susanoo starting to wrap around the serpent, which nodded its head. "Of course, Zion. Let's deal with him here and now," the snake declared. Raisin, meanwhile, flew back up, and his claymores all started to pull themselves from the ground with him manipulating their gravity again to make them float around him again, and he formed 48 black holes, 24 of them surrounding him in orbit. Gravity-style advent of creation's destruction. Raisin shouted. Both sides stared at each other, and Zion pleaded with Raisin one more time. "Raisin, help me stop the 10 tails, and I'll let you go. Don't destroy everything we strived for all this time. It's too late for me to turn back, Zion. There's nothing for me left in this world." Raisin stated sadly, and Zion looked confused. "What do you mean?" he asked, beginning to have an inkling of what was going through Raisin's head at this moment. "It doesn't matter now. Let's go, Zion," Raisin shouted, rushing forward, his massive arsenal of weaponry and black holes coming with him. "Have it your way, Raisin," Zion called back, his Susanoo-clad summon also surging forward, and Raisin's blades and several black holes moved forth. Zion created multiple solid clones, all using Ashura Path, and met the onslaught with chakra beams, missiles, and a few elemental jutsu. The black holes were overloaded at most points, though one managed to fire a quasar that was met by 2 Ashura Path beams that managed to redirect it into only grazing along the side of Amikiri, stripping off some Susanoo armor in the process. The hands of the Susanoo, still on it, slashed out at the onslaught of weaponry with their own spectral katanas, deflecting much of the attack, as well as Amakiri spitting acidic venom to dissolve and deflect some, hitting many multiple times with his tail. Some rubble smashed into the Susanoo armor, cracking it as the titanic struggle carried on. Several Limbo clones and Yasaka Magatama beads were launched forward, further defending against the black holes being used offensively, and several missiles and beams got through Raisin's attack, only to meet his defensively orbiting black holes and get absorbed. But Zion was not done, and used the extra arms of the Ashura Path to simultaneously cast 3 hand seals. Tengai Shinsei, he declared, calling down a mass of meteorites, preferring to use multiple smaller ones for this jutsu to easier control the collateral damage, as they were all drawn to Raisin, who proceeded to use his defending black holes to absorb as much as possible, and obliterate the rest with quases, and fired 10 large ones as a final stage to his attack against Zion, who blocked as much of the energy as possible with his Limbo clone's last seconds. This weakened the beams enough that despite them all hitting Amakiri, the Susanoo held well enough to only have him get injured in each spot rather than fatally damaged. Pulling the remainder of the spectral armor back around him to reform as the ribcage of the Susanoo, Zion shouted, "That's enough, Amakiri. Dismissed." The current boss snake dispelled, and Raisin blocked Zion's attack with the arm of the Susanoo wielding a blade with 2 reclaimed claymores, and they both landed, panting. Zion's Sage mode had worn off, and Raisin had similarly exhausted himself with his last jutsu. Raisin then noted that a massive dimension door had opened, and the Elder Dimension forces, along with Zion's massive turtle summons, were all pushing the 10 tails towards it with all their strength and jutsu. "Raisin!" Zion bellowed, rushing Raisin with chakra rods once more. "Zion!" Raisin roared right on back, meeting the charge with his own. Both fighters were wheezing with the exertion of their fight several minutes later. The Elder Dimension army had managed to drive the 10 tails out of the Elder Dimension through the dimension door they had created, and they were now just waiting for Zion to finish things, Jinbu having already dismissed himself. They were clashing weapons, Raisin claiming claymore after claymore that were scattered all over the battlefield to replace, ones that broke as he kept on clashing with Zion, and Zion was consistently replacing his chakra rods with more as they broke in the middle of combat. Their chakra levels were down to some of their last dregs at this point. It was now a matter of who ran out of energy first or who managed to inflict a serious wound. Raisin swung a single claymore with both hands, and Zion dodged, circling around behind Raisin and trying to stab him with a rod, only for Raisin to lash out a backwards kick, knocking Zion away. Zion recovered, throwing the rod, which Raisin deflected, followed by a thrown stone Zion had tried to sneak in. Zion then charged, making another rod, disarming Raisin with it, but Raisin grabbed him by the throat and threw him to the ground, pinning him with his knees and began striking him with his fists, breaking his nose, but Zion managed to throw him off after using a weak Banzho Tenin to pull a rock to hit Raisin in the head, stunning him. He then formed another chakra rod to try to stab Raisin, but Raisin grabbed it and punched Zion in the gut, then kicked him down before trying to stab him with his own rod. Zion rolled out of the way and used a sweep kick on Raisin to make him hit the ground heavily, and made another rod as he got up, only to watch it crumble as he did not have enough chakra left to make another one properly. This let Raisin knock him to the ground with a weak gravity burst, and as he was getting up, Raisin unsealed his close quarters gladius and slowly approached Zion. Zion then weakly grabbed the wrist of Raisin's free hand. "It's over," Raisin said after a moment and stabbed down, before a chakra rod impaled him from behind, held by a Limbo clone. "How? How did you have enough chakra left to make a Limbo clone? You know how, don't pretend you don't. You could have stopped me from absorbing your chakra easily," Zion told him as Raisin sank to his knees. Indeed, grabbing Raisin's wrist was a last-ditch effort to use Predapath and steal the chakra needed, something he expected to fail. You threw the fight." "Why?" Raisin met Zion's eyes and realized he would not be able to fool his friend, and lowered his gaze. "Because I never intended to do what I said I did. Using Yggdrasil's power to bring peace. That was a lie. He offered to help me, but I rejected his offer. I then pretended for your benefit that I was in fact going along with Yggdrasil's efforts to get free and that I was too far gone. So you wouldn't hesitate, so no one would mourn me. All that I have done, what I am. There were too many people fighting for my sake. The war would have gone on and cost so many lives had it been allowed to continue. So I made sure that no one would mourn me." Raisin collapsed fully. "That's..." "Raisin, you didn't have to." Zion responded, kneeling beside his friend. "I did, Zion. I was nothing but a martyr without a cause before. Now, the Knights of Justice will have no reason to continue to fight against the Elder Dimension. At the cost of your life and reputation, though," Zion protested. "Expendable, both of them. Besides, my reputation would never have been allowed to be unblemished in the history books. I'm a Jinchukui Tsuri, remember? He laughed weakly, coughing up blood. Zion immediately moved to summon the King of Hell to heal him, but Raisin grabbed his arm. Don't, Zion. I want this. I can reunite with Alexis now. Ever since I lost her, the only things I had left to live for were you and our goals. The latter of which my existence were now a threat to. Don't let our efforts go to waste. And you have to make sure Yggdrasil cannot return either. Deal with the 10 tails for me, would you? Whichever dimension they sent it to. Stop it. Zion gripped Raisin's hand and nodded weakly, tears flowing. Raisin turned his gaze to the sky before the life faded from his eyes, and his body went limp as Zion released his hand, letting it fall to the ground. He then stood up and turned to everyone as they were cheering for his victory, oblivious to Raisin's true motives, his real reasons for unleashing the 10 tails and coming after them. True to Raisin's words, the civil war had ended, and not nearly as many people as one would expect from the release of the 10 tails had died, partly due to Raisin subtly running interference as it rampaged. Zion was considered the hero. Despite his desire to tell the truth, he respected Raisin's wishes. People then started calling him the second sage of 6 paths, but he regardless left the Elder Dimension to pursue the 10 tails, leaving the government he and Raisin had established to rebuild. And in addition, he left Elemental Infinity behind, back in the hands of the remainder of the Ishoryu clan. Emiko would grow up to be a great knight, never aware of her true heritage. Joshua had spread the half-lie that no one knew who her father was, but they did know that it was one of the Knights of Justice. She was one of Elemental Infinity's chosen wielders, and through her children, Raisin's bloodline continued, unknown to those who would see it ended. Zion, of course, successfully defeated the 10 tails by becoming its Jinchuriki, and settled down in the dimension he had saved from it rather than returning to the Elder Dimension, where too many things would have reminded him of all he had lost there. It somehow became written in history that he was exiled there, but that exile was in fact entirely self-imposed. In a happily ending story, this would be where things would have ended, on a bittersweet note, but alas. Fate was not done with Raisin. Caius, still wearing his cloak, walked across the desolate landscape, and surveyed it with a calculating eye. Truly amazing, the power of the 10 tails. Even without its mind, it is a force to be reckoned with. To think you once held even greater power than that. Indeed. But for now, you must focus, an all too familiar voice said in the figure's head. Quickly now, find the body. Understood, the figure replied, moving to find freshly dug up earth, where Zion had interred his friend's remains, and began to dig. After some time, he unearthed the body of Raisin. Are you certain he's the one we need to lead the effort? The figure asked. Resurrecting you is something I plan to do for ages. Bringing this one into the fold and handing him the reins just like that is a risk to all we've strived for. I'm sure he possesses rare qualities and powers, and will be relentless in accomplishing his goals. He sought to use me in his gamble to unite the Elder Dimension, but he will eventually see that he will have to work with us to bring the peace he so desperately desires. It is merely a matter of time, and letting him see just how pointless and fruitless his efforts all are. Even if it takes centuries, or even a few millennia, he will come around sooner or later. All humans, however strong their will, have a breaking point. He's just the type to not give up on his goals, so long as he lives. So long as we can turn that mindset into the direction we need, then he'll be a near unstoppable asset. Even if he does turn out to be our undoing, I am immortal. I'll simply start anew. Slowly, the figure nodded and unsealed a second corpse, and surgically altered it to resemble Raisin before reburying it, so as to hopefully ensure his theft was never discovered. He could have just taken the standard DNA and reburied Raisin's corpse, but a Shikokyo that got his hands on the DNA of the undead thrall of a second Shikokyo could potentially wrest control of the thrall away. Obviously, that was an undesirable possibility, so he took no chances. Besides, if something occurred to send Raisin back to the pure realm after his revival, having the body on hand would save him another trip to undoing that blip in the plan. Not to mention, it'd ensure the corpse did not get destroyed or otherwise become inaccessible to him. This way, the only things that would strip Raisin from the whole plan would be to either seal Raisin, body, soul, or both, or somehow give him closure while he was reanimated. He then sealed Raisin's corpse and left, seeking to get some distance from the burial site before he was discovered. After a few more hours, he began building a pyre to burn the original corpse once he had what he wanted. After extracting the needed blood from the body, he burned it, and then unsealed a still living knight, captured from a previous fight the figure had been in. Sustained and rendered insane by the special isolation seals. The man barely even registered what was going on anymore before he started crying out in pain, courtesy of the figure starting up the Edo Tensei Jutsu. It did not take long for the ashes to reform into the shape of the newly reanimated Raisin Jinshikwaitsuri. He blinked and stared at the figure, and demanded, "Who dares to reanimate me?" "My name is Caius Shikokio," the figure replied, removing his hood. "I'm a servant of Yggdrasil." "I see. So it's like that then." "The answer is still no. I will not help you return to power," Raisin stated bluntly. Once again, he heard the echoing voice of Yggdrasil in his head. "I thought you'd say that, but you will eventually. You simply have yet to truly comprehend the cruel nature of the world you live in and the irredeemable hearts of mankind. They'll never succeed in becoming mature on their own. It's up to unique men like yourself and gods like me to set them on the right path." "Get lost," Raisin snarled, before turning to walk away. "You shouldn't have revived me, but now that you have, I'm going my own way. I don't need your help. I've given the Elder Dimension an opportunity to grow and change. Now, I'm going to travel and do the same for other dimensions." As he started to walk away, Kai's called after him, "I'm going to stay in touch with you via the jutsu. You're too strong to be controlled outright, even when you're not at full strength, but we will wait as long as it takes and keep you updated on our progress. You'll eventually see your opportunities for mankind to grow will never be taken. When you are ready, ask me to fully restore your life." Raisin stopped momentarily before he wordlessly opened a dimension door and stepped through. It was about 5 decades later when Caius first contacted him. Raisin had been using his immortal existence to travel the dimensions and overthrowing oppressive governments, installing republics in their place, and had thus managed to improve the destinies of several dimensions by that point. He'd briefly visited the dimension Zion had gone to check on his friend. He did not know what possessed him to refrain from revealing himself and exposing Yggdrasil's existence and continued plots to Zion, but in the end he turned away from that chance. Was he already skeptical of his own chances and those of Zion's? He often wondered. Did, in the back of his mind, he already decide to keep his options open and take Yggdrasil up on his offer? "It may interest you to know," Kaius began, "that Zion has recently passed away." The undead, Jinshikwaitsuri, turned to gaze at the necromancer who'd brought him back. "Such is the nature of time," he eventually replied. "Though in my state, the ravages will not touch me, nor you, with your cowardly methods of staving it off." "I'm so hurt," Caius replied sarcastically. "Actually, no I'm not. I stopped caring what people thought of me long ago. If I was concerned with the thoughts of others towards me, I'd be dead now." "So then, what did Zion do with the 10 tails?" Raisin asked, crossing his arms. "Did he use the same bindings as Hagoromo to contain it even in death?" "No. He instead pulled its chakra from the body and split it into 9 pieces, as well as creating souls for all of them, and then created a moon to hide the body inside, and even did something strange to his own chakra and genetics. He had 2 sons, neither of which will possess the Rinnegan, nor will their descendants have the whole recipe for it." Raisin laughed. "Sound to me like your goal's just getting further and further away. And last I checked, Zion brought that dimension together, and it is now at peace, and his sons inherited his will. Doesn't sound like your help will be needed. If peace can successfully be brought to one dimension, it can be brought to others." "Heh, it's peaceful now, but will it still be, now that Zion's dead?" "Give it a few years, and we'll see what happens," Caius remarked before stepping back through a dimension door. It was 5 years later, as Raisin processed the shock of what he was seeing. He'd come back to check on Zion's sons, only to find out they'd spent the last 4 years and 7 months at war. 6 months? They couldn't stay at peace for even 6 months. Now, he was wordlessly staring at the massive crater caused by their most recent struggle. Where had it gone wrong? Zion had chosen Ashura as his successor, and his elder brother Indra had rejected it and started a war to take what he felt entitled to. Raisin sighed as he created the dimension door to leave. "It's a shame, isn't it?" Caius asked conversationally. Things were actually going well, and yet all it took was one single stupid and entitled brat to make things go to hell. See how fragile it is, even the most peaceful of times? Humanity is just too foolish for all their supposed intelligence. Raisin didn't even bother answering as he stepped through the door. Caius simply smirked. He's not ready yet, but this was surely a start. Yggdrasil mused in Caius's head. Another year passed, and Indra was taking a late-night stroll during a stormy night as he contemplated his most recent loss to his brother. After washing the cold sweat he'd woken up and off his face, he looked up and froze as in a mirror, a figure shrouded in darkness was behind him, a gladius unsheathed. With incredible reflexes, he leapt for the door, but was yanked back by an unseen force and brutally slashed from his left shoulder to right hip deeply enough to bisect his heart. He hadn't even had time to use Kamui. The last thing he heard before his life was snuffed out by his injury was, "Zion's son or not, you've gone too far and are now in the way to peace in this dimension. You shamed the memory of your father by destroying all he'd worked for. Hopefully, your brother can clean up your mess with you out of the way. Lightning flashed outside the window, Brayfly illuminating his corpse, and the face of Raisin, his killer, before Raisin escaped via a dimension door, sighing as he'd wished he could have spared one of Zion's sons. But alas, Indra just couldn't grow up and accept reality, and was making everyone else pay the price. It had to be done. Depression. That was the only word that described Raisin's current state of mind. It had been almost a century since he'd had enough of Indra's shit and murdered him, hoping it'd set the world back on the right track. But he'd underestimated the hatred Indra had passed on to his children. Now, the Uchiha clan, as Indra's descendants were called, were now locked in conflict with the Senju, as Ashura's descendants were called, a war with no end in sight. He contemplated simply wiping out the Uchiha clan altogether. But it wasn't their fault Indra had seen to them having such violent dispositions, nor did he even really think wiping out an entire clan would really change things. Some other group was bound to enter conflict eventually. Would he have to kill them all too? Or the group after that? He might as well wipe out the human race at that rate. Killing just one person who was a problem for everyone was one thing. He'd had no issue with his murder of Indra. Frankly, the only reason he'd held back as long as he did was that he'd been the son of his former best friend. But Ashura just couldn't pound some sense into his older brother, so Raisin acted. But killing entire families or groups? It was just going too far to close to the methods Yggdrasil and Caius would be having him use for comfort. On top of all that, many of the governments he'd set up in other dimensions to peacefully govern had been falling apart. Corruption and infighting had perverted them from their original forms, until they resembled the tyrannies he'd taken apart in the first place and led to rebellions and bloodshed. Nothing he tried was lasting. The few governments that had yet to fall apart were already starting to fester, and it was only a matter of time before they too degenerated into chaos. Even the Elder Dimension had had a civil war in the time since he'd tried to sacrifice himself and his good name, and tensions were still hot. Would it ever stabilize? And if it did, could it possibly stay stable indefinitely? So many opportunities, none of them having a guarantee. But why couldn't one opportunity have been taken by the people it was given to? Hence, Raisin found himself under a cloak at a bar in a decently developed dimension, attempting to drown his sorrows in strong booze. It was at about his fourth bottle he actually remembered that as his body was an Edo Tensei animated corpse now, it just couldn't do anything for him anymore. Angrily, he threw the bottle against the wall and stormed out of the bar. How was he supposed to deal with this? Constantly trying and failing, watching his efforts just fall apart all the time? He couldn't even get drunk to forget his troubles anymore. It was too much. For a moment, his thoughts turned to Yggdrasil. Maybe it was the only way. If he only had a god's power. He frowned and rapidly shook his head. No, he was better than that, stronger than that. He'd move on. He would persevere. He'd find a path that led to a bright future for mankind. And he'd do it his way. He didn't need the help of a so-called god. It had been about 5 centuries since Raisin had been revived. The Elder Dimension was currently on its 7th civil war since he'd been killed by Zion. Still better than the dimension Zion had left behind. At least those civil wars ended and had some peace between them. The Senju and Uchiha had been going at it non-stop somehow, and Raisin had destroyed a small mountain in a fit of blind rage when he found out that they were treating having children as a means to refill the ranks, and making said children fight to pull it off. It was so much like the way the Jinchukui Tsuri used to operate, far too much. And all the while, Raisin was continuing to be repeatedly badgered by Caius, who just refused to grasp the meaning of the term no. Not that Caius was actively pressuring him, he just kept on giving him updates on things related to the goal he had in mind. Things like the movements of the tailed beasts, who in the Senju or Uchiha might figure out how to reawaken the Rinnegan, and the splintering of the Senju clan, one small group going off to form the Uzumaki clan. No, he was never outright asked by Caius to join his and Yggdrasil's path, only given tidbits of information. It was actually far more insidious, really. It made him consider regularly how to use the information. Think about how easy it would be to round up the beasts, given Uchiha, or Senju, or even an Uzumaki the right information, and how he could become a god. Even more infuriating was whenever he failed to bring peace to even a single dimension. Caius always showed up to point out why he'd failed, and mentioned that if he would become a god, he'd have all the power he could ever need to fix things, and make it stick. But again and again, Raisin refused. He still firmly believed in the path that he and Zion had embarked on when they had finished their struggle against his clan. He just had to find a way. He just was getting so mentally weary, it was hard to stay optimistic, but he'd find a way. If there was anything that could be called true peace, he'd resolved to find it. He wouldn't give up. He couldn't give up because it was only when one gave up that they ever truly lost. He'd fight against the harsh reality of this world, to the bitter end if need be. Raisin had taken a more active role in his endeavors. It had now been nearly 800 years since his resurrection. He continued to overthrow tyrannic regimes and tried different versions of republics and democracies, trying to find a fair and stable government. But more than that, he spent more time among the peoples of the dimensions he'd sought to help. He'd taken to wearing a strong jinjutsu to hide his Edo Tensei features, of course, and had yet for anyone to see through it. Scratch the concern, his jinjutsu was getting rusty. As he spent his time among people, he established himself as something of an ideal, a standard many people sought to live up to by way of altruistic behavior, helping others, and teaching his ideals. Perhaps if his visions for a better future could be shared with as many people as possible, it had present an opportunity, one that mankind would finally take up and create a world worth striving for. It wasn't all that long before people thought he was in fact a messiah, a messenger of the benevolent gods. He denied all such claims and stated to those who made the claim, "I'm not a god, nor am I the servant of one. I am just a man and have only the power attainable by man and doing what I can with it." Eventually, he was approached by a child, a young girl who'd lost her family to a group of bandits, and she asked him this, "Sir Raisin, can you bring my parents and my brother back?" Raisin's heart had been in great pain as he'd reluctantly answered, "No, I don't have the power, Torv of the dead, whatever the rumors about me say. Death is a natural part of life, and something I can't undo." "But you can," the girl protested. "Everyone says that. They say you can help anyone who needs it." "I don't have the power of a god," Raisin insisted. "I'm only a human, a powerful human, but still a human." "You're lying," she cried, firmly in denial, refusing to let go of the false hope she'd been given. "You can do it. You just won't." "Why won't you? I need your help. Why won't you give it?" "Because it's beyond my power," Raisin replied. "I'm not omnipotent. There are some things I just can't do, however much I might wish it." "You're a fraud," she shouted at him. "People think such good things about you, but you won't help me." Unable to take it anymore, she fled, shedding tears. And of course, Caius was by moments after. "What a pity. You are just a man as you are now, albeit a powerful, immortal, undead one. And as long as you insist on staying that way, people will continue to suffer like that. Children like her will continue to suffer like that," he told him. "Just go away," Raisin ordered in a low growl. "You've got all the time in the world with that method of cheating death you possess. Do you really have nothing better to do with it than pester me?" Caius gave a mocking bow and left through the dimension door, leaving Raisin to stew. The sad thing was, Caius had been far too close to the truth for comfort. Every time someone had come to him, he'd done his best for them. But every time someone came to him with something he couldn't help with, it hurt him. It really hurt because he wanted to help but didn't have the power. Every time someone cried out to him in prayer, and he couldn't answer, he felt guilty that he was only human and didn't have enough power to create a lasting change. He felt guilty that he wasn't a god that could answer those prayers. Almost against his will, his thoughts once again turned to Caius and Yggdrasil's plan, before he shook his head and stormed away from the scene. 11 years after the girl had asked Raisin for help and failed to get it, she was a fairly beautiful young woman and should have had a rich and fulfilled life ahead of her. But instead, she'd thrown it all away. Raisin stared down at her lifeless body, her blood still dripping from a blade in his trembling hand, the weapon he'd been forced to use to end her life. She just couldn't deal with her grief or the harsh reality of having hope and then losing it, so she'd taken shelter within her own rage and hatred. It had just been easier for her at the end of the day, and she sought revenge, training to a point of actually being a formidable adversary for most. After killing all the bandits responsible for her family's deaths, she'd come to rely on her hatred to cope with it all, so she just couldn't let go of it. She'd then gone to kill the surviving town guards of that day, blaming them for not saving her family, then other survivors for living while her own family had died. She'd gone on hating so long, she didn't know how to stop anymore. She simply did not know how to live without hatred anymore. And when Raisin came to put an end to her rampage, he'd recognized her immediately. Because no matter how many people he'd failed, or how long it had been since said failures, he remembered all of them. And of course, she'd remembered him, and she blamed him for not being able to live up to her hopes. She was beyond reason, more rabid, suffering animal than human now. She'd attacked him, fully planning to kill him. So Raisin had cut her down. In the end, it was all he could do for her, putting a tortured soul out of her misery. He dropped his blade and said what he'd said to many who'd thought him almighty, this time in a lamenting tone, "I'm not a god, nor am I the servant of one. I am just a man and have only the power attainable by man and doing what I can with it. Why does it feel like nothing? Am I really doomed to fail every time with the power of a mere man?" "Yes, you are, no matter how much you try to deny it to yourself," said the voice of the last person Raisin wanted to talk to right now. He really hated the fact that the man was linked to him and could watch the world through his eyes. He just always had to show up when Raisin felt like this and twist the knife. "Go the fuck away, Caius. If you value your life even half as much as you seem to, you'll notice I have absolutely no patience for you right now," Raisin warned, flooding the area with Ki. He was just so fucking pissed right now. If Caius pushed him any further, he was liable to just snap and wreck the whole area, rending Caius to pieces while he was out of course. All right, have it your way, but this is only going to continue, Caius replied, actually sweating nervously before taking his leave, allowing Raisin some peace to brood at last. How long can I keep doing this, Alexis? Raisin asked, looking into the sky, pain dripping from his tone. Obviously, no answer was forthcoming. How long can I keep trying to walk this path? How many more times can I fail? He slumped, the metaphorical weight of the world feeling very crushing now indeed. Another week later, after calming some, Raisin was once again trying to drink away his sorrows. Despite the fact he couldn't get drunk, just the action of trying somehow brought a peace to his mind that sitting idle never could. Part of it was just because it reminded him somewhat of the times he and Alexis would get drunk together. This brought him a bit of pain too, but there were enough happy memories to focus on to distract him from the pain of regular life, for lack of a better term, considering his condition. Caius walked up to him and paused as he saw Raisin hitting another bottle, before asking incredulously, "Does that even do anything for you?" He'd never bothered trying to see if Edo Tensei could get drunk, so this legitimately confused him. Setting the bottle aside, Raisin simply said bitterly, "Not anymore. But then, I've been trying and failing at a whole lot of things lately, and I just can't seem to stop." Caius snorted. Anyone else would have quit long ago and just come to us. Yeah, well, I'm not anyone else, Raisin snapped. My answer's still the same. And why is that? You just keep on trying to prove mankind can move forward, but it's just a fantasy. Reality has shown you time and time again that it will just never work, but you ignore all evidence that points to it. There's an expression, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. You're arguing against reality here, Raisin, and news flash reality always wins over fantasy, regardless of your arguments on the side of fantasy. Oh, for the hate of Yggdrasil, just fucking shut up, Raisin roared, losing his temper as he flung the bottle at Caius, causing it to smash into his face, the Shikokyo staggering back with a pained cry as multiple cuts were bleeding profusely. You ass, you got glass and alcohol in my eyes, Caius shouted comically, only to get no reply. Hello, he asked, but Raisin had already left again, unseen by the currently blind man. Really, one would think that would have gotten a message across, but the good tree remained oh so very stubborn. 1,100 years into Raisin's resurrection, he found himself sinking, both literally and figuratively. It was really getting to him, the hopeless nature of his self-appointed task. Everything fell apart, no matter how much effort he put into it. How many civil wars had the Elder Dimension alone gone through since its struggle with the Juubi? He wasn't sure. He might have missed information on one of them, and he simply couldn't bring himself to look at their history books to try to confirm, but he knew for sure about 9, all bloody and long. And the other dimensions were for the most part even worse off, almost constantly at war. Even the one Zion had made his final home in. The Senju and Uchiha continued to engage in their pointless bloodletting. A part of him wondered, was it his fault? Was it a mistake to kill Indra, and cause the descendants of the psychopathic man-child to continue to pursue vengeance against the descendants of Ashura, who they blamed at the time? Had he allowed Indra to live, could Ashura have stopped the war, reached his brother eventually? It was a moot point. He'd never know. He had burned that bridge down that other path, and he was stuck with the results of the other bridge he'd chosen, and they just weren't good results. It did no good to wonder if things would have been better or worse with the path he'd rejected. He doubted he'd ever get a chance to make a similar choice anyway, so learning from his mistakes was not exactly going to help. Partly to avoid yet another encounter with that bastard Caius, and partly to avoid his own failings, he had taken a dimension door to just over the deepest ocean he knew of, and let himself fall right into it. Not like he could drown anyway, or be crushed by the water pressure. Well, he could be, but he'd regenerate just as fast as he was crushed. He settled on the bottom of the ocean after sinking for quite a while, and just laid there, unmoving, uncaring of his surroundings. Not like the fish were that interesting anyway. Even if he could see them, what with all the darkness caused by the sunlight unable to penetrate this deep beneath the waves. He actually felt at peace here, completely isolated from the worlds that just wouldn't stop tearing themselves apart, stopping just long enough to heal from it, and then starting the process all over again. Maybe he should just stay down here until Caius and Yggdrasil finally just gave up and sent him back to the pure realm, or until the end of time. Whichever came first was okay with him at this point. He was simply past the point of caring. So, how long do you intend to lay there? Caius's voice echoed in his head, causing him to mentally sigh. Of course the bastard was going to use the freaking mental connection to continue bothering him. Go away, he replied simply, not even remotely in the mood for this shit. Hell, it'd be easier to note the times he was in the mood. So, while then, fine, if you've reached this point, clearly talking to you isn't going to make you move your ass from that spot. But you'll get tired of this eventually. I've got eternity. Honestly, I'd have given up on you long ago if it was up to me, but Yggdrasil is still oh so certain you'll come around, and really, you're the strongest champion we can muster, so I'll keep waiting. Feel free not to. Raisin snorted, feeling Caius's presence Seb. He had eternity too, whether he liked it or not. Surely Caius, and her Yggdrasil, would give up sooner or later. It turned out that it may well be much later, because Raisin had honestly lost track of time he spent laying there. He thankfully didn't hear from Caius that often, or was it more often than he thought, and time seemed to move slower due to the sheer lack of event? He didn't know, and he honestly didn't give a damn. All he was doing now was continuing to lay against the sandy bottom of the ocean, brooding and reflecting on his failures. He'd been there so long that he was actually starting to sink into the sand he'd been laying on, and most of him was covered. What's wrong? A familiar voice echoed in his mind, and his eyes shot open. That wasn't Caius's voice. Alexis materialized before him. Are you going to keep lying there until the end of time, feeling sorry for yourself all that time? Raisin blinked and looked away. He honestly had nothing to say to the one person who'd mattered most to him. Was this her spirit? Or was he just hallucinating? Hell, for all he knew, this could just be some low blow Caius was pulling off, trying to use his memory of her somehow. Perhaps a genjutsu conferred via the Edo Tensei contract? Faye. It wasn't as if he had anything else to do at the bottom of the ocean. He'd at least hear this apparition out. Here I thought you were made of sterner stuff than this, she said, ending up in his line of sight again. I mean, I get it, this is a rough patch you're going through, but I thought you'd be done moping long before now. Are you really just going to give up? Can you honestly blame me? He asked via his mind, since talking underwater wasn't exactly viable, and it was clear that they were pretty much speaking mentally as a result anyway. It's been over 1,000 years now, Alexis, and I haven't managed to change a thing. You're wrong about that. You may have only temporarily brought peace to those worlds. You've still achieved something. Several 100,000 people have been able to live out their lifespans in peace because of your actions. You know that. So what if the peace you keep creating never lasts? A thing isn't beautiful because it lasts Raisin. If anything, the finite nature of it makes it all the more precious. That goes for both peace and for life. But what are the people I let down? What are the wars I failed to stop? What are the pain and suffering I couldn't prevent? No amount of success can ever undo my failures. I'm fighting against nature itself, Alexis, human nature. I can't win, and I can't go on like this. A sad look crossed the features of the spirit of the woman he loved as she sat next to him. You know, ever since you were pulled from the afterlife, from us, I've been watching over you, Raisin. I've been silently cheering you on as you forged ahead on your chosen path. You've been depressed before, you felt the weight of your task in full several times, but it's never stopped you from continuing. And so much good has come of it, don't you see? Even with your failures, you're a hero, Raisin, a legend in all those dimensions, and you've made a difference. But if you just keep lying there, your efforts, everything you've been through, really will be for naught. Why is it you can't snap out of your depression this time? I'm just so tired. Raisin replied wearily. Not physically, that can never happen in this body anyway, but my mind is worn. Humanity's constant repetition of its mistakes has gotten to me. Hell, it's gotten me long before this. It just took this long for me to react this way to it. Yeah, the mistakes of the past will continue to be repeated for centuries to come at least. It's just part of being human. But the future moves ever onwards, and mankind is always running for it, even if it must often backtrack. I can't bear to see you like this, so broken, when you could be a part of mankind's future until Caius and Yggdrasil finally take the hint and release you. That, where you find peace within yourself and have nothing holding you here for the jutsu to work off of. I know it's a hard road, really I do, but I also know you have it in you to walk alongside humanity as far as the road will take you. So get up, Raisin. Off your ass, face down the flawed nature of mankind, and win. As long as you are in this world, I will always watch over you until you return to me, so live, or unlive as it is, in a way that makes me and all of us here proud. We may be dead, but we're with you all the way. You're not alone, no matter how much you feel you are. Raisin closed his eyes as she faded, her words echoing in his mind. Again he wondered, was that her spirit or hallucination? After some thought, he decided it didn't truly matter as his fists clenched, the waters around and above him roiling as the gravity that made it all so heavy dissipated. The surface of the ocean came to life as forces within it were being altered. The amount of chakra needed to cause this kind of effect from so many miles down was of course enormous, and would almost immediately tire out even the most powerful of Jinchikoi Tsuri. But an Edo Tensei, with infinite endurance, was able to sustain it, shooting out of the waves, flying over the ocean as he slowly regained his bearings. Taking a deep breath, Raisin realized just how much he'd missed that action. He landed back on the nearest beach and headed back into town, his spirits lifted and renewed now. He still didn't know if the Alexis that appeared to him was real or a dream. But honestly, he decided it didn't matter. It was what he needed to hear, and he was going to start again. So what next? He asked no one in particular, feeling alive, or as close to it as an Edo Tensei could again for the first time in, well, centuries plus however long he'd spent submerged in despair and water, ungodly amounts of both actually. Extending a hand, the dimension door flared to life, and he stepped through, onto his next grand adventure. It is here that one wishes his story would come to a close, but sadly, this next wind was doomed to die down as well. He'd been surprised to learn he'd been in that ocean for a little over 50 years. To be honest, it had felt longer, but he'd chalked that up to boredom, and had thought he'd actually been brooding for closer 10 or even 20. Amazing what time, in endless isolation, could do to one's sense of time. Probably didn't do his sanity many favors either. Regardless, he was continuing on with his course for the time being, and eventually found himself returning to Zion's dimension once more, and noted two remarkable individuals, descendants of Indra and Ashura, both of them reminding him of the two in their own way. These two were Hashirama Senju and Madara Uchiha. In secret, he observed the two, noting their budding friendship and the dream they shared. A dream that actually gave him some hope for the future of this dimension. A village system like the one they envisioned would likely lead to bigger conflicts. That was true, but if it was at a greatly reduced frequency, it would be a massive step in the right direction. If these two could simply reconcile and cooperate, as Indra had failed to do with Ashura, then maybe, just maybe, it could lead to a future of yet unattained prosperity for this world. Despite his recent second wind, he remained so mentally worn that he was at this point on the very edge of deciding to help with Caius and his Divine Master's plots. Nearly 1,500 years had passed since he had been reanimated, and his sanity was stretched to its limit. Now, he was putting all of his hopes on these two. Whatever the final result of their story was, he would make his final decision based on that. As he kept a watch on them and watched the rift start to form as their clan names came to light, he resolved to see this story through to the very end, even as it was looking bad. Just what do you think you'll accomplish through those two children? Caius asked as he exited a dimension door. It's been decades since we last talked. Raisin sighed, sitting on a boulder. I was actually starting to think you were finished pestering me. I should have known it was too good to be true. You do realize that the only reason I have not snapped and killed you yet is because I still want you to send me back to the afterlife, right? Keep this up, and I'll cease to care if I get stuck on this plane of existence for good, sooner or later. More than I can count, Raisin admitted, but I will never know if I do not try something different. I killed Indra back then, thinking it was the best course of action, but I didn't realize how badly it would turn out. Now, no matter how the rift between Madara and Hashirama grows, I'm going to let them settle things on their own. If they are able to do what I didn't give their ancestors the chance to do, then maybe there's hope after all. Still clinging to naive hopes I see. Whatever, it's clear that you are clinging by a thread at any rate, so I will leave you to it, but I'm certain at least it will not happen too many more times. With that, he once again stepped through the dimension door. Raisin huffed, but he knew full well that he was already a broken man, barely able to move on as it was. One more great failure was sure to send him over the edge for good. Raisin felt like he was living in a dream as he walked through the streets of the Hidden Leaf village, despite having his hopes seeming to be doomed from the start. Especially after Azuna's death, permanently seemed to sour the ties between Hashirama and Madara. But Hashirama had persevered despite it all, and finally managed to convince Madara to let go of his grudge. Now, their dreams were coming to fruition, and Raisin finally felt as if his burden was bearable once again. Still, he made sure to keep an eye on things, using Genjutsu to conceal his Edo Tensei features, aware that Tobarama had somehow managed to recreate that jutsu of the Shikokyo clans, despite having never encountered it. One cannot be too careful after all. With any luck, he was worried about nothing, and these few steps forward would not turn into many steps backwards. Raisin levitated high above the raging battle below as he prayed to any deity that cared to listen. Madara had regressed back into being Hashirama's foe, and was now staging a massive battle that looked very uncomfortably close to his own final showdown with Zion. Madara had seized control of the mighty nine-tailed fox, and began to make his bid to defeat his old friend and rival in what was rapidly looking to deteriorate into a death match. Hashirama was utilizing Sage Mode, and matching Madara's Kekii Genkai with his own. The parallels between the battle between these two and Raisin and Zion were undeniable. But Raisin held out hope that the end result would turn out different, that Hashirama would beat sense into Madara rather than kill him, that the future of this dimension would not be destined to simply being the same old cycle of hatred and despair he himself had continued by killing Indra. So, he forced himself to continue watching as Hashirama managed to wrest the fox from Madara, and their struggle continued until they were on their very last dregs of chakra. Raisin saw the moment Hashirama made and switched out with his would clone, and held his breath as he awaited the deciding moment. And inevitably, it came when Hashirama impaled Madara from behind on his blade. And at that moment, Raisin's final dregs of hope died out along with Madara. He flew away, not even caring to note that he had not been the only unseen spectator in the fight, though a hazy Hashirama briefly spotted the other before he passed out. Raisin sat down on the edge of a cliff as he watched the sun set, reflecting on the choice he had resolved himself to. For the moment, he was wondering just why he had pinned the last of his hopes on the final outcome of the battles between those two. He supposed it was simply a sentiment of wanting to put his trust in the descendants of his closest friend. He had been let down by Indra and Ashura, but at the time, at least he'd been able to pin some of the blame upon himself rather than the human nature he had desperately wanted to keep on believing in. As such, he had paid more attention to this dimension than any one other, and that included the Elder Dimension, the one that had started out as his, Zion's, and Alexis's home. But what had happened to what would later be known as the Valley of the End had seemed to confirm something he had been growing more and more certain of as time had gone on. That whatever he did, it would simply have the same end result. He had killed Indra, rather than allowing Ashura the chance to see things through to the end with his brother. End result, dead Indra. Then, he had done the opposite with Hashirama and Madara, giving them the chance to take things to wherever they led. And despite the opposite actions, end result, dead Madara. At least with Indra, he had spared Ashura the pain of cutting his brother down himself. With that, his mind was made up. The moment he sensed that familiar presence behind him, he did not even need to turn or give the other person time to speak. "I'm in," he said, his tone like steel, cold and hard. "Let use the power of a god to change mankind's fate from one of despair to one of paradise." Caius smiled as Yggdrasil laughed in his head. Raisin looked at his hands and clenched them as life flowed through his body for the first time in over a millennia. Caius had just restored it to him, and he had forgotten how good it truly felt to have a pulse. A feeling good enough to just momentarily banish the depression he felt his failures to bring about the world be dreamed of. But that was in the past now, and now he once again felt like he had a purpose, one that might just be attainable, even if it wasn't in the way he originally hoped to. Now he'd truly given up on his original path, and he felt both liberated and saddened by it. "Well, how does it feel to be alive again after so long?" Caius asked with a smirk. "Honestly, it feels so much better than I have ever felt in so many ways," Raisin admitted as he stretched out a little. "I got way too used to not having a pulse. Indeed, having my pawns use Edo Tensei to restore me into my prime every time I die has made me intimately familiar with the different sensations that come with being alive or dead. And now let's talk business. At this point, my involvement is no longer going to be playing the role of spearheading this grand operation. That role is now yours." Raisin chuckled. "Well now, that's Kika the honor, even though I only just came on board with the whole thing. Sure you could trust me? I'm not, but Yggdrasil is, and I defer to him when he bothers to let me in on anything anyway. All right then, let me know the plan thus far." As Caius began filling him in, Raisin reflected one last time on the choice he had made. He did not know if he would succeed or not, though he was willing to bet on success. But regardless of the outcome, he knew he would not regret it. After all, even if he failed and someone actually managed to send him back to the pure world, for good this time at the very least, he would be put out of his misery. Either way was quite fine with him. This ends the tragic story of a great hero, and begins the one of a destroyed man prepared to commit any atrocity needed to achieve a sense of healing. Raisin Jinchukwaitsuri, the hero, has been all but forgotten by history, paving the way for a terrible villain to take his place. He is beyond reason, and will not stop until he achieves his goals, or is made to stop.